So my friend Sam and I went to Michigan together to do a hike. When you get there, you pull up to a nice big lodge, and then everybody puts their stuff in the lodge, and then we all hike to the campsite. And mind you, this was a very woodsy part of Michigan. And the trail that we started the hike on was only about 10 feet wide. And then around us, the entire surrounding area is pretty much all woods. See, there's guides that take you from the lodge to the campsite. And then there's a bunch of park rangers in the area just to make sure that everybody's safe and following the rules. So we get there, we drop our stuff off at the lodge, and we start this hike. And there was about 35 people in this excursion. When you start the hike, everybody's allowed to spread out a little bit, but everybody's still within 2 miles of each other. And there's always a park ranger way behind the group and way ahead of the group. So we're technically with a lot of people, but it's just me and Sam hiking alone in this particular area because we all spread out. And the lining of trees on the side of the trail is really dense. So dense that you couldn't see a deer if it was 10 feet in front of you. So as we're walking, I'm just looking into these dense trees, but eventually we hit this one gap in the trees. And that's when I saw it. And there's just this staircase that's about 100 yards into the forest, and it just sticks out completely. This thing is so out of place that it looks like it's plucked out of a mansion. It looked as if you were building a Sims house and you chose a staircase, but you just put the staircase there and then you deleted the rest of the house. And the staircase just stops. It doesn't go anywhere. It's only about 10 feet high. And when I was looking at it, I just thought to myself, like, that's a little bit weird. So Sam and I look at each other and then we look around, and none of the park rangers are around, and neither are any of the hikers. So I tell Sam, yo, let's go check this out. So we start walking towards it, and the closer that we're getting to it, it starts to feel more and more eerie, because this isn't your local forest preserve. We're in the middle of the woods. We're literally on a nature adventure, and when you see something that's so clearly man-made, it fucks with you. It's weird. Why is that here? And this staircase it's almost illuminated. It's almost glowing, and as I continue to look at it, I started to get these odd intrusive thoughts, and everything in my head is telling me to go up these stairs. So I just run up to this thing and I hop on the first stair, and I just have my hand on the railing and both of my feet on the first stair. And this is where this whole thing gets weird. The moment I stepped onto it, it almost felt as if this entire thing had a light vibration to it, and I felt this vibration on my feet and on my hand. It actually tingled a little bit, and I started kind of giggling and laughing, and I start to think, oh, this is really weird, and I start to more deeply inspect the staircase. There was carpet on the stairs, and the railings were white, and the carpet was like royal blue, and there was absolutely no debris on this staircase. There wasn't a leaf, there wasn't a sprinkle of dirt, there wasn't a bug crawling on it, there wasn't even a stray blade of grass on it. So I just keep uncontrollably giggling, and I start talking to Sam about how weird this is, and I'm just being giggly about it. But the longer that I stayed on it, the more it started to feel wrong. It almost started to feel like a trap, and part of myself, some voice in my head, is just telling me to keep going to the top. And before I climb to the top of the stairs, I look back at Sam, and Sam is looking at me like he is horrified. He's looking at me as if I have an open gash on my face. This man is clearly distressed, and it really confused me. Then I look back to the top, and I just think to myself, should I still go to the top? But then Sam reaches over and grabs me by my hood and yanks me off the stairs really hard. And I'm just laying on the floor on my back after I clap my head off the ground. And he immediately stands over me and goes, "Are you okay?" And I just respond like, "Yeah, dude, why'd you pull me so hard?" But Sam doubles down with double the intensity. He goes, "No, dude, are you okay?" And at this point, I have no idea why he's acting this way. So I ask him, "Bro, what are you talking about?" And this is the part where I'm slightly weirded out and ashamed of. From my point of view, I thought I was on the staircase just giggling, inspecting it. But he said I was having some sort of spastic standing seizure. And I don't remember that whatsoever. From my perspective, I was laughing and giggling, and the staircase was vibrating, and I was just taking in this odd, immaculate staircase in the woods. But Sam is telling me that my eyes were rolling in the back of my head and I was having a seizure. And he said that he yanked me off because it happened the second that I touched it. And I felt completely fine. I felt no type of side effect whatsoever. And Sam slowly helped me to my feet and was asking me if I was okay to walk. And he just followed up by asking me if he needed to go get help. But I just said, absolutely not, dude. I feel fine. Let's get out of here. So we hustle back to the trail, and nobody's on it. Nobody's to the left or right yet. So we're all good. Nobody saw that we went off trail. Nobody saw what we just did. So we talk about it for a little bit while we're hiking, and I have to really convince him that I'm fine. And I do convince him, but he does go, "Bro, that was super weird." He's still a little iffy about it. But we just keep going so we can make it to the campsite. And when we finally finish this hike and we get to the campsite, everybody's already there. And we're just thinking it's all good. Nobody saw anything. Nobody noticed anything. And by the time we got there, food was already being made because it was a really long hike. Everybody was tired and hungry. So we ate, and then there came a point where everybody starts dispersing. Everybody's just getting their tents ready and getting ready for bed. But I noticed this one park ranger just looking at me from across the campsite with this sense of concern. And I could tell this guy is definitely looking at me. So I look at Sam. I'm like, "Bro, did you tell this guy?" And I'm feeling a little bit embarrassed. So I actually go ahead and say, "Dude, did you tell this guy? And Sam replies like, no, I didn't tell anybody. So I start thinking to myself, okay, if he didn't tell him, why is this guy looking at me funny? But anyway, Sam goes to the tent because he needs to get our stuff ready for bed, and then I go to the bathroom before going to the tent. And as I'm making my way to the tent, this park ranger pulls up to me and starts isolating me. And to be honest, he kind of looked pissed, and he just looks at me right in my face, right in my eyes, and just says, please tell me you didn't touch the stairs. Immediately I start apologizing, and I tell him I didn't mess with it, I didn't break anything, I promise. Because I'm thinking that these might be some type of national landmark that you're not supposed to touch. And the park ranger replies to me, it's not about the stairs, I don't care if you damaged them. Did anything happen to you? So then I start to think that he's concerned about my health because maybe he saw me have a seizure, so I start trying to downplay it. So I tell him like, dude, I threw a little bit of a fit, but I'm fine. Because at that moment, I thought that he had a kid that was a liability on his campsite. But then he starts to seem upset that I'm okay. And then he follows up by saying, if something didn't happen to you, something is going to happen to somebody else. And I thought that was very weird. I didn't think that that's where he was taking this. And then he proceeds to start guilting me, and he tells me that there's women and children here. So if something didn't happen to you, something might happen to one of them. This guy's talking to me as if he's absolutely positive something horrible is going to happen just because I touched this national landmark staircase. So then I start pressing him a little bit because I'm like, why are you acting like these stairs are this ominous thing? So then I ask him, why would you take us all on a hike next to this super dangerous staircase? And then he starts to explain a little bit as if I should be in the know about these ominous stairs. And he starts saying stuff like they pop up randomly and they disappear randomly. And immediately I'm like, this guy's absolutely tripping. This dude's super weird. He's making things up and he's trying to guilt me about touching this random staircase, making it seem like what I did is going to make something horrible happen. So I think to myself, what a weird dude. I gotta get away from this deranged park ranger. So I just get out of there and I continue heading towards my tent to get some sleep. So I just left that weirdo by himself because I needed some sleep and I wanted to enjoy this trip. And the next day when I woke up, wouldn't you know it, everything was completely fine. And we had such a good time at this campsite the next day. There's a great lake over there, so we're spending time in the water. Nothing weird's going on. Everything is completely okay. So I start thinking that park ranger was tripping. I was right. He was super weird. We're fine. Everything's completely fine. And by the end of the day, I had completely forgot about what happened the day before. And Sam seemed to be completely over it too. So we get some sleep because we spent the entire day outside. We're exhausted. So we hit the hay early, but at about 4 a.m., about an hour from when the sun is coming up, we kind of hear a little bit of a ruckus on the outside of the tent. And there was just this kid, just like this young boy crying outside by himself. So naturally we're like, oh, what's going on? Let's hop out of the tent. Let's check on this kid. But as we're coming over to him, there's already some other people around him. And apparently the word going around is that this kid's mom is gone, their tent's gone, all of their belongings are gone. So people start questioning this kid and they're like, yo, where's your mom? And this little kid just points towards the tree line. This kid's mom packed up all of their stuff according to him, and she went on her own hike in the middle of the night. So I'm like, wow, mom of the year. And from that moment, we quickly formed a search party, and everybody in the campsite is coming together to look for this lady. And as Sam and I are walking towards this big group of people that are getting ready to go on this search, that same park ranger walked by me and Sam and said some slick shit to me as he was walking by. And he goes, you better hope we find her, because if we don't, it's on you. And at this point, I'm pissed because who does he think he is telling me this weird stuff about these random stairs and then blaming me for this irresponsible mom packing up all of her stuff in the middle of the night? But he said it as he's walking by, so I didn't even get to rebuttal. So Sam looks at me and goes, why would he say something like that to you? Because of course, why would somebody blame somebody for some random person getting up and packing up their stuff in the middle of the night? Why would he blame that on me? So I fill Sam in with this ridiculous mythology about this random staircase that park ranger guilted me about. And then Sam's face is expressing to me that he believes the park ranger and not me, because I was being completely sarcastic about it. But Sam is looking at me dead serious. And Sam looks at me and goes, to be honest, dude, I think we should probably check by the stairs. And luckily the search party is kind of directed towards the area where we encountered this staircase. And we also didn't think this lady was going to go so far off trail. But everybody else was thinking maybe she went back to the lodge. Maybe she was done with the campsite. I don't know why she would leave her kid, but maybe she was done here. And initially, as we're looking around, there's no sign of this lady. We don't see anything that would suggest to us that there was somebody lugging all of their equipment through the woods in this area. So we're just walking down the trail that we came to the campsite on. And of course, when we get to this clearing where the staircase was, we see this lady. She's just sitting crisscross applesauce exactly where the stairs were. And if I'm being honest with you, at this point, I was a little bit freaked out. But I'm also like, of course this lady's sitting right here. She in on it too? Like, what's going on here? Why is this lady sitting crisscross exactly where these stairs were, and the stairs are nowhere in sight. And then my mind just starts going in circles, just absolutely spiraling, thinking, why am I in this situation where this weird deranged park ranger is in cahoots with this weird deranged mom, and she's just sitting in this spot where this weird immaculate staircase was, but now the stairs are magically not there. So Sam and I jog up to her, and there was already 3 people there tending to her. And as we're approaching this woman, I see that she looks horrible. And mind you, she's only been gone for like an hour and a half tops, and her clothes are completely tattered. This woman looked like she got dragged through the forest. This chick looked like Bear Grylls after a week in Siberia by herself eating earthworms, and she looked extremely deprived and drawn out. She looked as if she didn't have any water or food for days, and her eyes were giving psychosis. So we get up to her, and the people that are around her are already asking her questions. And one lady's asking her, like, what happened? Are you okay? And this lady was just kind of rocking back and forth. And then she responds and says, what took you guys so long? And the guy that's there says, don't worry, it's only been an hour, you're safe now. And this lady just mumbles out, it's been days. And right in that moment, I know that this woman's crazy. And they're still questioning her, but she's not even answering their questions at this point. She's just kind of talking. And I only caught a few sentences of what she was saying. The only thing I heard was, it told me you'd come. It told me I'd be safe by the stairs. And I'm like, are you kidding me? The stairs aren't even here anymore. How does this woman know that there were stairs here? And to be completely candid with you, at this point, I fully believe the park ranger. Like 100%, whatever he was saying, he was right. And I feel so guilty at this point. I'm the reason that this woman's in this deranged fit, just sitting crisscross applesauce in this clearing, looking absolutely crazy. And the reality of this situation is just hitting me all at once. So we get this lady to her feet, we get her up, and we're like, okay, we just got to get her back to the campsite because we can't take her to the lodge. We can't take her to the hospital. We just have to get back to the campsite because that's where everybody is. And not to mention, that's where her kid is. So we get this lady up and we just start walking her back. And it's only like the 5 of us. It's me, Sam, and the 3 people that found her. And as we're walking back, me and Sam are a little bit ahead of them because they found her. They've been consoling her, so we don't want to mess with the morale that they've built with her. So we just continue to walk back, and this woman's just rambling to herself in this really light voice. Just, it said this, it said that. And the people around her are just trying to console her, and they're just like, hey, it's gonna be okay. Your son's fine, he's at the campsite. And she just goes in a really light voice, son? And even though that was a little bit weird, everybody's still being very gentle with her. She's clearly been through a lot, so nobody's like, oh, she doesn't know her son. This lady doesn't even know her own name. And let me tell you, her eyes are absolutely deranged. And the man just goes, yes, your son. They sent all of the kids on an excursion, so nobody be worried that you're gone. We promise you everything is okay. We're gonna make sure that you're okay. And this woman just goes, oh, what's his name? And the guy goes, oh, your son? Your son's name is Nick. This man is just giving her the answers that she needs to get back to reality. And to be honest, he was doing a great job consoling her. But as we're walking back to this campsite, the guilt in me is just rising. And all I could think about is how badly I want to apologize to this park ranger because honestly, I was being super disrespectful. I was completely brushing him off and running his name through the mud, but everything that he said was going to happen is happening. So once we get back to the campsite, it was a pretty long walk, so I had a lot of time to think about what I was going to say to this man. And right when I see him, he sees the woman, and I swear to God, this man exhales for the first time since I met him. Like as if he's so relieved to see that she's alive. And I just march right up to him man to man, and I just start profusely apologizing. And I'm like, dude, I fully believe you. I'm so sorry that I did this. Please just tell me what I could do to help. And he looks at me seriously because he could hear it in my voice that I'm being sincere. And he gives me kind of one of those half apologies. He was just recognizing that I was putting an effort to mend our relationship. So he just kind of apologizes for being so hard on me as he's walking away. And he just kind of sighs out, man, I just needed you to know how serious the situation was. It's my bad for being so hard on you. I just hate finding dead kids, man. And that hit my heart like a bomb because he knew that something horrible was going to happen. And he didn't know if it was going to be an adult or a kid. And he said it as if it had happened before and he's had to find kids like that. And the idea of finding a child in the same state that that woman was in was absolutely heartbreaking. So at that point, we're in full get this lady better mode before her kid gets back from that excursion. So we clean her up, we get her food, we get her water, and we get her clean clothes. We just do our best to clean her up a bit. We just wanted to do everything that we could so when this kid came back from this excursion, he wouldn't have to see his mom in that type of state. So we're just sitting around the campsite, she's all cleaned up, she's looking pretty good, and she's just sitting there with her hands folded in her waist and her knees touching each other. She was just sitting very delicately, and she's just sitting there looking around, just kind of taking everything in. She still seems a little spacey, and she's not really talking to anybody. She's still just mumbling. She's still just mumbling to herself, but she seems a little bit more put together, I guess a little bit more calm, and she seems to be pretty happy to be back at the campsite. And the kids start to come back from their excursion, and the group is kind of expecting this like reunion moment. Everybody's expecting this warm embrace, like we're all happy and everything's okay. And when the kids walk up, the son walks up to the end of the campsite, and everybody's looking at her and just kind of goes silent for this warm embrace. And this woman looks up and could see that everybody's looking at her, and it's almost as if she took that as a cue, and she looks around and scans the kids and just lets out in a very gentle voice, "Nick." And then we look at the kid, and this kid is scowling at his mom. It was as if he was looking at a stranger that he doesn't like. So he just gestures to her, "What?" And then she stops scanning all of the kids, and then she locks in on him because he replied. And she almost stands up as if she's ex machina, just really robotically and gently. She's moving around with no wasted movements, and she just gently lifts her hands up as if she's inviting him to give her a hug. But instead of running up to his mother and giving her a hug, he starts backing up. And this kid is just like half crying, and he's just whimpering out, "That's not my mom, I want my dad." And this kid just turns around and runs off, and I'm looking at the group because it's just so awkward and so tense. That moment did not unfold like we were all expecting it to, and everybody just kind of has this sad look on their face. But I just continue to scan, and I find the park ranger. He's looking at this woman as if his world is falling apart, and at that point he is more anxious than I've seen him this entire time. So the women at the campsite immediately go up to the mom to start trying to console her, and they're telling her that kids react to trauma in different ways, and they're just like, "Don't worry about it, he'll get over it, it's gonna be okay." But this lady's face is expressionless, as if she's not even hearing these women, and she's just looking right past them as if her eyes are just following the kid. And everybody else in the campsite just starts dispersing because this is the most awkward, tension-filled moment that I've ever been in. Literally everybody's leaving except for the park ranger, and I see him just talking to the camp guide, so I whip around to try to eavesdrop on what he's saying, and he's just telling the camp guide to call the father to pick them both up tomorrow. And I could kind of tell that this camp guide isn't in the know, because the way that the park ranger is saying it, the way he's presenting it to this camp guide, is as if that this woman isn't fit to drive. And the camp guide is talking to the ranger as if he's not aware of the gravity of the situation. So the camp guide just agrees and walks off, and I'm just still standing there right behind him. And the ranger just barks out, "Doug, come here." And it was one of those moments like when you're sitting in the back of a classroom just messing around while your teacher's writing on the whiteboard and they just call out your name without even looking at you. It immediately sent chills down my spine. So I just walk up and I'm like, "What do you want me to do?" I'm just in full soldier mode at this point because this is completely my fault, and I want to do anything that I could possibly do to fix it. And the ranger just starts speaking very firmly while his eyes are just completely locked in on this mom. He's not even looking at me. He just goes, "I'll keep my eyes on her and you take care of the kid. The father can't get here until tomorrow. By no means does she get to interact with that kid until he gets here. Do you understand me?" And I just go, "Got it." So I just beeline towards the kid, and mind you, I'd worked with kids for years. At this point, I know how to build a comfortable relationship with a kid, so I'm not worried about it. So when I get to Nick, he's just playing bags by himself, and I just walk up and I invite him into a game, and I just go, "Best 2 out of 3," and I just start cracking jokes. It's easy to make kids laugh. It's easy to make kids forget what's going on, and we're having a pretty good time until some of the other kids walk over, and one of the kids just walks up and puts both of his hands over his face like this and just goes, "Are you gonna cry again?" and starts laughing and runs off. And I look at Nick and I'm just like, "Yo, what was that about?" And this little Nick looks at me and goes, "I told him who my mom left with last night." So naturally I go, "Who did your mom leave with?" And Nick says to me, "I saw her holding hands with a man when she walked into the forest last night." So I ask him, "What did this man look like?" And Nick just holds his hand up while he's rubbing the front of his thumb, and he goes, "His face looked like this." I have no idea what that means, so I immediately start asking follow-up questions. What color was his skin? What was he wearing? And Nick just goes, "He was pale." So I follow up and ask him, did this man have any distinct facial features? Did he have bushy eyebrows, bright eyes, a big nose? And this kid goes, "He didn't have any of those. His face was smooth." So apparently there's some weirdo in a mask drawing women into the woods in the middle of the night. And I'm internally freaking out, but I don't want this kid to see that. So I start to reassure him, trying to let him know that he's safe. And I'm just telling him that we're not going to let that man come back. We're not going to let him hurt him. I just want to keep distracting this kid and just try to give him a fun day. But I need to go report this back to Sam, so I make an excuse to go back to our tent. And I just give Sam a nod like, "Yo, we gotta talk." And the second I get to the tent and I zip it closed with just me and Sam inside, I'm about to start spewing all of this new information that I just learned. But Sam cuts me off. I try to say like, "Yo, I have so much to tell you," but he goes, "Me first." And he kind of guiltily says, "I've been spying on the mom." Immediately I go, "What, bro, what are you talking about?" And he goes, "Listen, this is gonna sound really weird, but I was in a group with her." And you know when everybody in a group starts laughing at a joke, and then one person is left laughing at the end after everybody else stops? Well, that happened just a couple minutes ago, and she was the last one laughing. And I looked at her, and for a split second, she was still laughing, but her mouth was closed and she wasn't moving. And nobody else in the group saw it but me. It was a split second, but I caught it. And it irked me so bad that I haven't been able to leave this woman alone for the rest of the day. So I've just been spying on her this entire time. I'm not fully sold on this idea, so I ask a follow-up, "What else has she been doing?" And Sam goes, "Dude, everything that she's been doing is performative. When nobody nobody's around her, she sits motionless. And I'm not talking about relaxing, I'm talking about this woman is not moving. And I go, what do you mean if nobody's around her? You've been following her around. And Sam holds up a pair of binoculars, a little bit proud, as if he's trying to show his commitment to his spy work. And he goes, I've been watching her with these. And I watched her for 30 minutes straight through these. And I swear to you, she did not move, she did not blink, she was not breathing. This woman looked like an empty vessel. And then when somebody would walk near her, she would start blinking. And she'd wrench out a weird, awkward smile. And she would start just shifting her eyes around and swiveling her head as if she was taking in nature. And she would start fake breathing. Imagine a mime pretending that he's breathing. And then the second the person would walk away, she would just sit there motionless again. I swear to you, it is the most bizarre thing I've ever seen in my life. And Sam starts looking around as if he's questioning himself, as if he's not sure if he should say this next thing to me. And I'm just like, bro, come on, spit it out, what? And then Sam says, do you remember how she was saying it was telling her to do this, it was telling her to do that? I don't think it was telling her to do anything. I think she is it. And I don't even get to fill Sam in about the smooth face man before Sam goes, we need to tell the ranger right now. So I just oblige and follow him out of the tent. We just pull up on the ranger and Sam just starts pouring his heart out about all of the evidence that he's found throughout the day. And the ranger's just standing there listening patiently and nodding. And then right as Sam finishes, the ranger just goes, don't worry boys, we're on the same page. There's no chance I'm letting that thing leave my park. He said that thing. Immediately my head goes, is she possessed? Is it in her? Or is the whole her, the entire thing, not her? And the ranger goes on to say, you guys have no idea how lucky we are that that kid doesn't trust her, but it is absolutely vital that we keep them separate and we don't give her an opportunity to manipulate him. You guys need to understand that that thing has one motive, and it's to get out of the park. And the only way that it could get out of the park is if it manipulates a loved one to escort it out of the park. We just need to keep doing what we're doing and keep them separate until the dad gets here in the morning. He goes, I already told the camp guide to send all of the kids paddleboarding the entire day, so this thing has no chance to talk to him during the day. So you guys need to monitor her during the day and get that kid to his tent the moment he gets back. And then we're home free once we get that kid to his father. So before I even get the chance to digest that new information, me and Sam just hustle back to the common area to keep an eye on her. We just want to make sure she's not running off or something. And when we get back there, we see that she's not dormant anymore. She's a little bit more active. And she's just walking around the campsite asking different groups of campers if anybody's seen her son. And all of the campers are still being kind of nice and gentle with her because they all know what happened. And they're just telling her that all the kids went paddleboarding, he'll be back, he'll be fine. But by the time she asks the same thing for the third time to each group, you could see that all of the campers are getting a little bit annoyed and a little bit frustrated with her. And she goes back up to this one group to ask them for like the fourth or fifth time. And one burly country dude just kind of blurts out, kind of joking, that dad can't get here soon enough, am I right? And then his wife or girlfriend just hits him on the shoulder for being rude. And she just goes, honey, be patient, the dad's gonna be here in the morning. And then it starts repeating what that woman said as if it's taking in that new information. And its gears are turning, just trying to formulate a new question to ask them. And then it just repeats what she says 3 times. My husband's gonna be here in the morning. My husband's gonna be here in the morning. My husband's gonna be here in the morning. And then she looks back at the group and goes, do you know what time my husband's gonna be here in the morning? And the burly country guy just goes, no ma'am. And she walks away, but it was a little bit more frantic this time. Her movement got a little bit more irregular. The only way I know how to explain it is that it went from more active to erratic, as if it knew it was crunch time, as if it knew that it only had one day to convince this kid to take it home. And she just keeps walking from group to group, repeating herself over and over. And it just kept walking from group to group, repeating itself. Do you know what time my husband's gonna be here? Do you know what time my husband's gonna be here? And it literally walked around asking the same question, getting the same answers until the sun started to come down. And by that time, the kids started to come back from the paddleboarding excursion. And we're coming up on dinner time when everybody meets in the common area of the campsite to eat. And we obviously can't keep a mom separate from her kid without the other campers getting suspicious. So Sam and I go to meet up with Nick before he even re-enters the campsite, because we just want to avoid this situation entirely. If we could just get through this part, get him in his tent, then we're home free. We got the kid, he's safe, we're all good. So we're just assuming that it is going to follow the herd to go get food, and we can just go meet Nick at the edge of the campsite, get him to his tent, and we're all good. So I just have Sam go with the herd and make us a couple plates of food while I go get Nick to escort him to his tent. But within the couple minutes that Sam is getting our food ready and I'm getting Nick to the tent, it must have slipped away. Because once I get to Nick's tent and he unzips it, it immediately pops out and grabs him by the arms and just says, "You're not gonna leave without mommy when daddy gets here." I wish I could say I did something heroic, but I just let out a guttural and I just double hand grip Nick's string backpack because I didn't want to risk touching this thing, and I just swung him behind me really hard because I wasn't trying to get into a tug of war with this thing. I just wanted to rip him out of her grips right away. And when I tell you, in this moment I was mortified because I was the only thing standing between it and Nick, and I just felt the fight or flight creeping in. And I had to remind myself in that moment, this is not a woman, and if it takes a step forward towards this child, I'm not flying. And I'm just standing there, and the only words that I could get out are, "You good?" And then it just says, kind of softly and menacingly, "We need alone time, don't make me scream." So I bark at Nick to go get the ranger, because the only thing that I want in this moment is an authority figure here that isn't me, because I have no idea what this thing is capable of. But the ranger seems to know. So Nick books it, and I'm just standing there frozen, staring at this thing. And I'm just waiting for it to scream to make me look like an absolute creep in front of this entire campsite. But it's just standing there for a few moments with its eyes darting around as if it's searching for something inside of its head, almost as if it's trying to remember something. And just like that, it seemed as if it found it and its eyes lock onto me, and I damn near brace for impact because I think it's gonna let out this horrific scream, and I'm absolutely not looking forward to the scene that this thing is about to make. But when this thing finally explodes into a scream, I'm standing there a little bit confused, but a little bit relieved, because I realized in that moment that this thing only mimics sounds. It clearly has no gauge of human inflection or social cues, because the scream that it didn't match the situation it was trying to create. I was expecting it to scream in horror as if it was accusing me of attacking it, but instead it screamed like one of those little girls that just screams about anything while she's playing. So I kind of peek out of the corner of my eye just to see the camp's reaction, and I get even more relieved because I see a few of them rolling their eyes and everybody just kind of scoffing at how annoying she is. Because at this point, after her asking them the same questions all day, they seem so fed up with this lady's behavior. But the slight relief that I had disappeared immediately when I looked back at it, because it abruptly stopped screaming because it could tell that it didn't work, and it just tucked its chin a little bit, and it just started looking at me up out of the top of its eyes as if it was honing in on me now. And the adrenaline in my chest just starts pumping because I don't know if this thing's about to run away or if it's going to start attacking me. And for a moment it almost looked as if it was happy about how scared I was, and it gave a little bit of a smirk before it replied, "You good?" in my voice with its mouth closed. It said it exactly how I just said it to them. It did it as if it was threatening me that if I get in the way of her leaving with Nick, it's capable of mimicking me and leaving with Sam. And that moment felt like it lasted forever. But finally I feel somebody grab my shoulder, and I look back and it's the ranger. And he has this level of confidence on his face as if he's about to handle this situation, which made me feel so much safer. And he loudly said, so this thing could hear it, "Don't let this thing intimidate you. It can only take your form if it could put you in a trance. And the only way it could put you in a trance is if you're inebriated. Did you have anything to drink tonight?" And I just shake my head no. So he replies to me, "Then you're good." Then he looks at it and goes, "Go to sleep. Your husband's gonna be here in the morning." Almost like he's brushing it off. And this thing's eyes light up as if it liked what he just said. And it almost scurries back into the tent. And as we're walking away from the tent, I hear this thing repeating itself almost joyfully. "My husband's gonna be here in the morning. My husband's gonna be here in the morning." So we're walking away from the tent, and I see Sam walking up to us with plates of food. And the look on his face is like, "Hey dude, what happened?" And the ranger tells me and Sam to come eat dinner with him because we deserve a little bit of an explanation. And as we're walking with him a little bit away from the other campers where he usually eats dinner, I see Nick in between two camp guides, and he's completely safe, so I'm a little bit more relaxed at this point. And the questions just start flowing in my head that I'm gonna ask this guy because I have 1,000. And when we sit down, the first question that comes to my mind is, "So you know what that thing is?" And he replies, Guys, very quick, I just wanted to let you know that I came out with a little bit of merchandise. We get tons of views on every single week. We get over 100,000 views, and I don't really know if that's going to translate into people buying merchandise. I don't really care if it does, but we've seen some comments where some people were asking for ways to support the channel, and a lot of people were asking for cool graphic tees with shirts that represent the stories, so we came out with this one. This is just a really nice black t-shirt from a really good distributor, really soft, nice garment. We don't cut any corners, and the graphic graphic embodies the Skinwalker Ranch story. I hope you guys like it. We're really optimistic that the support is there, but it's okay if it isn't. At the end of the day, we just really hope that you like these stories and these videos, and we're going to continue delivering those. So if you want a piece of merch, go to DougieCorrado.com and grab one from the pre-sale. We're only going to sell these for about 2 weeks, and we're never going to sell these again. So if you want these, go ahead and grab them at DougieCorrado.com. If you don't, just enjoy the rest of the show. So you know what that thing is? And he replies, kind of. All the rangers just call them mimics. I've heard plenty of stories about them, but I've only had one other personal experience with it. My working theory is that interacting with the stairs almost calls to them, like it's some personal hotspot, because incidents like this are few and far between. But whenever the stairs are involved, it feels like it attracts everything. We're very fortunate that we got a lucky draw with the mimic, because it could have been something so much worse. So my brain immediately goes, if we're lucky with this thing, what else is in this park? But the ranger just keeps going on with his story before I'm able to spew all of my questions. And he just goes, what we do know is that these things target people that are under the influence. The last time I had to deal with one, it tricked some hippie guy that was here by himself. And this guy was here basically just toking the whole time. So he was an easy target, and I was the one that saw him walk into the forest with it. I thought about chasing them and intervening, but the moment they hit the tree line, it's almost as if they dissolved into the woods. And in my head, I'm thinking, that's exactly what Nick told me. So this ranger is definitely onto something. So the ranger goes on and says, when the hippie wandered back into camp, he knew that it definitely wasn't the hippie, because this guy was now talking super formally. And this hippie was the opposite of formal. Everything that guy did was super laid back and super chill hippie vibe. And when he came back through the woods, speaking very eloquently, asking very specific questions in a very monotone way, he knew something was off. The hippie started walking around the camp asking everybody who he came there with. And he was trying to figure out if he had any loved ones or family nearby. But before this guy had got taken by this thing, he had been very open with me and everybody else at the camp. He said that he was a traveling nomad and he had nobody significant in his life in general. And when all of the other campers started their hike back to the lodge, he stayed at the campsite. And when I told him that I couldn't leave the campsite without him and that he was my responsibility to take him back to the lodge, he said that he can't leave the campsite without somebody that loves him. And it started to get really frantic and started pleading with me to call somebody for him. But I told him that he didn't even put anybody on his emergency contact form, so there's nobody to call. And I remember seeing the defeat on this thing's face. And the last thing that it said to me was I ran out of time. Then he backed up towards the tree line, and it was almost as if his face dissolved. And he just shriveled up and became part of the forest. And then 2 days later, we randomly found the hippie at the bottom of a pit about a mile away from the campsite. And the autopsy said that he died of starvation about 2 days earlier. So it's my assumption that these things can't survive without a living host. They trick you, then they trap you, then they mimic you. And the entire time they try to convince somebody to take them home. And it seems as if they can't leave the park unless somebody that loves them escorts them out. And the way that this lady has been acting almost confirms that with me. Because it seems as if she or it is abiding by the same rules. But if we let this thing out of the park and it gets to a city or a town, we have no idea how much damage this thing could do. So I finally cut him off and I ask him, how are we going to get the husband to leave this lady? And the ranger just confidently says, let me handle that. We just need to focus on getting Nick to the lodge and trapping that thing here so we could focus on finding the real her while she's still alive. And Sam chimes in and he says, we're going to extract Nick at 0600. We're going to make the handoff with the father within the hour. And then we're going to orchestrate a grid-style search party starting east of the campsite when Nick leaves. So that gives us 6 hours of sleep and approximately 10 hours of search time before the sun goes down tomorrow. Sam kind of flipped the switch and started taking control of the situation. Because although Sam is a really fun-loving guy, at his core, he's a tactical-minded, well-trained Army Ranger. The man was an Army Ranger for about 10 years. So all it took for him was a confirmation of his suspicions. And the Army Ranger inside of him immediately came out. So then the Park Ranger piles on top of that. And he goes, we're coming up on day 3. If we don't find her tomorrow, we might not find her alive. Then he dismisses us and tells us to get some rest. So me and Sam just clear our plates really quick to get some calories. Then we hustle back to our tent so we could get as much sleep as possible. But once we got back to our tent, I ended up just laying there with my eyes open. I was having a really hard time getting to sleep. I just kept thinking about it, repeating my voice back to me, and I couldn't seem to get that image out of my head. My mind was going in loops and loops and loops, hearing my own voice being said to me. I can't express to you how eerie it is to hear your own voice when it's not coming from a recording. And it was as if Sam knew exactly what I was thinking because he just blurted out porcupine. So I look over to him and I'm like, what are you talking about? And he just goes, that's our safe word, porcupine. If at any point we get split up or something crazy happens, you just ask me the safe word, it's porcupine. That's how you know it's me. And then he just follows up and he just goes, got it? And I'm like, got it. So having a plan set to recognize each other gives me just enough relief to fall asleep, but it sure did not stop me from having nightmares all night. So I abruptly wake up the next morning right as the sun is coming up, and I saw that Sam was already getting ready. So I jumped up to catch up to him, because every moment that we're still here, that woman is out in the woods still suffering. And I'm getting ready like I'm late for the first day of school, and the ranger's already at the edge of the campsite. He's with a really groggy Nick, having Nick climb into one of those off-roading golf carts. Thank God he had a vehicle, because I was not looking forward to a 15-mile hike there and back, and then a search party after that. So me and Sam just jog up and we hop into the back seat quietly, because we're just trying to execute this mission and get it over with. When the ranger turns the engine on, we just hear a zip, and it comes storming out of its tent, running towards the golf cart. We start driving away, and it's a little bit of a downhill to start. So once you're about 30 feet away, you can't see over the ridge to the campsite anymore, but you could see it storm up to the edge of the trail and just stand there. It looked offended, misled, and angry that we lied to it. It stood dead center of the trail for about 5 seconds, and then it just turned and sprinted into the tree line. Sam saw it too, and he goes, where do you think it went? And the ranger cuts us off and says, keep your head on a swivel, it's getting desperate. So we're driving for about 10 minutes, and the trail gets more and more narrow as we go. There's about a 5-mile stretch where the trees are just about 3 feet away from each side of the golf cart, and for the next 5 miles, we found out where it went. It was periodically popping out of the tree line, screaming things at Nick. And it was screaming at Nick, mommy loves you, take me home, where's your father? And she was just screaming and crying. And it started screaming, please don't leave me. It never made an attempt on the vehicle though. It just seemed as if it was tracking us and following us, and continuing to try to manipulate Nick. But let me tell you, it never got less creepy that it was always ahead of us. So we finally are coming up on the lodge, and we see the father standing outside of his truck right in front of the lodge. And he was looking pretty confused and frustrated. So we tactically pull up next to the truck to try to get Nick into his vehicle as quickly as possible. But the second we stop the vehicle, Nick jumps out and runs towards his dad crying. And he's just saying, I want to go home. And his dad just gives him a quick pat on the back and goes, don't worry, buddy, I'm taking you home. Then he tells Nick to wait in the car and just goes, I gotta talk to these guys real quick. So we walk up to him, and he says to us very frustratedly, are you guys gonna tell me why I had to rush here this morning? And I have no idea what we're going to tell this guy and how we're going to rush him to leave. But the ranger quickly replies that every child on his campsite needs to be accompanied by a responsible adult. And as the father is asking where Nick's mother is, it pops out of the woods, hustling up to us. And it's just announcing to the crowd, finally my husband's here. And it's walking up to him, trying to approach him, maybe looking for a hug or an embrace. And the husband puts his hand up and starts backing up towards his truck. And he goes, ashamed, I cannot believe you right now. And it replies in a kind of sad voice, I just want my husband to take me home. And the husband talks over it and goes, Kristen, don't play that shit. We've been divorced for over a year. And he starts scanning it. He's looking it up and down. And this man has disgust on his face. And then I take a look at it and I realize that it's looking really drawn out. It looks sleep deprived and exhausted. And in that moment, I couldn't help but think, is this thing a mirror of the real Kristen? But the husband cuts off my train of thought and says, you promised me you were done drinking. I gave you 1 week alone with Nick and you couldn't manage to keep yourself together. And this thing gets a little whimper out and it just says, can you please just drive me home? And he goes, absolutely not. Pull yourself together and take yourself home. He storms into his truck and he drives off. And I'm standing there. I cannot believe that he did our job for us. And for a split second, it felt like we won before it turned around and took off sprinting into the trees. So me, Sam, and the ranger all look at each other and we have this moment of recognition that it is trying to beat us back to the camp so it could switch into somebody else before we can get back there. And that brief moment of relief immediately turned into the most bumpy, chaotic, off-roading ride I've ever experienced in my life, because we have no idea how long it's going to take for it to get back there. But we know that even at our top speed, it's going to take us 40 minutes. And the ride back was far too loud for us to talk or have any type of dialogue or conversation. So I'm just in my head thinking, what are we going to do with this thing while we go search for the real Kristen? Because what's the point point in finding the real Kristen if we come back and it's swapped out and has a new host? And we have to go through the same exact process over again. So when we pull up to the campsite, I'm damn near expecting to see this thing dragging somebody by the feet into the woods, simply because of how desperate it looked while it was running away. But to my surprise, the campsite was completely vacant, and Sam just blurts out, "Yo, where is everyone?" And the ranger fills us in that he had the camp guides take everybody onto the pontoons for a fishing excursion, so nobody was at the campsite for it to prey on while we were gone. But they might get back before we can find the real Kristen, so we have to make this thing come on the search with us. I butt in right away and I just go, "How do you expect us to manage that?" And the ranger looks at me in the face and says, "By any means necessary." So we hop off the golf cart and we start walking towards the campsite with a purpose. We're assuming that it's in the campsite hiding somewhere, but to our surprise, it's just sitting in the middle of the campsite on one of the logs by the bonfire, and it's just rocking back and forth. I could see something on the log next to it, and as we get closer, I could see that it's 3 crows standing on the log next to it. And these crows are just standing there, perfectly perched, with exact spacing between them, as if they're in formation. And as we're walking up, I'm mentally preparing to have to fight this thing and drag it into the forest with us. And I could tell by the way everyone's walking, none of us have any idea how this interaction is going to go. But I know that I'm prepared to do anything that I have to do to save the real Kristen. So we get up to it and the park ranger sternly says to it, "You're coming with us right now." And it just kept rocking back and forth. And then it mumbled back to us, "Do you know what the crows mean?" Then the park ranger just cuts that thing off and says, "You're coming with us to find that woman right now." And it looks up at us, almost excited, with a very optimistic look on its face. And it stood up really delicately and starts walking towards the tree line. And it just goes, "I'd love to go in the forest with you." Sam immediately takes charge of the situation again and says, "Let's do a triangle formation." He points at the ranger and he says, "You're at the point, and then me and Doug will stay on either side of her. Doug will scan the right, I'll scan the left, and it has to stay in the middle of all of us, so it can't go anywhere." So me and the ranger just both nod in confirmation, agreeing with Sam's plan. And the mimic just seems so okay with this idea and just takes its place in the middle of the formation. It made me so uncomfortable with how willing it was to just do this. But we don't really have a choice at this point to question it. We just have to go looking. So we're just in formation and we head straight to the tree line. So I'm just trying to do my job and I'm scanning the right for clues. But I can't help but to keep looking back and checking on it just to make sure that it's not getting any crazy ideas. We're walking for about 3 minutes, and when I peek back at it for like the 5th time, I noticed something different about it. I wanted to get a better look at it, so I speed up for a second to get more parallel with it, and its face looked more vibrant and full. The bags under its eyes were gone, its posture was perfect, and it almost gave off an aura. And the aura that it was giving off was eerily similar to the glow that the stairs had. And the forest is super dense. The canopy is so thick that not a lot of sunlight gets through the trees. And Sam and the ranger look completely shaded to the point where I could barely see their facial expressions. But it looked like the sunlight was hitting it. It didn't look like it was in the shadow of the forest. It was completely illuminated. And that made me internally panic because I already didn't like how happy it was to come in here. I really didn't like that once we were in there, it started thriving. So I look away from it to really start looking for clues because I want to get out of here as soon as I possibly can. But everything about the forest just starts blending together, and I start to feel this sense of disorientation and just dizziness. But I just try to focus on the trees, just looking for clues. But before I knew it, it felt as if so much time had passed and I just felt so out of touch with the situation. It felt like I entered this infinite loop of paranoia, and I realized that I hadn't checked on it or anybody else in the group for what felt like hours. So when I finally pull myself away from the haze, I pan back to the group, and the park ranger is standing where it was, and it is at the head of the group, leading where we're going. And me, Sam, and the ranger are just standing single file behind it, following it blindly. And I'm trying to grasp when that switch happened, and I just can't seem to put a finger on it. I don't remember getting into this single file line. And I realized that Sam and the ranger haven't even realized that this switch happened yet. And I'm not even looking for clues at this point. I'm just disoriented and confused. I could barely even remember why we're out there until I see the park ranger shake his head really hard, as if he's shaking the trance off, and then immediately he blurts out, "Stop," and he slaps me and Sam on the chest to stop us from walking. And this is the first time I've seen real panic in the ranger's eyes, and he starts questioning me and Sam, just seeing if we remember anything from being out here, how long we've been out here, or what direction we went in. So we all frantically check our watches and phones, but none of them are working. This thing had stopped walking about 10 feet ahead of us and just turned around. And it's just calmly looking at us. And the ranger fearlessly storms up to it and is just pointing in its face, yelling, "Where did you take us?" And he's looking super aggressive and borderline violent. And this thing just gently replies, "I took you where you were meant to go, silly." And it just lightly lifted its hand and pointed to its right. And we all turn our gaze to what it's pointing at. And we see this massive hollowed out tree. Big oval gap in the front of it with glass stairs spiraling around the outside of it. They were like stairs that you would see in a loft, but they were sticking out the bark of the tree. And I realized in that moment, the real Kristen is sitting in the fetal position, completely motionless inside of the oval gap of the trunk of the tree. We're all just standing there in disbelief for a moment. And again, questions just start flooding my brain. Why would this thing lead us directly to Kristen? Is this thing surrendering, or is this a trap? Was it planning on leading us here this whole time? I take a better look at the tree, and it's giving off the same illumination that it and the first staircase were giving off. And I start to get those intrusive thoughts again. I feel oddly drawn to it, but I know better now than to act on these thoughts, simply because of what happened the first time. I learned my lesson, but I look back at the other guys to see the reaction on their face. But when I look at Sam, the mimic is right next to him with its hand on his shoulder, and it's whispering something in his ear. I didn't even see this thing walk up to him, and I take a step towards them, but before I could even get a word out, the mimic whips its head towards me and mockingly says, "Porcupine." And Sam's eyes are completely glazed over, and he's just staring at this tree motionless. And the mimic took a slight pause, then tilted its head mockingly before lifting its hand off of Sam's shoulder. And as soon as the hand lifted off Sam's shoulder, Sam took off sprinting towards the tree. He gets a little bit of a head start on me, but I start chasing him right away because I could tell that there is something off about him now. And as we're getting closer towards the tree, I could tell that Sam is definitely not sprinting towards Kristen. He's sprinting towards the base of the stairs because the direction that he's sprinting is about 5 degrees off from the oval gap. But I'm closing in on him, and I get one hand on his back. And I was able to slow him down, but I wasn't able to stop him from getting to the second step of the stairs, simply because of the momentum that he had built in his sprint. And once he touched it, I felt the stairs give off a vibrating pulse with each step that he took. It was as if somebody banged a drum or a gong the moment each foot touched one of the steps. So I managed to get my second hand on his back and I ripped him off the stairs. And once I got enough traction on my feet, I was able to get him to the ground, and I restrained him with every ounce of effort that I had because he was trying as hard as he physically could to get back to these stairs. And Sam is not a small or feeble man by any means, and I had to use every ounce of my strength to restrain him. But he wasn't fighting me, he wasn't hitting me, he wasn't pushing me off. He wasn't even looking at me. It was as if I didn't exist. His eyes were just fixated on the stairs, and he was just scratching and clawing to get back to them. And it got to the point where I was starting to doubt that I could restrain him any longer. But then he just suddenly stopped and went limp, and his eyes just reverted back to normal, and he looked at me and he just goes, "Bro, what happened?" He seems kind of okay, so I take my eyes off him for a moment to see what stopped him. And I see the ranger removing Kristen from the hole in the tree. And it seemed like the moment the ranger pulled her out, Sam stopped. And me and the ranger are just looking at each other, and our eyes are asking each other like, "Yo, what now?" And then we all just look back towards the mimic, and this thing had such a satisfied, devious look on its face. And then its face started to fade away to nothing. And just like the ranger explained with the hippie, it's almost as if it started to evaporate and become one with the forest until it completely disappeared. So I look back at Sam to see if he's okay, and he gives me the nod, just signaling to me that he's all good. So we immediately start putting all of our attention towards Kristen. We're huddling around her, and the ranger's trying to give her water, and we're so relieved as she starts slowly regaining consciousness. It took almost a full minute for her to start making sounds and her eyes to start fluttering open. So once she started to look coherent enough, the ranger asked her if she was okay, and she just lightly replied, "What took you guys so long? It's been days." And the ranger followed up and asked her if she remembered anything, and she barely gets the words out. "It told me you'd come. It told me I'd be safe by the stairs." For a second, I didn't realize why that rubbed me the wrong way until Sam whispered to me. That's exactly what the mimic said when we first found it. But that realization to me was absolutely world-shattering because I realized in that moment that we didn't win. It was as if the mimic knew we were going to find her just like this, and it was mocking us from the beginning. Then even more questions start flooding into my mind. Did it not even want to get out of the park? Was its motive just to get us back here right in front of these stairs? And why did that thing look so deviously satisfied? So we're tending to Kristen while I'm internally turning these questions over in my head. This woman is severely dehydrated and starving, so I don't really even have time to think. We just have her slowly rehydrating from the Ranger's canteen and slowly nibbling on little protein bars from Sam's pack. I want to leave so bad, but we have to wait until she's strong enough to walk by herself. The forest is way too dense for us to carry her, so we just assist her about 30 feet away from this tree and these stairs because it doesn't feel right just standing right in front of it and leaving her there. We have to wait in that general vicinity for about 30 minutes until she's strong enough to start walking, and part of me is a little curious to see if the stairs do anything. I'm curious to see if they'll disappear or transform in any way. Obviously, we don't start questioning Kristen immediately because we just want her to focus on hydrating and getting better. We all just focus on being as gentle and consoling as we possibly can. And I could tell that we all don't want her to see how shaken up we are because we just want her to feel safe at this point. She's been through enough. So we do our best to console her, and then once she feels calm and content enough, we kind of take a few steps away to start talking about our game plan. Our phones miraculously start working now, and we could see that we're about a mile away from camp. And once I let the others know that we were only about a mile away, I could see in their face that we had just about the exact same experience, because they're just as surprised as I was. It felt like whatever the mimic did to us, it felt like it went on for hours. But before we could start talking and get into any detail about our experiences, Kristen finally speaks up. And of course, she's asking to see Nick and asking if he's safe and okay. And at this point, she's standing up, so she seems like she's okay to start walking. So we all walk over to her and we're ensuring her that Nick is safe with his father. And we calmly explain to her that we didn't feel safe just having Nick at the campsite while we're out looking for her, just in case he got overzealous and overconcerned and tried to run off looking for her himself. She had a little bit of a shame on her face about the situation, but she just seemed to nod and accept it. So the ranger just gently asks her if she's okay to start walking back to camp, and she just nods obediently. So we just gather all of our stuff and we start walking for about 20 feet before the most putrid, heinous, sour, rotten smell hits my nose. It was as if I took a whiff from the strongest smelling salt with how it hit my system. And I knew that we all smelt it at once by everybody else's body language. And I immediately whipped my head around to see if the source of this smell is the stairs. And of course, these stairs are nowhere to be found. And the ranger looks at us and quietly but sternly says, "We need to leave right now." We all feel very guilty rushing Kristen after all she's been through, but it's clear that the ranger feels as if we need to leave this area with a sense of urgency. So we really start to pick up the pace and start moving, but it feels as if this smell is following us. It smells like a mix of sour sewage, rotten meat, and sulfur. And after about 5 straight minutes of it not losing any intensity, I pipe up, I go, "What is that smell?" And Sam replies quietly because I don't think he wants Kristen to hear. He goes, "Bro, it's a carcass." And he says it with a level of certainty that I know is from his days as an army ranger. So I just whisper back, "What, are there carcasses everywhere? Because I don't see one." And the ranger cuts me off and says, "It's following us." But he says it in a way that Kristen wouldn't be able to tell what he actually meant. But me and Sam knew what he was actually implying. And the look on his face was also implying that we should probably be quiet. And he put a conclusion to our whispering conversation by saying, "If you see antlers, keep your head down and keep walking." I know that I can't reply verbally, but internally I cynically joke, "Oh great, I don't just have to worry about magical stairs and a faceless mimic. Now I have to worry about a territorial stinky elk." With all of the wild stuff going on, I momentarily forgot that the most dangerous thing here is still Mother Nature. And the last thing that we need in this situation is to be rushed by a 600-pound elk. So we get through most of the hike with zero complications. And we could start to see the edge of the campsite through the trees. And we're only about 100 feet from this finish line when we hear an elk scream coming from directly behind us. And if you've never heard an elk scream, it is horrifying and borderline human-like. I encourage you to look it up on YouTube. So we start to pick up the speed of this hike a little bit until we're about 20 feet away from the campsite. And the elk starts to let out a second scream, but the tone changed just a little bit. About a half second into the scream, it sounded like a young boy screaming. And then Kristen starts to panic and she whips her head towards the ranger and goes, "That was Nick. I thought you said my son was safe." And the ranger grabs her by both shoulders, not aggressively, but more in a comforting way. In a way that implies that what he's about to say to her, she needs to listen. And he says, "I promise promise you that was not your son. Right now, we just need to focus on getting you to the lodge. And the second we get there, we will call your son, I promise. And then to break the tension a little bit, he says with a slight smile, I just found you. Please don't go running off in the woods again. And this comforted Kristen just enough to get her through that tree line and back into the campsite. And the second we stepped out of those woods, I felt like I could finally breathe again. We were only in there for about 3 hours, but with everything that happened, I couldn't believe that it was just past noon. The campsite was still empty, but we needed to get Kristen onto the vehicle, and we needed to head to the lodge before anybody came back, because it would raise a ton of questions with all of the other campers, like why is this lady still here? It was common knowledge to everybody that she was supposed to get shipped off in the morning, and we could tell that she's peeking towards the campsite looking for her belongings. But the ranger gets ahead of it and lies straight to her and goes, don't worry, your stuff left with Nick. It was the easiest way for us, so let's focus on getting you home. And in my head, I'm considering asking her what she remembers about this experience. But on the 2-minute walk to the vehicle, I could tell that she's fully under the impression that she just had a couple too many, and she somehow managed to get herself lost. I could see the embarrassment building on her face, but for our current situation, that was kind of ideal, because the reality is that we just need to get her out of here. She climbs into the vehicle, but before they drive off, the park ranger walkie-talkies the camp guides, and he just alerts them that they should probably get everybody back to the camp area because there's aggressive elk in the area, and he doesn't want the entire group walking back to the campsite after dark where they can't see one coming. And on the other end of the walkie-talkie, the camp guide replied, don't worry, we're already on our way back to camp, because there was an aggressive cold front and nobody was dressed for it. I don't know what it was about what the camp guide said to the ranger, but it put some type of urgency into the ranger, and he just started to walk away very quickly, but he shouted back to us before he got into the vehicle, and he just goes, boys, I'll get back as soon as I can. Stay away from the tree line, and if you smell it, hide. So me and Sam just nervously nod, and then we just watch them drive off. It's only noon and I'm absolutely exhausted, and I catch myself thinking about the devious look on the mimic's face before it disappeared, and it reminded me to check on my friend. This is the first time that Sam and I have a minute to talk since everything happened. So I just opened up the conversation as honestly as I could. Sam, should we leave? And Sam just goes, we can't. If it was just you that touched the stairs, I'd say let's go, but I can't leave this campsite knowing that I might have just made it worse, because I couldn't keep that thing out of my head. And to be honest, I wasn't surprised at his answer whatsoever. I knew that we were staying here before I even asked the question, because now he feels exactly how I feel, responsible for all of this. So I just try to comfort him a little bit, and I just say, don't worry, bro, it got me too with whatever time loop trance that was. And Sam just looks at me funny. He goes, time loop? Mine wasn't like that at all. Mine felt like sleep paralysis. I saw everything happening. I saw you losing it. I saw you stumbling. I saw the ranger voluntarily switch with her, and I was trying to scream and get your guys' attention, but nothing would come out. And then it started talking to me, not out loud, but like in my head. And it just kept telling me that it was my turn to go up the stairs, and that we should really stop fighting it. And then it said that there was nothing that we could do. And then it just kept asking me over and over again, do you know what the crows mean? And then I couldn't help but to cut him off and ask him, did she tell you what it meant? Because it's all I've been able to think about. And Sam just goes, no, it was just taunting me with the question. But it did say that we would know what they meant when we got back to camp. And that was basically our cue to start walking back to camp, because we're both looking for answers. So I keep the dialogue going, and I ask Sam, if our experiences were so different, what do you think happened to the ranger? And Sam just jokingly replied, I'm sure it was something unique and horrible, but I'm much more interested to know what he knows about the source of that smell. So we walk quietly for a second and just head straight towards the logs to sit down. And we could see from a distance that those crows are still perfectly perched exactly where they were. And we just sit on the log straight across from them. It was kind of funny because we were so tired that we didn't even have enough energy to be scared of the crows. We're just sitting there having a standoff with these things. They're staring at us and we're just staring at them. And then the one all the way to the left just squawks and flies away. And we just look at each other and we nod. And it turns out the mimic was right. We knew exactly what they meant. And Sam just casually says, 1 down, 2 to go. And then he follows up by kind of shamefully asking me, did I do what you did? He was implying, did he have a seizure as well? And I just replied, no, it just seemed like you were trying to rush to the top, but I was able to stop you before you got there. And then he asked me, did you feel the vibrations? And I just replied, yeah, I did. It felt like each step that you took up the stairs let out some sort of pulse, like 2 gongs. And Sam's eyes lit up and he goes, that happened when you you stood on it. Not 2, but only 1, because you got to the first step. And then he asked me something interesting. He said, do you think there's a correlation between how many steps you go up and the severity of the consequences? And I just go, bro, I really hope not. And right then we hear laughing and talking approaching us. It's the group of campers coming back from the fishing excursion. And luckily the chatter sounds very upbeat, so that gives us a little bit of relief. Because by the energy that they're giving off, we know nothing bad happened while they were out there. Me and Sam do our best to kind of shake off all of our stress so we don't alarm anybody coming up to us. So we're just having small talk with everybody while the camp guide's unloading all their gear before everybody gets together for lunch. And once everybody's settled in, one of the camp guides starts going around and he's doing a head count. And he shouts to the entire group, guys, we're 1 short. So everybody starts to look around to see who's missing. Everybody's looking around, counting their immediate friends and family until 2 guys speak up. They're both in their early 30s, real outdoorsman types. And they say, don't worry guys, that's just our buddy Pete. He was too good to go on the pontoon because he's a fly fisher. So he's fishing right off the shore of the lake. We'll go grab him in a minute, don't worry about it. Everybody else seems pretty happy with this answer, but me and Sam don't like the idea of somebody being out there by themselves. Not with everything that we just saw, everything that just happened. And the camp guide just says, go grab him now, and he asks the group if anybody else wants to go with them. He explains that there's a couple elk in the area because that's what the ranger told him, and the bigger the group, the less likely an elk is to charge. So Sam puts his game face on, and with a big smile, he just volunteers and goes, we'll go with them. We've been stuck at the campsite all day, we could use the walk. And the camp guide seemed pretty cool with that idea. And he just goes, guys, hurry up, the food's gonna be ready in 20. It felt so weird to me that Sam and I had to act and pretend that everything was okay. And part of me is kind of envious of the other campers and their ignorance of the situation. This was supposed to be a fun trip, but now it's just an undercover horror story. So we all stand up and we start walking and we're just introducing ourselves to one another. And these guys actually turned out to be really cool. It was pretty refreshing to have a normal conversation for a bit, even if we were acting. The guys' names were Joe and Tom, and they let us know that they were on a boys trip and that their buddy Pete is really into fly fishing. Joe is really into hiking and sightseeing, and Tom is really into hunting. And they absolutely live for trips like this. And I start to get even more envious because these guys sound like they're having such a good time here. But hanging with those guys and cracking jokes is exactly what I needed, because I almost started to feel okay by the time we got to the lake. And as we were starting to close in on the lake, the ground started having a frozen crunch to it, and I got blasted in the face with what felt like a gust of winter wind. It was only mid-October, and this type of cold felt like middle of winter cold. This breeze and this harsh cold felt so unnatural for this time of year. So we're looking at this lake, and the edge of the lake has a 1/4 inch layer of ice on top. And this layer of ice extended about 15 feet into the water. I didn't like the look of that one bit, and Sam's eyes looked as concerned as mine. And Joe and Tom are just cracking jokes saying that Canada could keep this weather, and joking that Pete should have brought his ice fishing gear. And they explained that Pete is probably just around this bend of trees, maybe 100 yards away from us. And Sam proceeded to ask them, when did this cold front come in? And they just casually reply, I don't know, like about an hour and a half ago. And in my head, I know that that lines up just about perfectly from when Sam stepped on those stairs. And I started to have a horrible feeling about this, but I didn't want to scare these guys and ruin the time that they were having. So I just stay quiet until we get around this bend of trees. And I'm just looking at the ground while we're walking because I'm scared to see what's around this bend of trees. And then I hear Joe shout, yo Pete, it's time to head back. He said it in a very upbeat tone, and that gave me the heart to look up from my feet. And I see Pete standing about ankle deep in the water as fly fishers usually do. But he's not facing the lake, he's facing the trees. And the water is frozen around his feet, but it doesn't look like he's in distress. He almost looks elated. He just has this big smile on his face, and he's just scanning the tree line. But he's not fishing, and his eyes are darting around a little too much. I instinctively just grab Sam's arm, and then Tom shouts to him like, come on bro, you can't fish in there. And then Pete swings his head towards us as if he was finally realizing that we were walking up, and he just announces in a euphoric manner, I never want to leave. We love it here. I'm super confused, and I don't know if I'm jumping to bad conclusions because of what happened earlier, but I can't tell if Pete is trolling us and this is an inside joke between him and his friends. So I just stand by to see how Joe and Tom react. And then Joe shouts from the end of the shore, and he just goes, hey buddy, you good? And Pete is just scanning the trees again, and he repeats himself, I never want to leave. We love it out here. And Sam butts in, and he just goes, guys, we gotta get him out of that water. He said it firmly, but not in a way that would strike panic into Joe and Tom. So they start start to walk into the water and the ice starts to break. And Tom immediately says, oh guys, we gotta get him out of here. The water is freezing. Who knows how long his feet have been in there? So they put one of Pete's arms around each of their shoulders and they lift him out of the water. And then they high step back to shore because the ice is cracking with each step. And I'm even more confused because Pete doesn't seem uncomfortable at all. He just seems so happy, but I look at his shoes and they seem just to be regular hiking shoes. And then I touch the water with my fingers and this water has got to be under 40 degrees. So there's no way that he could have been standing in there comfortably this whole time. And then Sam says with a little bit more urgency, guys, we gotta get him back. We gotta check him for frostbite. Then Tom and Joe seem to be a little bit more concerned and they're asking him and pleading with him like, hey, are you okay? You gotta tell us. And Pete just seems so happy and elated and he just replies, of course I'm okay. I love it out here. It's just so beautiful. And his delight for this situation is damn near spiraling me into a panic attack. Because once I got a closer look at him, his eyes had a similar glaze to Sam's eyes when the mimic had him. So Tom and Joe have an arm on each of their shoulders and we grab one of his legs each so we could carry him all the way. Just so we could get him back to camp efficiently without doing any more damage to his feet. He didn't seem to mind this at all or realize that we were carrying him because we were concerned about his well-being. He just kept saying things like, it's so beautiful out here, I love it. And then he started saying things like, we should have seen it. And then once he said that, me and Sam looked at each other and I could tell that Sam is asking the same question in his head that I am. What did this man see? And then I start asking myself, did he see the mimic? Because if he did, then our theory about the crows is absolutely wrong. We thought one of the crows flew away because we beat the mimic. And then the last question I managed to ask myself before we got to camp was, if it's not the mimic, then what is it? And as we got closer to the campsite, Pete's voice started to go from less hopeful and elated to more stressed and panicked. He started to seem a little bit more normal and he was asking his buddies what happened to his feet and what happened. You would think that him acting as if he isn't okay would make me more concerned, but it actually made me feel better because when I took a peek at his eyes were normal now and whatever state he was in faded. And everybody at the camp as we're walking up is looking at us and asking us what happened. And his buddy speaks up and just says he got stuck in some ice but he's fine. We could tell that they're trying to downplay it because they're not trying to embarrass their friend. And he's not in such bad shape that we need to be super concerned immediately. But we haven't checked his feet yet. So we walk him over to the far end of the fire and we sit him down on the log. And we all just huddle around his feet before we take his shoes off so nobody else could see. So we untie his boots and we start to slip his shoes off and I could see a deep red ring around his ankle. Tom starts to peel his left sock down very slowly because we're not positive about the damage under there. And luckily his feet are just beet red. And instead of his feet being blue and shriveling with harsh frostbite, he just has a minor case of frost nip. And we all let out a sigh of relief at the same time because that could have been a nightmare. And we just tell Pete that we just got to keep your feet close to the fire. All we got to do is get you some dry socks and shoes and you're going to be good. I was almost expecting bright blue feet. I didn't like the way he looked when we found him, but at least him acting okay and his feet being okay gave Sam and I enough relief to enjoy lunch with our new friends. So we spent the next few hours just chatting with these guys and hearing the stories of past trips that they've all taken together. Sam and I really like the outdoors, but these guys, they were real outdoorsmen. And I was actually having a good time for the first time since I touched the stairs. And the sun was just about going down and Tom announced to the group that he had to hit the hay soon because he had to be up very early for a trapping excursion in the morning. So me, Pete, Joe, and Sam all start giving him a hard time about it, but he doesn't budge and he goes to his tent. And at this point, Pete seemed to have fully come around. He had been acting completely normal for a couple hours at this point. We could tell that his feet are bugging him a little bit, but you could tell that he's doing his best to hide it. And we're in the middle of talking about the NFL playoff picture and who's doing well this season. And then I see Pete gaze off into the woods and I see him sniffing the air a little bit. And Joe's just going on rambling about how the Bears have a chance this season when Pete lets out this weird groan and he says, "Do you smell that? It smells so good." And the way that he said it really rubbed me the wrong way. And right then, that smell from the woods earlier hit my nose. And then Pete announces, Joe, look at that beautiful moose." And then I see Joe look up at the tree line right behind us. And his eyes just go up as if he's looking at something 15 feet tall. And Pete's eyes look exactly like they did when we found him at the lake. And Joe's just sitting there motionless staring, and I see his eyes changing too. And I could hear something behind me breaking twigs and bumping into branches. And whatever it is, it's talking. It's whispering in some unnatural cadence. The voice sounded distorted and almost croaky. It was as if it was multiple voices talking over each other in some type of messed up, eerie run-on sentence. It's like its words were layered like a symphony, so I couldn't make out what it was saying. And then Joe blurts out with the same disturbing optimism in his voice, and he just says, "Well, isn't that thing lovely? Come on, boys, take a look." And I'm just frozen sitting there staring at Joe before Sam slaps and grabs my knee, and he just goes head down. So I immediately put my chin to my chest and I stare at the ground beneath my feet. Everything in my body is telling me to run, but I just hear the ranger's voice in my head. "If you smell it, hide." So I whisper to Sam, "We should probably hide." And then he whispers back, "It's already here. Remember, if you see antlers, head down." And for the first minute, I felt like at any second this thing was going to charge us from behind. But the worst part about the whole situation was how Pete and Joe were acting. They just kept announcing things like, "It's so beautiful. Turn around. You just have to see it, fellas. You guys are going to miss it. It's right there. All of that beauty is right behind you. It's so gorgeous." And then the line that really threw me off was, "Come on, guys. It just really wants you to look." And this continuous effort to get us to turn around went on for over 10 minutes. And me and Sam are just pressed together on our log with our head between our knees like a tornado drill at school. And these two guys are just sitting there, elated, trying to coerce us into turning around. And they're not even acknowledging that we're basically in the fetal position with our arms covering our heads. We were hanging out with these guys for hours before this, and both of them are extremely socially intelligent. We were having nuanced conversations, but now they're just completely out of touch, delirious, and aggressively optimistic. These guys are completely in their own world. We're almost 15 minutes into this situation, and then randomly they both go completely quiet, and I could see Joe's feet walking over to me, and then I felt a firm grip on my left wrist. I was ready to blast double this guy and bury my forehead into his chest, so he couldn't pry my eyes open to look at whatever was behind us. But he just gives my wrist a light shake, calmly lets go of it, and says, "It's time for bed, guys," in a completely regular, groggy voice, as he's walking away towards the tents. Once he's far enough away, I look up towards him, and I see Pete limping towards the tents too. I don't hear the weird voice from behind me anymore, but I can't even tell if the smell is gone, or if it's just burned into my senses. And Sam just picks me up by my tricep and says, "Keep your head down," and we start walking towards the tent. I want to run towards the tent, but I don't want to catch up to Joe and Pete. So we just slowly walk behind them until they're at their tents. And they just call back to us, and they're just like, "Night, fellas," as if what just happened didn't happen. And then once their tents are zipped up, we beeline towards our tent. We get in there, and I don't even know what to say. I could see in Sam's face how exhausted he is, and I feel how he looks. This has absolutely been the longest day of my life. Mind you, we were up at sunrise, dropping Nick off to his father. We spent the afternoon searching for and saving Kristen, and in the early evening, carrying Pete to the campsite and tending to his feet. And the second things felt like they might be getting better, we get ambushed by our new friends, and their weird obsession with this gorgeous moose. Sam and I don't even have the energy to talk about what just happened, and I fall asleep within moments of lying down. But then I wake up to the sound of a vehicle being driven up to camp. I was having a surprisingly pleasant dream, but the second the dream state faded, all of the events of yesterday, the nightmarish events, started flooding my head. And all of the peace that I was feeling while I was sleeping was completely overshadowed by waking up back into this nightmarish reality. And it hit me in my groggy state that this vehicle must be the ranger returning to camp. So I just jump to my knees and I shake Sam awake, and I just go, "Bro, the ranger's back." So we get dressed, we hop out of the tent, and we hustle over to him, and he could see from the looks on our faces that something's wrong. And I realize as I'm walking up to him that I'm very upset with him. And I guess Sam was too, because Sam immediately barks at him, "Where have you been?" And before he even gets the chance to answer, I follow up, and I say, "You didn't tell us that it was gonna follow us to the campsite." And he puts both of his hands out, gesturing to calm down. He just goes, "I'm sorry. I'm ready to tell you guys everything that I know." Me and Sam don't even have the energy to talk over what just happened. Sam and I both like the idea of being brought up to speed. So we give the ranger the chance to explain himself. And the ranger goes, "First off, Kristen is home safe. Secondly, I couldn't come back right away because I had to prep the lodge for all of these campers to head back there tomorrow. I got in contact with some of the other rangers and I filled them in with what happened to us yesterday. And the second I brought up the smell, they all urged me to evacuate the area. But I couldn't evacuate people to a place that wasn't ready to house them. And I couldn't just just tell them to leave without causing a major issue. Nobody would believe the reason, and all it would do is cost these camp guides their livelihood. And Sam butts in right away and goes, what about costing these people their lives? And the ranger puts his hands up again, gesturing like, hold on, I'm getting there. Just keep listening. And the ranger goes, listen, we go years without incidents happening like this. And we could get through one more night at the lodge without anybody panicking and getting hurt. And then I chime in, what about getting through today? Because that thing got to Pete in broad daylight yesterday. And the ranger is clearly taken off guard by this. And he goes, what do you mean? What happened to Pete? So we proceed to fill him in about how we found Pete by the lake acting absolutely bizarre and how he was just staring into the tree line in the middle of the day. And the ranger doesn't seem to have an answer for this. So Sam piles on and says, I thought you were going to tell us everything. So why don't you go ahead and start by telling us what this thing is? And the ranger takes a deep breath as if he's preparing to give us some long-winded answer. And he starts by saying that the other rangers call it antlers because apparently you're not supposed to say its real name in the woods. I've already had enough of this answer, so I cut him off right there and I go, what is this thing, bro? Voldemort? Stop sugarcoating it. And the ranger looks a little bit ticked off with how I'm talking to him, but he could tell that we're sick of him dancing around the details. And he points over to the camp guides and he goes, you see them? Do you want to know the real difference between me and them? The only difference is that I saw something that I wasn't supposed to. I signed up for this job because I loved these parks and I wanted to share my love for nature with anybody that was curious. But when you spend enough time out here, you start to notice things that don't make sense. You start to see stairs that shouldn't be there. You start to see swings that swing by themselves, and you start to see doors that lead to nowhere. And then you start asking questions. And then when you start asking too many questions to the only authority figures above you, and he points to his own ranger badge, and then he says, you get taken into a private ranger meeting with all of the other rangers, and then you take an oath to protect all the people from everything that's hiding in these woods. Then you get sworn to secrecy for all of the information that they're about to tell you. But then you realize almost immediately that all of the information in this room comes from first-hand experiences or stories from other rangers that they've heard word of mouth. So I only know what I've been told or what I've seen for myself. There's some things like the stairs that are common and they have similarities with other rangers' stories. But most of the stuff that happens out here is incredibly random and makes little to no sense. I don't know what me and Sam were expecting. Part of me wanted him to have like some little notebook that had all of the entities and creatures of the parks and all of their weaknesses listed. But this guy's almost venting to us about his frustration about knowing so little. So Sam speaks up and says, so basically you're telling us that you know as much as we do. And the ranger just shakes his head and goes, no, absolutely not. I have an encyclopedia of stories from other rangers in my head. And there's some things in these parks that we have a good grasp on how to handle. But as far as what's happening in these parks as a whole, all of the rangers have completely different theories. I still feel like this dude's dancing around our questions. So I just bluntly say, so what are the theories? I could see a little bit of frustration on his face and I could tell that he doesn't want to be shamed for his theory. And he starts to get slightly defensive. And he says, listen, I don't believe in Sasquatch or the Mothman or that heebie-jeebie Native American folklore. Some of the other rangers buy into that, but I think that these things are legitimately demons. And I think that these demons have certain rules that they need to abide by. And I think that when you interact with these obscure traps that they set in these forests, and then he gestures to me, insinuating that me touching the staircase was me falling for one of their traps. And then he continues by saying, when you fall for the trap, they almost get some sort of permission to transfer over into our plane. And then Sam follows up with the obvious question. He goes, okay, so then what did I let loose and what did I give it permission to do? The ranger replied, like I said, I only know what I've been told or what I've seen. And the smell reminded me of a story that a ranger from the Appalachians told me. Apparently he was guiding a hunt with 6 men out in Virginia. The guide usually only takes people a couple miles in and they usually have no issue finding a target. And the first 5 guys of the group got their bucks in the first 2 days. But the last guy in the group said he just saw a buck over a ridge and he basically begged the ranger to help him track it. He said that this buck was absolutely beautiful and trophy worthy. So the ranger took everybody a couple miles further into the mountains because this guy seemed so excited about it. But every time they got close to where he said it was, the guy just kept saying it was a little bit further and the ranger couldn't seem to find it in his binoculars. But this guy just seemed so sure that he was seeing it. So they started to get into the parts of the Appalachians that the ranger wasn't even super familiar with. And the ranger wasn't comfortable taking these guys any deeper into the mountains. And then the guy said, but I see it right there. So the ranger said, okay, if you see it, then take the shot. And then the guy paused for a second before he said, but I don't want to take the shot. I don't want to shoot it. I want to go with it. So right then the ranger called off the hunt and made everybody set up camp for the night because this guy was putting everybody in harm's way. And they had followed this guy so far out that they were going to have to spend the entire next day hiking back. But that night, they were hearing sounds from the woods that ranger had never heard before, and the ranger made sure to make everybody stay in their tents. But the guy that took them on this wild goose chase refused to stay in his tent, and this guy was just wandering around the camp, lingering around, talking about how it's right there, and that everybody should all come see it. The ranger knew that something was off with his behavior, but the smell that overtook the camp that night was something that he would never forget. And when the ranger woke up the next morning, he found that guy sitting in front of their food storage, and this guy was just disgustingly gluttonous, devouring every last bit of food that they had. He got through all of the energy bars and dry food, and then he even got through the raw meat that they brought to cook. It was as if he had horrible tapeworms that were giving him an insatiable hunger, and the second the ranger saw how he was acting, he immediately called off the entire hunt, and he literally had to stop the other hunters from assaulting this guy, because he just single-handedly put everybody here in a survival situation by eating all of the resources. And the only thing that calmed everybody down was when the ranger said they need to head back right now because we don't have enough food for 2 days. But this guy refused to come, and he put this ranger in a position where he had absolutely no choice but to leave this guy out here. Otherwise, there was no way they were all going to make it back. Everybody would have starved, and that guy just seemed so happy to stay. So ever since then, the rule for all rangers is that if you smell sulfur and you see antlers, you leave the area immediately. Sam and I didn't want to cut the ranger off during this story. We wanted to let him finish his story before we let him know that Pete and Joe were acting eerily similar to the man from that story, minus eating the raw meat. And then we proceeded to tell him about the incident with the moose from the night before, and the ranger had extreme guilt on his face at that point, and I could tell that he was not expecting things to go so south so quickly. And then I see some recognition on his face, and he asks us, didn't they come with a third guy? And then we explained to him that Tom went to sleep before it happened, and that he left early to go trapping. And now there's panic on the ranger's face, and he goes, we need to find Tom. So the ranger starts to storm off, but then Sam puts his hand on the ranger's chest and says, how about instead of running off into the woods again, you tell me what rules this thing lives by, so I can do what I need to do to keep these innocent people safe. Because clearly your only priority is to keep us in the dark and keep money flowing into this camp. To be honest, I was not expecting Sam to talk to the ranger like that, and frankly, I don't think the ranger was either, because he didn't say anything. And then Sam just continued to pile on. You aren't going anywhere until you show me that you're going to make sure that everybody in this campsite is safe and accounted for. And you're going to stay here and you're going to set up for a safe hike back to the lodge. And then the ranger starts frantically rambling about how he can't cause panic with the campers, that he's just trying to do his best, but he can't tell everybody everything. And Sam cuts him off again and he goes, you're going to tell the camp guides to let everyone know that there's been too many elk sightings in the area and it's not safe for kids, and that everybody is going to be packing up and heading out as soon as possible. And then you're going to tell them that elk don't respond well to eye contact, so if they see antlers or they smell sulfur, to keep their head down and keep moving. Do you understand me? I'm fully on board with that plan, but I'm not sure how the ranger's going to take those very clear orders from Sam. But to my surprise, he just swiftly nods okay. And then Sam says, okay, so now what are the rules that this thing abides by? And don't even think about telling me another story. The ranger seems to be surrendering, and he takes another deep breath. Then he just says, well, I don't think this one's like the mimic. I don't think its priority is to get out of the park. I think that this one's goal is to lure as many people deeper into the park as it possibly can. But I don't know where it's leading people and what it's capable of once it gets people there. But from what I've heard, it's capable of unspeakable things. And then Sam just sternly says, thank you. Get everybody to start packing. Doug and I are going to patrol the tree line to make sure that everybody stays in camp. And then we all just nod and disperse. I'm so happy Sam took control of this situation, because this feels like the first time that we really have a plan. This is the first time it doesn't feel like we're stuck in a reactionary loop, but Sam cuts off my thought by giving me orders. He just goes, no kids by the tree line, and we need to know where Joe and Pete are at all times. Understood? And after about 5 minutes of patrolling and thinking over the events of the past couple days, I ask Sam something that's really been bugging me. And I just go, bro, how do you think the mimic knew our safe word? And then he swings his head towards me and he goes, what do you mean? And I reply, bro, it knew our safe word. And then I remind him that it said it right before he sprinted towards the stairs. And he looks absolutely furious and he goes, why didn't you tell me that earlier? And I immediately get defensive and I'm like, dude, you said you saw everything happen. I thought you must have heard that too. And then his anger turns to concern and he starts rifling through his backpack. And he pulls out a notepad and he starts rigorously writing. He rips out the page and he just hands it to me. And on the paper it just said, I'm sorry, I didn't remember that. From now on, we don't speak about strategy. We only write it. And then in all caps at the bottom it says, the trees are listening. And when I read that, my world caved in on me. All of the comfort that I felt from Sam taking charge and us finally having a strategy was ripped away from me with those 4 words. Because now not only are we dealing with compromised campers and demonic entities, now it feels like the entire forest is conspiring against us. I've never felt that level of paranoia. I frantically start looking around and everybody's just minding their business. Everybody's just packing up their things, but it feels like I'm being watched from every angle. It feels like at any second the entire group is just gonna look at me synchronized, and they're all just gonna tell me to turn around and start looking at something that's so beautiful. And at this point, I don't trust anybody other than Sam. And I look back at him and he's just finishing up writing a couple more sentences into the notebook. And he starts saying we have to pack up, we gotta grab the ranger, Joe and Pete, and go on a hike to find Tom. And he said it in a super calm manner, but then he holds up the paper and his face is very serious. And in all caps, the paper says, Pete and Joe are compromised. I don't trust the ranger. When we enter the woods, we let them lead the way. And by no means do we let them walk behind us. So clearly Sam is just as paranoid as I am. I would love for just me and Sam to go search for Tom, but only the ranger knows where the trapping area is, and we can't risk Joe and Pete hiking back with the entire group of innocent people. So once everybody's finished packing and heading back to the lodge, the ranger approaches us with Pete and Joe, and it's clear that the ranger's already briefed them on what we're about to go do, and he just points north and he just says Tom should be this way. And I try my absolute best to greet Joe and Pete in a friendly manner, but when I tell you, if they say so much as a flower is pretty, I'm swinging, I'm taking their chin off. So then Sam goes along with his strategy and gestures to them to lead the way, and we just start to walk behind them into the woods. I cannot believe that I'm back in these woods doing another search. And to be honest, I'm not even looking for Tom. I'm just keeping my eyes on the people because I'm so scared of falling back into the trance of these trees that the mimic had me in the last time I was in here. But something feels different. The woods feel different this time. Last time the woods felt like they had an aura about everything. They felt lively, but this time they just felt gray. And it's gotten significantly colder and the woods feel barren, and there's no sign of wildlife. The hike started off eerily quiet, and the only thing I was able to hear was the other guys breathing and a little bit of their boots hitting the frozen dirt. But that was until I saw something run past us in my peripheral vision. I only saw this thing for a fraction of a second, and honestly, I would have chalked it up to paranoia. But with the movement came a croaky whisper. It was as if somebody drove past my ear whispering, so I only caught a word or two, and I didn't speak up immediately because it was such a brief moment. I needed a little bit more proof before reporting back to Sam. And then the same thing happened, but directly behind us. I didn't see it this time, but the drive-by whisper was exactly the same. So I whipped my head towards Sam to get his attention without alerting the others. And Sam is already holding up a piece of paper and it just says, "We are being hunted." So I mouth to Sam because I don't want the other guys to hear me. And I say, "Did you see it?" And then Sam touches his ear and mouths, "No, but I could hear it." And then I make a gesture implying that maybe we should look down. And then Sam points to his nose and mouths, "I don't smell it." So then I direct my attention towards the other guys because they don't seem to notice anything. And honestly, that just makes me more suspicious of them. I'm just about ready to grab Sam and start running back. But then the ranger stops everybody and he says, "Can you hear that?" And Joe and Pete just casually declare that they didn't hear anything. And Sam is just glaring at them and says, "Yeah, I bet you two didn't hear anything." And Joe immediately throws his hands up and just goes, "What is that supposed to mean?" And he's being super defensive. Just a minute ago, the woods felt cold and lifeless. But now this situation is filling up the space with this thick, violent tension. They explode into an argument and they start taking verbal shots at one another. But I'm just so overwhelmed that I'm just standing there and I'm feeling like a third-party spectator. I have no idea what's true at this point. I can't tell if Pete and Joe are as clueless as they're acting and they just want to find their friend and go to the lodge, or they're trying to trick us and lead us as deep as they possibly can into the woods. And as they continue arguing, it just gets worse because Sam is basically speaking in code because he's intentionally withholding information from them because he doesn't want them or the trees to know our game plan. And he definitely doesn't want them to know the conclusions that we've come to. But the more they insist that we keep moving forward, the less me and Sam are willing to. And at this point, they're looking at Sam like he's absolutely crazy. Because if it is true that they don't remember what happened last night with the moose, and they actually think that we're just grabbing Tom because there's too many elk in the area and we're leaving, then our behavior would be coming off as absolutely deranged. So I'm just standing there watching this altercation escalate speculate with no idea what decision to make, or what words could even ease the tension. And then out of nowhere, all 4 of them whip their head in my direction. My heart drops, and for a split second, I think that all of their eyes are about to glaze over, and they're all gonna tell me to turn around and look at it. But I catch something in my peripheral vision to my right, so I turn to look what it is, and Tom is just standing there blank-faced, as if he was with us this entire time, and nobody says anything for a few moments. So I know that everybody else is just taking in the same thing that I'm seeing. Tom isn't an overweight guy. He's definitely more of a jolly, heavy-set guy, with big, broad shoulders and a plump face. He's the type of guy that when he smiles, his cheeks get really big and flush with color. But I'm looking at him right in front of me, and I could see his cheekbones and his orbitals, and the striations in his neck. He has absolutely no color to his skin, almost as if he has a gray hue to him. And the natural joy that he usually has in his eyes is completely gone, and his lips are just completely chapped, and they almost look as if they're pressed against his teeth, as if somebody's behind him pulling his facial skin back. And I don't know in that moment if I should feel scared or concerned. I have no idea what to say, but Joe quickly steps up and asks him if he's okay, and he just lightly nods yes. And Pete follows up and asks him if he's okay to hike back, and he just does the exact same movement. Yes. Everybody seems to be a little bit thrown off by him entering the group that way, not to mention the drastic change in his appearance. So the tension of the argument from a couple moments ago completely faded away, and when the ranger suggested that we should all start hiking back, everybody seemed spooked enough that we all were like, okay, and we all start hustling back to camp. Naturally, me and Sam make sure that they start walking first and we're behind them. But as we start hiking back, I can't seem to get my eyes off Tom, because the way that he's moving doesn't match the way that he looks. This man looks significantly worse than Kristen when we found her, and that girl was barely able to make it back to camp herself. But Tom seemed to be effortlessly maneuvering through the forest with zero fatigue or any signs of dehydration. And as we're hiking, at any second I'm anticipating to see something in our peripheral or hear that same croaky whisper zoom by, but it doesn't return. The only thing that's slightly bothering me is that we're having gusts of wind coming from the direction that we're hiking, and every time a big gust occurs, I'm getting little hints of that sulfur smell. But I don't consult with anybody about it because it's so faint that it's definitely not in our direct vicinity. So I just want to focus on leaving the area as soon as possible. And I could see that even Joe and Pete are peeking at Tom with concern, but nobody said anything. We were just sitting in it. And thankfully, we get back to the campsite without anything serious happening. And all we have to do is load up our things onto the vehicle and we're home free. So me and Sam are still trailing behind them, and we're letting them load up their things first. So Pete and Joe throw their backpacks onto the vehicle and they go to load up their tents about 20 feet away. Then the ranger encourages Tom to load his backpack as well. And when he takes his backpack off, I realize why he looks the way he looks and why he's been acting the way he's been acting. The man is in complete shock and he's clearly lost a lot of blood. His backpack was covering multiple gashes across his back. He was clearly attacked by something, and his adrenaline carried him through that hike. So I immediately rush up to him and I have him sit on a cooler that we hadn't loaded into the vehicle yet. I've never seen a wound like this, so I'm just acting on instinct. So I pull a shirt out of my bag and I just start gently dabbing the wound, and I start reassuring him that he's gonna be okay. And I frantically grab my water out of my bag and I just hand it to him. Then I go back to tending to his wound, and I told him that we're gonna go get help, and I insisted that he should take a sip of water. And then at that moment I realized that nobody else is helping him like I am. Nobody's even said anything. So I look up at Sam and the ranger, and they have fear in their eyes, not concern. So I barely get out of my mouth like, come on guys, please help. And they both just shake their heads no. So I look back down at this wound and something just seems so off about it. So I pull up his tattered shirt and it releases that sulfur odor. And at the same time that I smell it, Tom drops the water I handed to him and he just croaks out, I'm so hungry. So I backpedal a little bit closer to Sam and the ranger. And then I turn my attention towards Joe, who seems as if he just saw Tom's wound for the first time. My heart isn't ready to give up on Tom yet, so I just yell at them like, guys, we need to grab him and get out of here. And then like straight out of a nightmare, Joe and Pete smile at me and Joe says, get out of here. We never want to leave. We love it here. And right at that moment, Sam grabs me and yanks me into the vehicle. And the ranger turns the car on. And I start pleading with them that we can't just leave these guys here. And the ranger replies to me with absolute finality in his voice. There's nothing that we could do. They are already gone. And then he just starts driving. And I just found myself stuck staring at them as we're driving away from the empty campsite. And just slightly to their right, I see the second crow fly away. And then once they're out of sight and we're deeper down the trail closer to the lodge, I start to look around at the woods surrounding us, and it feels as if there's something in the air. The only way I know how to explain it is that it felt like the woods were angry. It truthfully felt like this entire place was conspiring against us. And it's a super bumpy and loud drive, so there's no reason for us to even try to talk to each other. But as we're starting to see the signs that signal that we're closing in on the lodge, and the lodge is within a mile away, I could tell that we're all starting to hear these loud bangs that are slightly different from the sounds of the bumpy car ride. And the closer that we get, it sounds more like gongs and drums being hit sporadically. And I realized that it was just like the sound the stairs let off when we touched them. And the closer that we're getting to the lodge, the louder and more rapid the sounds are getting. And it is clearly coming from the direction of the lodge. And my mind just starts spiraling because it feels like nowhere is safe. If we stop on the trail, it feels like the forest is going to lash out and swallow us. If we go back to camp, we have to deal with whatever Tom is turning into. And if we keep heading towards the lodge, we have to face the source of that sound. We are in a no-win situation. There's absolutely nowhere to hide, there's nowhere to run, and there's nothing that we could do other than face what's at the end of this trail. I'm in the back seat and I'm purposely not looking towards the lodge, but I could tell by our surroundings that we're about to pull up. And I hear an audible gasp from the ranger when he sees what we pulled up to. And I'm expecting it to be an absolute massacre by the way he sounded and how quickly he opened the door and got out of the vehicle. Everything in me wanted to be able to teleport away from this place and not have to face what I'm about to face and see what I'm about to see. But then Sam got out of the vehicle and now it was my turn. And against every instinct in my body, I get out and I look towards the lodge. And at first, I have no idea what I'm looking at. It's everybody from the campsite just hanging out in the parking lot. People are just laughing and talking and kids are running around and playing. Everything seemed absolutely okay. So I'm scanning the parking lot and I'm trying to figure out what the source of the sound is. And then I see it right where Nick's father parked his truck. There was a structure that all of the kids were playing on. And it was like a half playpen with multiple slides. And there were staircases leading to the top in every direction. And with every step one of the children took on those stairs, it let out that sound. And these kids were all over this thing, just running up and down and playing. This thing presented itself like a playset. It was like this thing was taunting us. And I'm internally screaming and panicking, but I'm just standing there frozen. I wanted to sprint towards that staircase and yank each and every kid off of it. I wanted to plead to the parents to get their kids home and get as far away from this place as they possibly could. And honestly, I wanted to set that thing on fire and go home. But I just stood there and waited for Sam or the ranger to make the first move. But then the ranger announces in an extremely calm voice. He just claps 3 times to get everybody's attention and he just says, "Okay guys, let's get everybody inside. Looks like a storm's coming." I have no idea how he's capable of being this calm in this moment. Does he even see what I'm seeing? Is he hearing the sound that's coming off that playset? Is he putting 2 and 2 together, or am I just crazy? And I look at Sam and I know that he's seeing what I'm seeing. And it was clear that Sam came to the exact same conclusion that I came to. But we just follow the ranger's lead. Everybody in the parking lot listens to the ranger and heads inside at a very leisurely rate. And every second that we're not inside, I'm half expecting something to swoop out of the forest and just snag somebody. Because we only touched that thing twice, and those kids were running all over it. If me and Sam barely touched it and it released those first 2 things, what could this possibly do? So once we get inside and all the parents and children are tucked away in their quarters, the ranger tells us to come upstairs with him. And I'm so confused because the ranger doesn't look defeated, he looks relieved. So once we're alone upstairs, Sam asks before I get the chance to, "Yo, you saw what those kids were playing on, didn't you? Why do you look happy about it?" And the ranger calmly replies, "When's the last time you looked at it?" Then he stands up and walks towards the window and he waves us over to come take another look at the parking lot. And for the 3rd time this weekend, the stairs are nowhere to be found. But this time, the playset is replaced by a door. This wasn't an extravagant door with a big arc or intricate designs. It was just a door standing upright with nothing around it leading to nowhere. It was just a door frame, hinges, and a red door. And of course, the last crow is just perched on top. So I reiterate Sam's question because I didn't like the first answer. "Why do you seem happy about that?" And the ranger replies, "Because this is the first time throughout this entire fiasco where I know what to do. And Sam and I just stay quiet, waiting for this guy to elaborate. And he continues by saying, you remember when I told you that there's some things out here that the Rangers have a good grasp on how to handle? Well, you see, that thing out there is the only thing that all of the other Rangers made it extremely clear on how to handle. If a door presents itself, it's my responsibility as a Ranger to go through it. And then Sam follows up with the obvious question, what happens when you go through it? And then the Ranger replies, listen, let me give you some peace of mind before I tell you what's about to happen next. What we know about the doors is that as long as somebody walks through them before the sun comes up, nobody's going to be harmed. And that door out there signifies that this horrible fiasco's over. And you two boys have nothing else to be worried about. You guys get to go home tomorrow. And he continues by saying, when you see swings, the only thing that you know is that somebody's about to go missing. And you have no idea where they're going to end up, or where you should even begin to start looking for them. And when you see stairs, the only thing that you know is that something random and horrible is coming. And you have no idea how to protect everybody. But when you see doors, you know with absolute certainty that you have the choice to keep everybody safe. When they make you a Ranger, you vow to protect the patrons of the park. And I've lost many friends to these woods, but my best friend, the one that I had initiated into the Rangers with me, he was the last one of us to go through a door. Sam interjects in a much kinder tone this time. What's on the other side of that door? And the Ranger replies something heartbreaking. He says, I hope my best friend, waiting for me with a deck of cards and a whiskey. So we stand there in silence for a moment before the Ranger says, come on boys, let's end this. So we start walking down the stairs and towards the parking lot, and we stop about 10 feet away from the door. Then the Ranger just shakes both of our hands and gives us nods of acknowledgement. And without any hesitation, he just walks up to the door, opens it, steps through, and closes it behind him. And when he opened it, there was no ghostly haze or different dimension behind it. I just saw the other end of the parking lot. So when he closed it, I just wanted to go look on the other side of it, because by all rational thought, the Ranger would be right there. But before I got the chance to step, the final crow squawked. And the second it started to fly away, the door collapsed towards the direction where the Ranger would be standing. But the door just landed flat on the ground, and there was no one on the other end. The Ranger was gone, and me and Sam are just standing in this parking lot. And the sun started to rise after the longest weekend of my life. And I realized at that moment that the second that I had touched the stairs, that everything that we did to fight this was futile. From trying to fight the mimic to trying to save everybody from the antlers, it was all already set in stone. A few years ago, I visited a very good friend of mine named Meek. Meek grew up in Seattle, and he had always encouraged me to visit him in his home state so we could spend some time and he could show me around. He always bragged about how beautiful Washington is. And I would always tease him back. I would just say, if you want me to come to Washington, you have to take me to Mount Rainier. I didn't want to summit Mount Rainier. I just wanted to do a fun trail nearby. I knew that that national park was absolutely beautiful. So he took up my challenge and he agreed to take me to Mount Rainier, and we settled on the Skyline Loop Trail, which is about a 5.4-mile trail that isn't too long that goes around the base of Mount Rainier. We thought it would be a good idea to go when the flowers were blooming around that area, so we chose around mid-August. And don't worry, I'm going to save you the boredom of hearing about the travel and the drive to the hike. We flew in, we drove, moving on. So we start our hike, and there's this beautiful section of the trail where there's flowers blooming on both sides of it, and Mount Rainier is just right in front of you. It's like approaching the skyline of a beautiful city. It's right there, and you just get to take it in while you're walking towards it. So we had been hiking for a while at that point, so conversation had died down a little bit. You start huffing and puffing, you get a little bit less chatty, and we were just enjoying the moment and taking in the beautiful scenery. We were mostly isolated. There were some other people at the park that day, but they weren't really around. There was just this quiet, beautiful hum of nature. But that is until two children ran past us on either side of us, and we didn't hear them approaching. It kind of sounded like they were trying to scare us, try to get a jump scare out of us. It was as if they started laughing when they were just 2 feet behind us. And after these kids got what they wanted, which was startling us, they kept running about 20 feet ahead of us, and then they started to veer off trail to the left. And obviously we were both a little bit annoyed because we were in this tranquil state, really enjoying our time, and they jump scared us, so we kept an agitated eye on them in a very annoyed fashion. And I see these two children start interacting with and playing with something that looks like a pillar off to the left in this field, and the pillar looks like it's about 7 feet tall. But as we continued to walk down the trail, I got a better look at whatever it was they were playing with, and I realized that I was seeing the side of it. And from my previous previous angle when the children initially approached it, I was only able to see the short side of it, but as I continued walking, it was like I was able to see how wide it actually was. And once we got to parallel with the children and I was able to see the full front side of the object, I realized that these children were playing with a random upright red door. And for a brief moment, I didn't feel anything while I was looking at it, because part of me didn't even feel like what I was looking at was real, until Meek playfully said, I wonder if that door's a portal. He was completely joking, and he had no idea that that sentence that he said, absolutely playfully, flooded my brain with horrible memories, because the last time I saw a door like that, I witnessed a very good man sacrifice himself after the worst weekend of my life. The only difference between this door and the door that I saw in Michigan was that there was no crows perched on top of this door. Just two children playing with something that they couldn't comprehend how dangerous it actually was. So I'm standing there, I could barely form a sentence, and Meek is already walking over to it, still playfully. And I had told Meek about what happened in Michigan to me and Sam, and I didn't understand why he wasn't putting two and two together. And the children were messing with the doorknob, and at this point, they had the door slightly open, and I'm basically stumbling over myself, trying to get my hand onto Meek's shoulder in an attempt to turn him around, so I could express to him with my facial expressions what I can't seem to express to him with my words. What I was attempting to convey to him was, can you stop walking near that thing? I'm terrified and I think we should run. And when I finally got him to turn around and he saw my face, I knew that he knew what I was referring to, but he was genuinely curious to see if this thing was capable of what I told him it was capable of, or it was just an inanimate object and we could laugh about my temper tantrum. And at this point, the children had this door wide open and had been walking through to the other side. And Meek looked at me and playfully said, look, nothing happened to the kids when they went through. But while Meek was looking back at me, one of the children that had walked through the door had turned around. And I realized in that second that this was the first time that I had seen one of the children's faces. And where this child's eyes should have been, they were just deep black voids. And the darkness started from the ridge of his orbital bones. But the issue was that Meek was already through the door frame before he turned around to see what this child's face looked like. So I had no choice but to reach through the doorway in an attempt to pull Meek back through it. But he had stepped so far through it that I had to walk completely through this doorway to reach him. So once I got a hold of his arm, I attempted to try to backpedal, but he was resisting because he was frozen, staring at this child's face. And mind you, nothing happened when we went through this doorway, and the door was still wide open and standing. But as I was trying to wrestle Meek back through the frame, the other child, who I hadn't even seen his face yet, looped around us and kicked the door, slamming it closed. And at the moment the door hit the frame, our surroundings changed instantaneously. The door was completely gone, but these children with these black crater eyes were still there. And what was just a peaceful day was now a complete nightmare. I tried my best to take in my surroundings because I knew something was different about our surroundings, but I had to keep my primary attention on these hollow-faced kids. And I'm saying hollow-faced because it's not like they had black eyes. It was more like they had craters where their eyes should have been, and there was nothing behind them. And right away, I think I'm gonna have to punt these children into space as they're circling around us. And I'm just hearing them let out childlike giggles from the slits where their mouth should be. And it's not even normal child laughter. It sounds like 10 children's laughter mashed together in an odd audio file and just played through the slits of their mouth. And right as I'm about to make my first move, I'm loading up my field goal kick. I'm about to send this first kid's head through the uprights. Meek just puts his hand on my chest and says, calm down, in a calm confidence. And he starts praying in Arabic. And I don't speak Arabic, but I'm familiar with the common prayers. And I could tell that this wasn't one of them. This wasn't a routine prayer during the day. I've heard Meek pray hundreds of times, and he wasn't praying like he usually does. He was doing it in an almost confrontational fashion towards these children. And after about the 5th or 6th line of Meek's prayer, the audible laughter stopped. And I could visibly see on these children's faces and in their demeanor that they didn't like what Meek was doing. And as he kept reciting verses, I could see that they started becoming fearful and started backpedaling away until they ultimately turned around and fled. I was so relieved in that moment that they ran away, but I was also so confused with what just happened. And I was even more confused with Meek's calmness and confidence with the situation that we were in. I just watched our entire surroundings change in a blink of an eye, and I was looking at children that looked like demons, and Meek just stood there, chest high, confident, and made them flee, as if he wasn't scared of them at all, and our surroundings changing didn't even make him flinch. And in that moment, I was a little bit angry with Meek, because I felt like he brought us into this situation, so I had no choice but to be a little bit confrontational with him. So I questioned him. I'm like, bro, why would you do this after the entire story that I told you? But then I followed up that question with, what were you even saying to them to make them leave? Meek was still in a cheery mood, but I feel like that was the first time that he realized that I was actually upset with him, and he didn't want to make me upset. He was joking. And coincidentally, that's pretty much what he said. He stopped laughing and he looked at me and he said, "Oh, you're actually upset. I thought you were joking." And I immediately replied, "Why would I be joking? I told you everything that happened. Of course I'm scared." But he replied, "I told you you shouldn't have been scared of them in the first place. I told you that they were just jinn." And I recalled having that conversation with him after I had relayed to him the entire story. But I also recalled that he chalked it all up to jinn. Part of me found it very comforting because a part of that conversation was him relaying to me that if you trust in God, none of these things, none of these jinn can hurt you. And they can't influence you in any way. All you have to do is let them know that you're God-fearing and that you're not scared of them, and that will make them scared of you. Really quick, if you don't know what a jinn is, it's basically a demon in the Muslim culture. They chalk everything up to jinn. And that conversation with him helped me a little bit. It helped me get over that whole situation that went down in Michigan. It comforted me a little bit, but it didn't make me so unfearful that I was willing to walk back into a situation just like it or play with these kinds of things. I think Meek was under the impression that the new knowledge that he bestowed upon me about jinn and how to deal with them made me as fearless as him. He was completely wrong. Deep down, I was still scared of these things. And now we were through a door that looked eerily similar to the one that I never saw the park ranger walk out of. So I start looking around in absolute panic, trying to gauge where this thing dropped us off. Initially, I assumed that it might have just teleported us to a different part of Mount Rainier National Park. But as I was scanning the horizon, I started to realize that this was not only not a national park, it might have not even been our dimension. And I don't say that because everything looked so different. I say that because everything around me looked so similar, but something was so off about it. A lot of national parks look immense and endless, but you know that if you keep walking far enough, civilization is somewhere. But wherever we were, whatever in here was, there was this sense that no matter how far you walked, no matter how long you looked for it, there wasn't a road, there wasn't a town. This thing felt endless. It just seemed infinite. But the weirdest thing about it was that as far as your eye could see, there were just random red dots that were doors in the distance. Not thousands of them, but dozens for sure. And they were all dropped in random areas, standing in random fields, pressed into cliff walls, standing along a tree line, placed on top of a hill, and they all looked exactly the same. A red door with a black doorknob. If I were to give you an estimate of how far each door was from each other, I would say that each door was a 10 to 15 minute walk from the nearest door. I was trying to figure out what words to say, and the only thing that I could come up with was, how is this not scaring you? Like, Meek, look around. We're clearly not in Mount Rainier anymore. And at this point, he could tell that I was very, very upset, and he became apologetic, but he was still standing his ground that he was positive that we're completely okay. We're safe. And my argument was, how can you say that with our surroundings and with the children that we just saw? And Meek said something that was actually very profound. He said, there's no difference between where we are now and where we were before. This is all God's creation. Therefore, it's all beautiful. And just like anywhere else, just like where we were before, anywhere can be unsafe. But just because things are unsafe doesn't mean that you should fear them. You could respect dangerous things, but still appreciate the beauty inside of it, thus appreciating the beauty of God. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Meek for a second so you understand the context before I tell you exactly what happened next. I feel like you need to understand who he is so his actions will make sense. Meek's a very religious man, clearly, but he's not somebody who rubs religion in your face. He never tries to make you feel shameful or like you're a sinner. He lives how the religion preaches, and he doesn't let cultural factors warp the way that he looks at his religion. He leads a lifestyle of kindness and integrity at the forefront, and he finds deep comfort and gratitude in his beliefs. And that leads to confidence and calmness and the ability to be present and grateful. And he's also a 6'2", 225-pound professional mixed martial artist. And he's probably one of the best wrestlers or grapplers in any country that he steps onto. He's not scared of many things, and clearly he's not scared of crater-eyed children. And with how that interaction went down, he kind of proved to me that he shouldn't be. Now that you have a better picture of who he is, I'm sure you could understand why his presence and perspective, even in a situation like this, was comforting and allowed me to calm down for a moment and think rationally. And my first rational thought was a question. I just said, Meek, can we please just focus on finding our way back? And with a little disappointment in his eyes, he replied, that's no fun, but sure. And he followed up by saying, don't worry if any of those come back. I have multiple incantations to ward off jinn, and I promise they can't do anything to us. And to be honest, it did work pretty well on those children, so who was I to question him? So I just turned my attention to the plethora of doors to choose from, and I pointed towards the nearest one, and I suggested that we walk towards it and maybe take a peek through it. To be fair, I didn't see the ranger come back through the door that he went through, and I never went back to that camp, and I never made an effort to find out about his whereabouts after that weekend. That experience messed me up for a while, and I wanted to leave it in my past, and I came to terms with the fact that the ranger sacrificed himself, and at this point I was okay with it. I got over the guilt, but I didn't see the guy die. There's no telling if he made it out. And now that I was through one of these doors and I could see where he likely landed, I could see that there were options. Even even though I hadn't looked through one of these doors yet, I wasn't fully convinced that we were doomed. And in that moment, I was kind of optimistic that we could find a way out. This place almost looked like an optical illusion, but with all of these doors, I didn't feel like the situation was completely hopeless. So Meek and I started walking towards the nearest door. Part of me felt like the door was going to keep fading further and further into the distance, and we were never going to reach another door. But luckily, we were gaining ground on this door, and it was getting bigger and bigger as we continued to approach it. We were still about 5 minutes away from the door that we targeted, but then I started to see a little bit of movement walking towards us through the dense foliage to our left. So I immediately bumped Meek on the shoulder and I pointed in the direction of the movement. And I told him, you better get that incantation ready because another one's coming. But once this figure emerged from the tree line, it looked much less menacing than those black-eyed children. At least his facial expression was much less menacing, and his body let off this calm demeanor. It was a man in a suit delicately walking towards us, but nothing about his stature, his facial expressions, his movements were threatening at all. But that didn't mean I wasn't initially scared of him, or at least skeptical of him, because those cratered-eyed kids just looked like kids from the back, and this man could get up to us, turn around, and have an entirely different face on the back of his head like Voldemort. So I was still skeptical, and I still wanted Meek to have that incantation ready. But something about the way that this guy was approaching us really brought my guard down. He was giving us like gentle waves, almost waving us down in a customer service manner. It was almost like a manager of a Chick-fil-A waving us down because we forgot our fries. It seemed like he was just trying to get our attention, and he had a very genuine grin on his face. He didn't come off menacing whatsoever, but we signaled to him to stop approaching us while he was still about 20 feet away, and he listened, immediately put his hands up until he finally spoke. Mind you, he was still about 20 feet away, but I clearly heard him say, "You guys look like you need some help. You're not from around here, are you?" And by his mannerisms and the tone of the voice that I heard, it made me want to trust him a little bit more, but I felt desperate. But he seemed like he was trying to do his absolute best to convey to us that he meant absolutely no harm. The only issue was that when he started speaking for the second time, I noticed that he wasn't speaking and I was just hearing a voice in my head. I didn't notice the first time because his mannerisms matched the inflection and the pacing of the sentences that I was hearing. And the second thing that I heard him say was a question. He just asked us, "Where did you guys come from and where would you like to end up?" And at this point, Meek also noticed that he was speaking to us telepathically, and Meek took that as a cue, which I was happy about, to start his incantations. But right before Meek started, the man managed to get one more sentence in, and he simply said, "Hey Meek, feel free to finish your prayer, but I can assure you that I'm not a jinn." So Meek started his prayer, and this man turned his attention towards me, and I heard him say, "You know I'm not a jinn, why don't you tell him that?" I wasn't ready to reply because I wanted to see if this man started to get uncomfortable as Meek started speaking like the children did. I wanted to see if he would react the same way and he would flee, but he just stood there calmly in a content manner and almost politely allowed Meek to finish. There was nothing about this man's posture or presence that was menacing. What was a little bit scary was that he knew Meek's name and he knew what Meek was trying to do, and he spoke to me like he had context about my past experiences. And as much as that scared me and Meek, he finished his prayer and the man had no negative reaction to it. So Meek came to the conclusion that this man was definitely not a jinn, therefore Meek was not scared of him. I wasn't fully convinced that this guy was completely harmless, but Meek seemed to be, and he just introduced himself and then curiously asked this guy a question. Very simple: how are you capable of telepathy? He said it as if he was trying to open up a cordial conversation with this guy. Naturally, Meek spoke those words, and we just stood there waiting patiently for the telepathic reply into both of our heads. And then we both eagerly waited for responses in our heads from this oddly polite man. And then he very gently replied, "I wish I could explain it to you as if it was a skill, but it's just something I have. One day I realized I could do it, and ever since then it was like riding a bike." My initial question wasn't about the telepathy. I wanted to know where we were, so I changed the subject. And I said exactly that. "Yo, where are we?" And this man didn't try to brush off my question. In fact, he was rather attentive. And again, his mannerisms were matching the voice that I was hearing in my head. And then I heard him reply very clearly, "I'm not quite sure, but I've been here for a while now. And to me it seems like some type of crossroads, almost a bridge between various places. But I wouldn't worry if I were you, because it doesn't seem like a cage to me. It doesn't seem like it tries to hold you here. And I've become quite familiar with it, so if you have an idea of where you would like to end up, I could probably assist you in getting close. But I would encourage you to make that decision before nightfall, because this place isn't for the faint-hearted." It was so odd to me how trustworthy he was coming off as. It seemed like he was genuinely trying to help us, and he was trying to warn us about this place. But to be honest, it's hard to trust a guy who's moving like a mime and speaking into your head, no matter how polite the voice is and how kind he seems. Meek and I shot some looks at each other, trying to gauge what we were going to do next, and I could tell that he came to the same conclusion that I did, which was we might as well allow this guy to attempt to assist us because he hasn't made a move on us yet. Obviously, we'll still keep our guard up and keep distance between us because we don't fully trust him yet, but what's the harm in letting him show us around a little? So Meek asks him if he could get us back to Mount Rainier in Washington because the door behind us disappeared. And then the man replied something very interesting. He said, "Are you sure you want to go back to Mount Rainier? Because these doors go everywhere. So if you want to save some money on some flights, you could get a free trip today." We both chuckled at his joke, and once I finished, I had to remind myself where we were and who we were talking to. This guy was coming off as charming and witty and overwhelmingly likable. But when you remember where you are and how he's communicating with you, it actually just makes him that much more ominous. So before Meek was able to step in and accept his offer to take us somewhere else, I reminded the group that I was not trying to get dropped off in a random location. I had work on Monday and I needed to get back to Washington because I had a flight booked back to Chicago. So we collectively agreed as a group that it was back to Mount Rainier for us. We pointed towards the door that we were going to test out, but he immediately suggested a different door that he was pretty sure got us close to the location that we came from. And he explained that it was about a 15-minute walk from where we were. He told us that the door that we were going to would most likely take us to Brazil. And then he made a joke about how we probably don't want to end up in the Amazon today. I didn't know if there was any truth to what he was saying, but with the amount of doors that were around us, it didn't really matter to me which one we opened first. And if he did have information about this place and he knew where some of these doors went to, I was willing to take some information from him. So on this 15-minute walk to this door, we obviously still kept our distance from this man. Meek was being very cordial and conversational. I didn't blame him for it because Meek was very curious about where we were and how this whole place worked, because the concept of being able to open a door and be in a completely different country really excited Meek. He's an avid world traveler, so having access to something like this is a dream to him. And I could tell that he was trying to get information of how to keep access to whatever this is. I was just being a wallflower listening in on their conversation, trying to track down any inconsistencies about what this guy was saying, or any red flags about him whatsoever, but I couldn't seem to find any. He still just seemed nice and seemed like he was trying to help us. And eventually we got to the door that he was referring to. And this door was pressed up to the base of a hill, reminiscent of a hobbit's home. And he just walked in front of it, stepped off to the side, and gestured towards it, and then spoke to us telepathically. He just said, "You first, gentlemen." This was going to be the closest we've walked next to him because we've kept our distance this entire walk. And he could see that we were uncomfortable getting that close to him. And he took it as a cue to take a large step back to continue making us feel comfortable. Again, he was being very polite. And once he was far enough away to make us feel comfortable, he said, "You first." So we cautiously walked up to the door, still keeping our peripheral vision on him. We turned the knob, we pushed the door forward, and we took a peek. But this time was different than the last time. We were able to see through the door this time. It wasn't like when we came in here how our surroundings changed after we closed it. We could see the difference in the terrain between where we were and what was on the other side of the door, and it looked kind of like where we came from. It kind of looked like Mount Rainier National Park. So I looked over to the guy, and he was still just calmly standing there with a very nice demeanor about him, and it gave him even more trustworthy points. It seemed as if he brought us to where we were trying to go, and we gestured to him that it looked right, and we thanked him for taking us to the right place. And he just said, "No worries, gentlemen. Do you mind if I come with you? I'm really enjoying your company, and I promise I won't stay in your hair too long." My gut reaction was that I wanted to be away from this door and away from anything that we met inside of it. But it seemed as if Meek was fully convinced that this guy was completely harmless. Based on the evidence that was provided to him, the incantation didn't work, he didn't have a bad reaction to it, he showed no signs of aggression, and he brought us to where we were supposed to go. And before I had the chance to reply, Meek replied. He said, "Sure, I'd like to ask you more questions about this place. I'd love to continue to pick your mind. You're great company." The man seemed very happy that he had won over Meek, and he gestured with his hands that we should step through the door first. So we did. So we walked through, we took about 10 steps to make space for everybody to walk out of the door. I took a little look around, but I made sure I looked back once I heard the door hit the frame. We seemed to be in the right place, but I still wasn't fully convinced that this guy was harmless. So I turned my attention back towards him to see if he was going to change his demeanor, but he looked as joyous and happy as ever. And Meek continued the conversation that they were having on the walk, and he just said, "How can we find more doors like this? How do you spot them? Or how do we get them to present themselves?" But this was the first time that this man didn't answer immediately. He just stood there smiling, and I knew in that exact moment that we royally messed up, because something about him was different now. He was very friendly and happy this entire time, but now he looked elated. He looked like a young dog with his body filled with pent-up energy and just ready for you to throw the ball, ready to play fetch. He was almost vibrating with excitement. His legs were visibly shaking, and he was wiggling at his hips and his torso a little bit, and I noticed that he was smiling harder and harder. And as I'm looking at him, he takes 2 large shuffles to his left, and they were very particular steps. They were very calculated steps. So naturally, I mirror his steps because I didn't want him to have an angle on me. I didn't realize why he was stepping. I didn't really care. I just wanted to make sure he stayed in front of me. But most of my attention was on his smile, and second by second, it was getting bigger and bigger. It started off as was a grin, but then his teeth were showing, and then his dimples were indented, and then his eyes started squinting, and then he started getting creases on his forehead, and then his cheeks became bulbous, but his smile just kept getting bigger, and it was as if his eyes were adjusting their size to make more room for his enormous smile. His eyes got smaller and further apart, and his smile reached up to his orbital bones. I couldn't take my eyes off of him, but I heard Meek starting to pray again, because it was clear that whatever was happening to his face was unnatural. His face was contorted in a way that no human's face could be contorted, and at this point he started hopping in place like his feet were pogo sticks. He wasn't jumping super high, it was just as if he couldn't contain his energy, and he was releasing his energy by hopping in place. And again, he was still having no reaction to Meek's incantation, and I just stood there ready to run, ready for this thing to charge me. But I had to wait for Meek to finish because he was extremely focused. And then once Meek finished and this man was still hopping there, happy as ever, Meek decided to question him. So he confronted the man and he asked him straight to his face, demanding an answer. If you aren't a djinn, what are you? And the man simply replied, free, before he started to hop backwards as if he was building momentum for something. And it turns out that he was building momentum to start backflipping. After about 4 hops, he started backflipping away from us into some dense foliage. It was as if he was an Olympic level gymnast with unlimited stamina. And I realized in that moment why he took 2 steps to the side. It was just so he didn't backflip into the door. I've never seen somebody tumble like that in such a natural cadence. He was backflipping as if it was as easy as walking until he completely disappeared into the woods. And Meek and I had to take a moment to stand there in disbelief at what we just saw. This man backflipped for over 100 yards straight, and from my knowledge, I don't think that's humanly possible. He didn't slow down or look like he was fatiguing, his form didn't break down, he just backflipped until he was gone. And it was so odd because when he approached us, he looked kind of feeble. He didn't have great posture, he didn't have much muscle mass, and he didn't look particularly athletic. But once we got through that door, once we were out here, it was as if his body sprang to life. In just a few moments, he became incredibly limber and dynamically athletic. Part of me wanted to talk about what just happened, but the main issue here was that we were in the middle of nowhere. I scanned around and there was no trail anywhere, so survival immediately goes to the top priority. I did a 360 to take in all of our surroundings, but once I got all the way around, the door that we got here in completely disappeared. So now I have to deal with the realization that there's no way back to wherever we just were, because what if this wasn't the right place? But it was the only thing I was kind of optimistic about because the terrain looked very similar and the weather was very similar. The only thing that was different was that there weren't many flowers like there were when we entered the first door, but we could easily just be in a different portion of Mount Rainier National Park. The weather was similar, the grass was a similar shade of green, the mountains had similar peaks. The smiling man might have actually taken us through the right door, but we couldn't be sure until we got back to actual civilization. So Meek and I agreed to just start hiking in the direction that was downhill because it would be easier to start hiking. We didn't want to immediately jump to conclusions that we were in the middle of nowhere in an incredibly dangerous situation because we didn't want to start panicking. It wouldn't benefit us in any way, but I would be lying to you if I told you that if we hiked for more than 2 hours and we didn't see a structure or a sign in that time, I wouldn't start panicking. The reality is that there's no telling where that door left us. And I could tell Meek was having internal struggles with the fact that his incantation didn't work on that man twice. Because with what he was capable of and the way his face contorted, we were certain that he was not human. Because when you chalk everything up to just being a djinn and your solution for djinns didn't work, you start to question everything. I didn't think he should start questioning everything. I didn't think he should start questioning his religion. I've been around things like this before, and I've encountered this door before. I interacted with the mimic. I was in the vicinity of something that would be commonly described as a Wendigo, even though I never saw it. The ranger from Michigan told me that he thought that they were all demons. But when I researched the Wendigo after people told me that that's probably what it was, the results were that it was probably just a human that was cursed because they committed the act of cannibalism. And if I'm being honest with you, the mimic felt like some type of parasite to me. It didn't feel like a human or like an animal or like a demon. It reminded me of a leech or a parasite just desperate to survive. And it was just capable of kind of mimicking personalities. I think djinn exist, but I don't think that everything in these national parks can be chalked up to djinn. And I think that became abundantly clear to Meek after watching that man's face contort and the way he backflipped away. But I could tell that it definitely made Meek feel way less confident and way less safe. We hiked for about about 45 minutes, and every 5 minutes that passed, I got more and more anxious because I wasn't seeing any sign of civilization. But once we got to the hour-and-a-half mark, we saw a little herd of sheep, and as we got closer to this little herd of sheep, I could see that the sheep had tags, and if those sheep have tags, that means they have a shepherd, and if there's a shepherd, there's either some type of farm or some type of town, and we both got to breathe a sigh of relief because we knew we weren't that far away from civilization. Then after another 15 minutes of walking, we saw in the distance what seemed to be a small mountain town. There had to have only been about 2,000 people living there tops. Most of the buildings that were in the area had been built with some type of brick, and they actually looked kind of medieval to me, similar to what you would see in Game of Thrones. But I just figured this town probably just has really old architecture. So we approach the town and we go looking for somebody, anybody that could tell us where we were. And I was just hoping that we weren't so far away from Mount Rainier that it would be more than a day's trip back to where we were before. And we see a man working outside of what I could only imagine was his house. It was a modest house, but it was very well kept. And the man looked like he was just doing a good day's work. So we approach him as friendly as we possibly could. But when he looked up at us, I could tell that he was a bit concerned because we were clearly strangers to him and we were dressed very differently than him. Not to mention he was a bit older and smaller in stature, and Meek and I definitely were looking scared and weathered, plus we're pretty large. We both tried to be very respectful and kind in our greeting and just tried to introduce ourselves to him. And our only intentions were to find out where we were and maybe get some type of guidance or help. But when we started talking, he was looking at us very confused. And I realized after about 2 sentences that this guy clearly didn't speak English. And he was confused and surprised that we were trying to speak English to him. Meek recognized that as well, so he immediately started speaking Spanish. The man didn't look particularly Hispanic, but he was 10 and he had dark features. And he didn't seem African American or Indian. So I felt like Spanish was probably his best bet to try to communicate with this man. But Spanish didn't seem to work either. He seemed just as confused, so Meek pivoted to Turkish. I don't think I mentioned this, but Meek studies language and he speaks about 5 fluently. And he speaks 7 kinda good. And then he could also recognize just about any language by the roots of the words, and he kind of knows the origin of where the person is probably from. So he tried Turkish, but the man still looked confused. So he gave Bosnian a try and still nothing. He threw Arabic at him, it fell flat, and then in a last-ditch effort, he threw some greetings that he would use during his time in Thailand to see if the guy had an Asian background. But nothing seemed to stick, so we kind of signaled to the guy, hey, you talk so we could see what you're speaking. But I had never heard a language like that. Whatever he was speaking had such an odd cadence, and I'd never heard anything like it before. But I don't study language, I probably shouldn't know. So I turned my attention to Meek and I'm like, what do you think this guy's speaking? But Meek looked at me and I heard something that I thought that I would never hear him say, because I was under the impression that this dude knew everything about language. And Meek said, bro, I've never heard anything like that. I can't even catch a word. I have no idea what he's speaking or any type of dialect that could be connected to what he's speaking. So my brain jumps to the worst conclusion possible. That door must have left us in a different dimension, because I didn't think we could find ourselves in any place in this world where Meek wouldn't at least know what the root language was. And he was completely clueless to what this man was saying and what language he was speaking. And I could tell Meek wasn't comfortable with this realization either, so I took over the one-sided conversation. And I just did a hand gesture pretending to put food into my mouth while I was holding up dollar bills. And I even threw in some chewing gestures to really punch what I was trying to say home. I was just trying to say, we're trying to buy food, because I thought the best thing that we could do in this situation was find some kind of restaurant or pub or bakery, just any type of gathering place. So hopefully we could find somebody that speaks English or any of the other various languages that Meek speaks. The man clearly understood what I was trying to get across to him, so he just waved to us for us to follow him. We stayed quiet during that time where we were following this guy to wherever they sell food, and my mind was just juggling so many things. The possibility of a dimension switch, and also the possibility that the smiling man was capable of something horrible and we let him out. But I wasn't ready to verbalize that to Meek in that moment. So we follow this man for about 5 minutes and we do our best to seem nice and just wave at passerbyers, because everybody in the area seems to be looking at us in a skeptical manner. So we just want to show like, hey, we mean no harm. I know we stick out like a sore thumb, but we're just trying to be nice. And eventually we get to a building that looked to me like an old pub or tavern, or where you would order a meat pie and take a bath after a 2-week quest on your horse in medieval times. And they were clearly cooking food in there because it smelled amazing from the outside. And once we stepped into this restaurant type thing, the man that brought us there dismissed himself and left. So we turned our attention to find whoever the next person that we were going to interact with was. So we seated ourselves at a small table near what seemed to be the bar or the serving counter. And this place was completely full of a bunch of people, all speaking that same language that we couldn't understand. And when the waitress arrived at our table, Meek tried to communicate with her in multiple different languages to no avail again. And at that point, I reverted to the technique that worked on the man prior, and I made my eating gestures and I held up money to show to her that we were hungry. We tried to communicate what we could possibly want to eat, which was a hearty meal, but she couldn't tell what we were saying. So I just started signaling to her, just kind of pointing at her to make a decision and bring us anything. We're just hungry. She understood what I was trying to say, and she gave us a gesture signaling that she was just going to bring us food and that she was going to feed us properly. She seemed very sweet, and I trusted that she was going to bring us something tasty. And after she left, I knew that we were going to have a couple minutes to talk, so me and Meek started a very serious discussion. So we started to talk about what just happened and what we just let loose. Clearly, nobody around us spoke English, so it didn't matter how loud we spoke. Nobody was going to understand us and think we were crazy. So I just started blurting out descriptive details about the horrible thing that we just went through and how bizarre it was, and basically venting to my friend how scared I was. And after I finished venting to Meek, he did give me a sincere apology, which I felt like I deserved. But then he still defended his stance a little bit, saying that whatever the smiling man was didn't seem evil or aggressive, and it didn't react to my incantation, so I'm not really worried about it. I'm just worried about getting you home. He might have not been worried about it, but I was. I've seen what these things can do before. And just as I was about to express those concerns with him, the waitress arrived back to the table with 2 plates of food. She placed the plates down in front of us, and at that point, I was convinced that we were in a different dimension. One of the plates just looked like your everyday charcuterie board. Sliced sausages with cold cuts, some cheeses, some jams, but the other one was a cast iron pan filled with snails. Don't get me wrong, it smelled fantastic, but where in the mountains of Washington are people serving escargot? Neither of us are picky eaters, and I've had escargot before, so we just started eating, and to be honest, the snails were amazing. The charcuterie board was great too, but we weren't there to talk about cuisine. We didn't know where we were, and we didn't know what we released, so we went right back to talking about that. We finished up our food, and when it was time to pay, I handed the woman 2 $20 bills, because I figured that it would cover whatever it was and she would just come back with the appropriate change, or she would keep it and she would get a generous tip. But she was looking at my money as if it had no value here, and I realized in that moment that we were either in a different dimension or at least a different country. And this lady was really sweet initially, but this kind of ticked her off because there was a language barrier and she wasn't going to get her money. So a scene started brewing. She started getting frustrated until a man approached the table to de-escalate the situation. And the man just came up and stood there in between the waitress and ourselves and just said, "They don't accept dollars," and that thing wasn't friendly. And he directed the first half of the sentence about the dollars towards me, and the second half of the sentence about that thing not being friendly towards Meek, as if this man was listening in on our conversation this entire time. He paid for our meal in whatever currency they accepted, and he asked us to follow him. And he was the first person to speak English here. He wasn't overly friendly like the smiling man that we met before. Not to mention, he spoke with his mouth, not telepathically. So I wanted to hear what this guy had to say. So we quickly follow him out of this tavern, and I get a better look at him. He's an African-American man with a short beard, and he's wearing clothes very similar to the other villagers here. He looked a bit rugged and weathered, and if he had walked by us in this little town, I never would have known that he was American. So right away, I asked him, "Where are we?" But he immediately countered the question with, "What direction did it go?" So I just try to answer him as fast as I can so he could get on with answering my question, and I just point in the direction that the smiling man backflipped towards. And this guy just turned around and started walking in that direction without saying anything. There was no chance we were letting this guy leave us behind, so we briskly started walking to catch up. I was about to start repeating myself, but he started answering my question before I even had the chance to. But before he started his answer, he asked me, "Where do you think you are?" I had no idea where we were, so I just said, "Well, we're supposed to be at Mount Rainier National Park." And he replied, "Yet you're in the Pyrenees Mountains in between France and Spain." And at that moment, Meek let out an audible sigh of realization. And he goes, "Oh, they were speaking Basque. That's why I couldn't understand." So I shot Meek a look to further explain what he meant. And he explains that Basque is an ancient language from this region that isn't related to any other language, and nobody knows where it originates from. He said it's not related to any other language or structured like any other language. And I've never heard anybody speak it in person, so I wasn't able to pick it up. As interesting as that fun fact was, I was still overwhelmed with the fact that we were in a mountain range in between Spain and France when I woke up in Washington this morning. And the only relief that I felt was at least we aren't in a different dimension. We were in France. Snails. Makes sense. So I turned my attention back towards our new friend and I asked him, "How did you know what happened to us, and what's your name, by the way?" He was clearly on a mission, but he wasn't rude or dismissive. He kept up the pace of his brisk walk, but he replied, "My name's James, and it's my job to get that thing back through that door." And I immediately follow up with, "What was that thing?" And he replied very, very vaguely, "It's hard to explain." And I gave him immediate pushback because I wasn't dealing with that type of vague answer. So I said something that revealed that I knew something about what was going on here, that I had knowledge about this situation. So I ask, was that some type of mimic? Just to make it seem like I'm in the know and you wouldn't have as hard of a time explaining it to me as you think you would. And he looked at me funny and he said, how do you know about mimics? And I push back again and I just go, it's hard to explain. And he understood what I was trying to say. I was trying to tell him like, yo, we speak the same language. I'm not gonna not believe you. If he tells me what's happening and what this thing is, he's not gonna be met with pushback. He's gonna be met with somebody who's open-minded and willing to make a plan to help. So James took a large breath before he said, well, different cultures call them different things. That one in particular that you met, I call Henry. I probably shouldn't be on first name basis with him because at the end of the day, I know that he's not actually my friend. But that one is just so friendly and likable. He was right about how friendly the smiling man was, but I guess I should refer to him as Henry now that I know his name. But I was still curious about what he referred to Henry as, so I asked, and James replied very casually. He just said, we categorize him as something that you would probably consider a vampire. This might come off as stupid, but I bet you were thinking the same thing. We met Henry in the daylight. He couldn't be a vampire. At least that's the #1 rule that we know about vampires. So I bring that inconsistency to James' attention, and this man replies, yeah, that's a common misconception. Most people think vampires don't come out during the day because they're allergic to sunlight. The reality is that they're constantly out during the day, but they're very friendly and considerate, even witty and likable. But at night, they have absolutely no control over their compulsions. They'll hunt for sport with zero empathy, but it's as if they forget what they do during the night while they're in the state that they are during the day. I'm not even convinced that Henry knows what he actually is and what he actually does at night. And I let him know that from my perspective, I thought that Henry definitely knew what he actually was. Because when we let him out of that door, he started grinning this horrible grin and bragged about being free before fleeing. And I interpreted that as he was free to do what he wants to do even during the day, and that's hunt for sport. And James nodded his head, taking what I said into consideration, because he wasn't completely positive that Henry was inherently good during the day. But he just replied, I don't know, Henry might have just been happy to be back in the parks. We've had him locked away for a while now, and he has to be invited through a door to come back through. He actually can't even enter a home without being invited in, and it's a consistency that's shared with all the ones like him that I've noticed. Meek had been quiet for a while now, and when I looked at him, I could tell that he was deep in thought. And finally, he coughed up his thoughts, and he just said, if that thing was evil like you said it was, my incantation should have worked. And James looked at Meek funny, because Meek doesn't look like the type of person that would say something like that. Meek looks more like somebody that would say something along the lines of, hey, where's my battle axe? Let's go bludgeon that thing. Yet he's talking about incantations. And before James had the chance to reply, Meek followed up with, if that thing is a vampire like you say, what are the children with the black eyes? And James whipped his head around and asked us both immediately, you saw the children with the black eyes, how did you get away from them? And Meek proudly answered because he caught the look that James threw at him previously. And he proudly said, they fled after my incantation, it worked on them. At this point, James seemed very interested and he asked Meek to recite the incantation that he used, because apparently he had never been able to find a solution for those children. They were a constant nuisance with no weakness other than their size. And he asked me what happened to verify, and I just told him the truth. They seemed to be visibly distraught while Meek was speaking, and they ran away like they were scared once he finished. James seemed very impressed, so he asked what happened when he tried the same thing on Henry. And Meek said, Henry encouraged me to finish it so he could prove to us that he wasn't a threat. And I could tell that Meek was implying that a vampire was also lumped into the jinn category. And James verified what I was trying to get across to Meek this whole time. And he simply said, I wish we could put everything in these parks under one umbrella and just have one solution for every single one of them. That would make my job way easier. But unfortunately, there's a wide variety of creatures that we have to deal with. And they all seem to have unique origins, unique abilities, unique weaknesses, and we study different cultures and different folklore to learn their weaknesses. Because over time, certain civilizations have learned different tools to handle certain ones. And clearly, your culture had the solution to the black-eyed children. I guess they were jinn this whole time. I didn't know that. I should probably brush up on my Arabic before I run into them again. This back and forth between them made me start to think about all of the lore of all of the mythical creatures, folklore, cryptids, and superstitions from all of the cultures. And I was just asking myself, do all of them have a sliver of truth? But before we got to continue the conversation, James pointed towards a large tree in the distance, and he said, we're gonna have to use that one. And I didn't know what he meant until we got a little bit closer, and he encouraged me to look towards the top of the tree. And I was able to see shades of red hidden near the trunk past the leaves. And there was a red door about 40 feet up this tree balancing on a branch. It made absolutely no sense, and if you weren't looking for it, you never would have seen it. And apparently that's the one that we're gonna use. So I'm assuming we're gonna have to climb this tree to get back through that door. And he was going to escort us back to Mount Rainier, but I was very, very wrong. We were gonna use this door as a trap for Henry, and Meek and I were gonna be the bait for the trap. It was coming up on sundown, and James laid out the game plan. And he said right now it's still daylight, so Henry's harmless. He might be scaring people if they're making their way through these woods, but he's just celebrating his freedom. He's not going to harm anyone. And if he saw us right now, he would probably avoid us because he recognizes you guys. And he sure as hell would recognize me, but once the sun goes down, he's going to lose every ounce of control that he has. And there's no difference between you, me, and any poor soul that made the mistake of taking a walk tonight. He doesn't even realize it's me at night, and I've known him for years. Everyone's fair game, and you guys have seen the way he moves. If we give him time, if we even give him one night out here by himself, he's going to kill as many people as he can get to. But if he sees us first, he'll blindly chase us back through that door. And my first thought was, what are we going to do when we get back through that door? Because it's just going to be us and him and whatever's in that door dimension. But instead of expressing that concern, I asked the question, what exactly is Henry capable of other than impressive gymnastics? And James laughed while he replied something horrible. He said, I've seen Henry disembowel a deer with one bite. You saw how wide his smile was, didn't you? Now imagine he opens that mouth and he has rows of shark-like teeth. I think that's the best way to describe it. We're not dealing with Edward Cullen, boys. Don't let Henry bite you. You'll lose a limb. So the plan was, the second the sun goes down, we make as much noise as possible to draw Henry in. And once we see him and he sees us, we run towards the tree, we climb the tree, we go through the door, and he follows us through it. And don't worry, the plan got even better. We realized that the best bet was to have only the fastest climbers stay down there as bait, so we didn't get in each other's way as we were climbing. Go ahead and take a wild guess at who the fastest climber was. Let me help. James was in his mid-40s, and Meek is well over 200 pounds. It was me. Therefore, I was the best bait. I agreed to do it, but I told James that the second I saw him and he saw me, I was running to get to that door. I was not waiting. I wanted as big of a lead as I could possibly have. And if he didn't follow me, it wasn't my fault. I want a big head start. James didn't seem upset with that at all. He understood. And all he said was, all he has to do is see you for a split second and he won't be able to stop pursuing you. A split second is enough. The man is ravenous at night. It's like he has tunnel vision and his only focus is his next prey. And he doesn't stop until he catches it. He doesn't divert his attention. I don't know if this was comforting or horrifying, but I guess knowing that I was allowed to run the moment that I saw him did make me feel a little bit better. Because even though he was backflipping and it was super impressive and agile, I still felt like I could sprint faster than he could backflip. And it's not like he could backflip up a tree, so I genuinely felt that I could beat him to that door, especially with a large head start. So now the sun is going down and James and Meek very slowly climb themselves to that door. And I'm just standing in this field surrounded by trees in the middle of the Pyrenees Mountains. I don't know if I'm in France or Spain, but it doesn't really matter because after about a minute and a half of me shouting loudly, I saw Henry backflipping towards me. And I just wanted to make sure that he saw me, so I shouted one more time directly at him, hey, and I saw him lock in on me. He stopped momentarily, locked his beady little eyes on me, and I saw his grin open slightly. And even though he was far away, I could see that James was not lying about the rows of teeth inside of his mouth. He didn't say anything to me, into my head, and he didn't make a sound. He just started sprinting forward for about 3 steps before he launched himself into a cartwheel. I started running towards the tree, but I took one last glimpse back before I started climbing. I had about a 100-yard head start on him, but apparently he cartwheels much faster than he backflips, and I didn't know he was capable of that, and James failed to mention it. So Henry was closing in on me quicker than I thought he would. So I'm desperately climbing this tree as fast as humanly possible, and I get about halfway up when I hear Henry get to the base of the tree, and I make the mistake of looking down to see what he looks like down there, and I just see that horrible face honing in on me like I'm a toy that he can't wait to play with. He's so excited that he's missing branches and slipping, which was kind of good for me in the moment, and I was clearly the better, more responsible climber, but his ravenous energy was starting to fluster me, so I was slipping and missing branches too. So I made the conscious decision to not look down again and just focus on one branch at a time. So I just tried to zone out the sound of branches being ripped off underneath me, but everything in me was expecting one of my feet to just get chomped off at any moment. But finally I reached the base of the door frame, and I don't know why I thought there was going to be a free fall on the other side. I expected that the door on the other side to be also located at the top of a tree, but it was just flat ground once I reached it, so I had to army crawl through it. And I wish they would have closed it behind me, but that wasn't the game plan. So I scramble to my feet, I turn around, and I make eye contact with the other guys. And James is standing there ready to close the door behind Henry once he came through. And everybody just seemed ready for whatever altercation was about to happen. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, Henry finally made his way to the base of the door, and his eyes looked as eager as ever to disembowel me like he did to that deer. He crawled in, stood up, took about 2 steps, and then James slammed the door behind him, so at least he was trapped. He didn't even look back at James, he was just honed in on me. But before he could leap into action and start pursuing me again, Meek took the opportunity to rush Henry from behind and lock his hands around his waist. We had no idea what Henry was capable of other than his agility and his bite force, so Meek was taking a major risk in attempting to grapple him. But as soon as Meek locked his hands around Henry's waist, I knew that Henry was going for a ride. I've watched Meek train and compete hundreds of times, and like I mentioned, he's a world-class wrestler grappler, and when he gets a hold of somebody who isn't capable of defending themselves or matching his strength, it looks like an adult playing with a child with how easily he maneuvers their body and ragdolls them. And Henry clearly didn't have otherworldly strength in the same way he had otherworldly agility, and Meek swiftly gut-wrenched him and pressed his ear to Henry's back so he couldn't reach back to grab him, and he took 2 small steps so his feet were directly in between Henry's feet and his hips were directly under Henry's, and Meek popped his hips and lifted Henry off the ground with the body lock that he had around his waist. And once Henry was at the highest height that Meek could lift him, Meek lifted one of his legs and tapped Henry's knee with his knee as he was turning his torso and tilting him midair. This type of throw is called a knee tap in wrestling. A tap of a leg seems like it would be ineffective, but once somebody is lifted in the air, all it takes is a light tap for their center of gravity to tilt completely. So with just the tap of a knee, Henry was completely horizontal mid-air, and now Meek had shifted all of his weight towards the ground, ready to drop Henry on his shoulder and neck with vicious velocity and force. And that's exactly what he did, but I was astonished with the fact that it didn't seem to do anything to Henry. This would concuss any individual in the world, but it didn't stop him from viciously trying to pursue me and honing in on me with his beady eyes. But at least he was grounded. He wasn't even paying attention to what Meek was doing to him, and luckily, when somebody isn't paying attention or trying to defend your grappling whatsoever, it's rather easy to restrain them. And that's exactly what Meek did. As Henry was trying to get up, Meek allowed him to start crawling while he still had his arms locked around his waist, which allowed Meek to easily take Henry's back and start choking him. So Meek was now on Henry's back with both of his legs wrapped around Henry's waist and both of his arms wrapped around Henry's neck, with a perfectly cinched rear naked choke, squeezing as if he was trying to get the last bit of toothpaste out of the tube. Meek rolled to his back, so Henry was technically on top of him, but Henry wasn't facing him. Meek was on his back, so there was nothing Henry could do but frantically reach towards me and get choked. And this sounds like everything is going great, but the only issue was that Henry didn't seem to be affected by this choke. If you aren't aware, it should only take about 6 seconds for somebody to black out completely while you're choking them, if you're doing it correctly and efficiently. But as 10 seconds passed and then 20 seconds passed, I realized that Henry wasn't even aware that he was being choked. Nothing was happening. It literally had no effect on him. He was as ravenous as ever. He was still just in this hunting frenzy where nothing mattered but his next victim. And clearly he doesn't have the same anatomy as every other human because he wasn't going out like any other human would. And after about 30 seconds, I see Meek's arms are starting to shake because you could only squeeze that hard for so long. And I have no idea how I'm supposed to help Meek, so I look towards James, and James has his back towards the whole situation, waving his arms over his head as if he's calling to somebody in the distance. I was initially upset because Meek is risking his life holding on to this thing, and he isn't even paying attention until I could see what he's waving to, and it looks like backup. And I see a man running towards us with something in his hand. And as he's running towards us, it seems like he's holding some type of dagger by the size of it, but it has some type of ribbon or something hanging from each side as he's running. And as this man is closing in on us, he shouts to James and I to restrain his arms. So I go for Henry's left arm and James goes for Henry's right arm. And at that point, Henry had his mouth wide open, snapping at both of our faces as if he was a rabid dog on a leash. And after the 5th snap 2 inches from my face, finally the new guy takes whatever he had in his hand and jams it straight into Henry's mouth. And right away I see that Henry has an adverse reaction to whatever it is. He tried to bite down on it and it clearly hurt him. And the new guy maneuvered his way around to the other side, and I could see that he was taking the ribbons that I can now see are leather straps and tying a knot behind the back of Henry's head. He put a metal bar of some kind into Henry's mouth so he couldn't bite down and tied it behind his head like a gag. And as I'm looking closer at the bar, I realize that it looks like an old antique cross that has the smaller parts of the cross cracked off, which made it look like a dagger or a pipe in the distance. And once he had it tied behind the back of Henry's head, he asked Meek if he could roll him over onto his stomach so we could efficiently bind his hands behind his back. Meek managed to do it with Henry violently flailing, but with all of us together with control of his hands already, we managed to do it and we got his hands bound together. And once his hands were restrained and he was no longer able to bite down because of the bar in his mouth, it was as if he came to his senses, and I immediately heard his voice in my head, and he just said, said very apologetically, "I'm so sorry about that, gentleman. You know how I get at night. This is so embarrassing." So we all slowly remove our weight from Henry's back and we help him to his feet. I was a bit skeptical, but it seemed like James was sure that this was okay. So I get to my feet and I ask the group what everybody's thinking. I turn my attention to the new guy and I go, "What'd you put in his mouth?" And as I was finishing my sentence, I realized that this was the first time that I got a look at the new guy's face. He was a Caucasian man with a full beard and a stern look in his eyes. I didn't recognize the beard, but I've never forgotten those eyes. And I was looking at the ranger, the one that sacrificed himself in Michigan. And it was as if he had the same moment of recognition, recognizing who I was. And he slapped me on the shoulder and goes, "You haven't learned your lesson, huh?" Then he slaps James on his shoulder and he goes, "This is one of the kids that I told you about. This is the dipshit that touched the stairs." And I realized that James was the ranger's best friend that sacrificed himself through the door a few months before this ranger did the same thing. He found his friend in here and they were still doing their duty as National Park Rangers. And then James asked me, "Where's that other kid? What was his name? Sam?" And I was about to reply with what I knew about Sam's whereabouts. He was at Banff National Park this weekend. But before I had the chance to let them know, we heard a door slam open in the distance and we saw a man stumbling and falling through it. The man fell to his chest and then started crawling before he could get back to his 2 feet. But once he did, he started running and sprinting again. He was clearly running from something. And once he picked his head up, once he got into a full sprint and he was about 20 yards closer, we were all frozen staring at him. But once he was close enough, I realized who it was. It was Sam, and he was yelling, "Run." At the exact same moment that Sam came barging through the door, it seemed as if some white material covered the inside of the door. It looked as if somebody pressed a large mattress against the other side or plugged it with a large marshmallow. Sam couldn't see it be plugged behind him because he was desperately running in fear. But once whatever plugged the door behind him finished plugging it, all of us were kind of standing there with a little bit of skepticism, kind of wondering, what is he running from? Because he's running and yelling and acting totally frantic, but there's nothing behind him. And naturally, none of us wanted to continue our conversation until he finished running up to the group. But he tripped and fell while he was still about 10 feet away from us, so we decided to all walk over to him because we had just got finished with a horrific situation ourselves, but our adrenaline had passed after we finished restraining Henry. So it felt like our group didn't have the energy to meet Sam at his level. We were already completely drained by our situation, and it was especially hard to meet him at his level when something so anticlimactic happened. The door just got plugged by something. But either way, we're gonna approach our frantic, desperate friend with comfort and support. So we get up to him and he's desperately climbing up our pants and our shirts, saying things like, "He's gone, I don't know where he went, I don't know where it took him." And we're just trying to calm him down, trying to get a clearer explanation about why he just busted through that door. And Sam realized that he was acting a little bit incoherent, so he took a couple moments to compose himself and take a few deep breaths before gathering himself and standing up and giving us a full explanation. And right before Sam was about to start, the ranger butt in to say, "Hey, just start from the beginning," because he could tell that Sam was all over the place and couldn't figure out where to start. And even though he managed to calm himself down a little bit, he might start jumping around in his story and it might be hard to follow. But it's best for us to know his entire story so we could help him efficiently. So after a couple moments of pacing back and forth, clearly trying to retrace his own steps, finding out the best place to start, he finally said, "I was in Banff National Park with a very good friend of mine from the hospital. I met him during my residency. His name is Bruce, and he's an extremely high-level hematologist. We were celebrating a breakthrough that he made last week by staying at the Fairmont Hotel in Banff National Park, and our goal this weekend was to summit Cascade Mountain. Bruce had just made an incredible breakthrough that is probably going to save a lot of lives. People with blood disorders and autoimmune diseases will be able to live normal lives because of him." But he was so excited and filled with energy about his breakthrough that he wouldn't listen to me. He's been high on life this whole week, and he was just willing to take risks even when I told him to not go on it. I told him not to touch that thing, but he did anyway. My initial thought was that some type of staircase must have presented itself to Sam and Bruce, and then Bruce ran up them just like I did when me and Sam were in Michigan. But I needed to continue to listen to get confirmation, so Sam continued, and he said everything was going great all day. Nothing was weird, nobody was acting strange, the weather was great, and we were having such an amazing time. We were closing in on the peak of Cascade Mountain, and that's when we saw it. We saw a swing hanging from this weird gnarled tree, and we probably only had about 10 minutes minutes left of our hike to finish this summit when this swing presented itself. And Bruce is just so optimistic that he thought it was so cool. He thought it was interesting that somebody would go to the extent of putting a swing at the top of a mountain for strangers to enjoy. He just appreciated that there are people in this world that would leave a gift like that for other hikers summiting this mountain. But he was overly optimistic. I knew what it really was. Sam gestured towards the ranger and then he continued talking. He said, "It stuck with me when you mentioned the swings." And then Sam gestured towards me and he goes, "Bro, they had the same feeling as the stairs." And I swear, guys, it's not a PTSD thing. I'm not scared of inanimate objects. You could feel it when you see them. It feels like somebody rings a bell in your head. They just become the center of your focus, and no matter how hard you try to look away, it's like your eyes are keyframed on them. They don't feel like an inanimate object. They feel like a dangerous stranger. They feel like they're taunting you. I've walked past 1,000 swings since we saw the stairs, and not one of those swings made me feel the way that this swing made me feel. It was just perfect, and I couldn't keep Bruce off of it. He had just been so energetic since his breakthrough that he couldn't see anything through the lens of pessimism. But as much as I pleaded with him and tried to show him that I was scared of this thing, he couldn't wipe his smile off his face, and he just went and hopped on it. He just ran up to it, hopped on it, and started kicking his legs until he was swinging as high as the swing could swing. I was getting borderline nauseous watching him do it, and I was wondering why he wasn't seeing the pure panic on my face. And I think he just wanted me to cheer up and not be scared. So he was trying to show me that there was nothing to be scared of. But after his 10th or 15th swing, he didn't come down. Every time he would swing backwards, I wouldn't be able to see him for a split second at the top of the backswing because he would be covered by leaves and foliage and he'd just be slightly out of sight. And I didn't think anything of it until he went out of sight and an empty swing started coming back. He was just gone. But that wasn't even the weirdest part about the whole thing. Once the swing was empty, it was as if it was locking itself back into a neutral position, and it just wanted to go back to a prone position, hanging perfectly at the bottom. Because as it was coming down, it wasn't moving as if it was an empty swing kind of flailing around. And it didn't slow down because there was no mass at the end of it. You would think that if it was an empty swing, it wouldn't swing back to neutral as fast. It seemed to have swung down into its base position faster than when Bruce was on it. And once it got there, it was as if it hit an invisible barrier and became completely still in its neutral position almost instantaneously. And when this swing hit this invisible barrier, it was like somebody banged on a drum. The swing became motionless, but it let off this massive pulse, and this pulse started to shake the whole mountain. But before I was able to take in what just happened, all I could see is a large amount of white snow plummeting towards me, a full-scale avalanche. So the only thing that I could do was turn around and start sprinting down trail, and I could see that there was already snow covering the path that I was trying to go down. So my only option was to either jump off the cliff or scale down the cliffside. But the cliffside was hundreds of feet, so my only option was to jump and plummet to my death or run through that red door that randomly presented itself right in this moment that I watched him walk through just a couple years ago. And I figured in that moment that I'm not getting out of this alive either way, so I might as well try the red door. And once I was through it, I saw you guys. We all realized in that moment that this had just happened, and there wasn't a long lead up of bad events that accumulated into this state that he was in. He literally just experienced this trauma. All of this happened, his friend disappearing, him running for his life from an avalanche, making the decision to go through this door that he thought is probably death, and then seeing us on the other end of it happened in the last 3 minutes. And now he's standing here in this bizarre dimension filled with red doors, looking at 2 of his best friends and 2 people that he presumed to be dead. And one of those men that he presumed to be dead was standing next to a man that had a metal bar in his mouth with his hands bound behind his back in custody. And when I realized what this must feel like from Sam's point of view, I took it upon myself to reassure him that, dude, you are not dead. Because from going from such a heightened situation, running for your life and going through a door that you think is most likely doom, and then seeing a group of people that you personally know waiting for you on the other side of that door, I can only assume that he's probably battling very aggressive intrusive thoughts that he had just passed on to the afterlife, and he's trying to get a bearing on his surroundings in this reality. So I speak up and say, trying to connect with him a little bit, a door presented itself to Meek and I earlier today. I know all of this around us seems bizarre and crazy, crazy, but I promise it's really us and you're safe now. At least safer than you were a couple minutes ago. We definitely have a lot to catch up on, but I promise it's really us. And I could see in Sam's face that he really needed to hear that, because I could only imagine how horrible these last few minutes must have been for him. But before we had the chance to continue talking, the ranger just starts going straight towards the door that Sam had just came through. So we all follow him, and when we get up to it, I realize that this isn't a large mattress or a massive marshmallow plugging this door. It was exactly what Sam said it was. It was just pure snow. And the ranger was just inspecting it and kicking at it and trying to chip away at it, and I could only assume that he was attempting to do that to see how deep it was, to see if we could dig through it. And Sam must have assumed the same thing, because he immediately dismissed the ranger's efforts and was just like, dude, I wouldn't bother. The whole cliffside was coming down on me. That's got to be feet of snow. I would bet that it would take us weeks to dig through that. And then he took that opportunity to ask the ranger, where are we? A question that I could only assume was probably eating at him. And then he started to look around towards the group, ready to fire out other questions. One of them being, why does this guy have a metal gag in his mouth? And then he looked at the ranger, and then he looked back at James, and he proceeds to ask the ranger, is this the friend that you were telling us about? This was actually good to see. It wasn't overwhelming. Sam was actually trying to break down the situation and be realistic about it. He was trying to get a gauge at what was going on. He was trying to get a better idea about where everybody was at. But the ranger and James brush off Sam's questions and just start talking to each other right in front of us. But they clearly weren't including us in their discussion. And the ranger just said at James, are you going back to HQ or am I? And James replied, I think it's better that you take them back to Banff and I'll get the hooks from HQ. The ranger nodded his head and then turned his attention towards Henry and pointed at him and said, take that thing with you and lock him up. And James jokingly replied, that's why I said I'd go. I know you don't like spending time with Henry alone. Then he followed up by giving the ranger his 2 cents on what we should do. And he said, I think you should take the screaming tunnel, considering you have so many guys with you. You take the tunnel and I'll take the well. And the ranger just nods his head in agreement and goes, that's a good call, but be quick. We gotta get to him while he's still low. At this point, I have no option other than to cut these guys off, because what are they talking about? It's like they're speaking in code. What do you mean the hooks? What do you mean the screaming tunnel? What do you mean the well? And what do you even mean HQ? And most importantly, what do you mean get to him while he's still low? So I butt in trying to get clarity on even one of those questions, but the one that was glaringly obvious to me to try to draw attention to was, what's the screaming tunnel? And the ranger just brushed it off by saying, it's not as bad as it sounds, you've seen worse. Sam, Meek, and I did not love that answer. But James had already started walking away with Henry because he had his objective, and I guess talking time was over. And the ranger started walking in the opposite direction as if he knew exactly where he had to go. So all 3 of us just have to waddle after him like 3 baby ducks chasing their mom. We didn't attempt to cut him off from where he was going or try to get ahead of him. We knew that we were going to have to follow him regardless, so we might as well just let him lead the way and take this time in an attempt to catch up with each other. Sam and Meek are friends as well. They aren't just friends of mine that know each other through me. They have a genuine friendship. So they finally took the time to actually say hello to each other. In the circumstances, it was a little bit odd, but it was just a polite, hey Sam, hey Meek, followed up by Meek trying to lighten the mood by saying, you weren't lying about those stairs. This is bizarre. And then Sam turned his attention towards me to ask, what has he seen so far? I could tell he was trying to gauge how deep Meek was in on this. And I didn't know what else to say, but Meek just spiked a vampire on his head and choked it out. I was trying to convey that Meek was as deep as you could be on this, if not deeper than we've ever been. But Meek butted in and corrected me, saying, I tried to choke it. I wish I would have went for an arm. But I think if I tried, it would have got me with its mouth. Of course, Meek was critiquing his grappling performance against a supernatural creature, and he was just regretting that he should have went for an arm lock instead of going for a choke. There was no way that I couldn't find this a little bit funny. So we all had a chuckle, and Sam needed that moment of camaraderie, because Meek and I were coming off a win, but Sam was coming off a loss of a lifetime. I had successfully lured Henry back through the door, and Meek very successfully restrained him, so we were coming off a bit of a win. We were feeling optimistic, while Sam was coming off this massive loss. A good friend of his was just taken, and he knew nothing about any of this, and he was taken on the best week of his life, and Sam couldn't do anything to help him. And I saw that realization flood back into Sam's eyes after that little bit of banter, so I tried to reassure him that it seemed as if the Ranger and James had a plan, and they seemed to be implying that your friend is okay, at least for now. And then right after reassuring him that the Ranger had a plan, I remembered that his plan was to take us to to the screaming tunnel. I repeat, the screaming tunnel. And Sam could tell that I was ready to catch up to the ranger and start asking him a couple more questions. But before we went up there, Sam just wanted to make sure that he knew everything that he needed to know up to this point. So he simply asked me, am I all caught up with what happened on your end? He was absolutely not caught up with everything that happened on our end, but I really wanted to talk to the ranger. So I summed it up to, Meek walked through the door, I followed him. Apparently prayers work on black-eyed children, and that dude with the metal bar in his mouth that James left with is a telepathic vampire that goes on hunting sprees at night, but he's actually kind of charming if you get to know him. You would imagine that this statement would be followed by 100 questions, but Sam is so numb to this stuff at this point that he only asked one. All he said was, same vampire that Meek choked out? And I just replied, yup, and he nodded his head as if that was all he needed to know, and all three of us just started marching towards the ranger. We both understood that we were in a time crunch, and this wasn't the best time to demand all of the answers from the ranger. We just felt like we could be a bit more useful if we had the game plan. Even though internally I was very skeptical about the screaming tunnel, and I had planned to pry a little bit, but I allowed Sam to open up the conversation with the ranger. So we scurry up to him, and I could tell already that this ranger is ready to brush off our questions. But Sam worded his question in a way that got the ranger to entertain it. He just says, do we need to know anything before we get there, or do we just need to get there? And the ranger clearly appreciated that we were acknowledging that we didn't have time for thorough explanations. And it was as if he rewarded us by giving us a small, brief explanation. So the ranger starts talking as if he's giving an order and a quick briefing. He just goes, we do just need to get there, but the screaming tunnel isn't as bad as it sounds. You might see something you don't like, but it's mostly harmless. Well, it's harmless if we do it right. So just do it right, or at least let me do it right for us. That part was a little bit confusing, but he gave us a little bit of clarity after by saying, the doors aren't the only way to travel. The door that Sam came in is sealed until that snow melts, so we have to find another way back to Banff, and this is the most efficient way that I know. And to be fair, the ranger was doing a great job communicating. He's clearly come a long way from our time in Michigan, and even though he's painfully vague sometimes, at least this time we had a clouded idea of what we were headed into. We still had no idea why James didn't come with us, but I can only assume it was because he needed some type of tool. Not to mention showing up to Banff National Park with a man in a suit gagged by a rod, with his hands bound behind his back, tied to a makeshift leash, probably wasn't the best look. And we could all tell that the ranger was finished sharing after he told us that we're only about 5 minutes away from the door. And Meek and I tried to take that time to explain to Sam where exactly we were, and we basically relayed to him what Henry had told us about this place. But we did it quietly because we weren't positive that Henry had told us the entire truth, and we didn't want to bother the ranger by making him butt in because we're telling Sam false information. We just said, take this with a grain of salt, but apparently we're in some type of crossroads, and these doors go to all different national parks. We had told him that we had been through another one, and it looked similar to Mount Rainier on the other side, but that was just Henry tricking us. But it still was a national park, and we did get to go out the other side, so at least that part was true. And that was pretty much all we had for him, and at that point we had arrived at the door that the ranger was walking us to. The door was located on a small hill, but it wasn't standing upright on a small hill. It was lying almost flat on the hill. The hill had maybe a 20-degree slope, so the door almost looked like the door to a storm cellar. You know, the ones where you open it and there's like stairs right under it? But at this point, I stopped trying to anticipate what was going to be behind each door. I just had to accept it because it was never what I expected. So before the ranger opened the door, he gave us one more piece of advice. He said, take a deep breath, tuck your knees to your chest, and protect your head. I didn't even bother trying to connect those instructions with anything. I just noted them in my head and waited for him to open the door. And right when he did, the instructions that he gave us made sense. Right when he opened the door, the immediate area was engulfed with the sound of running water. We were standing directly at the foot of this cellar-like door, so you would assume that there was some type of water flowing directly under it, like some type of river or stream. But it looked as if there was a waterfall starting at the top of the door and then moving its way down to the base, which didn't make any sense because the door was lying almost flat, and flowing river water looks very different from falling water. And this water was clearly falling, but it was falling horizontally, which makes no sense. And as I was trying to make sense of what I was looking at, the ranger just says, don't hesitate, it's gonna be rough, but I'll see you out there. And at that same moment, he stepped on the bottom of the frame of the door, leaned forward until he was just about to fall, tucked his knees to his chest, covered his head, and disappeared through the veil of falling water. And now it was our turn. He said don't hesitate, so we didn't. Sam immediately stepped up first because he's used to these types of things in the army. That man will jump out of a plane if you tell him he has to. Not to mention it's his friend that we don't know on the other end of the door, so he has a little bit more motivation to take risks. And Sam does his absolute best to mimic the Ranger's cannonball-like action, and he disappears the exact same way. And I know that I have to go next, and I try my best to not hesitate because I know the longer I hesitate, the harder it's going to be to jump. I know that I just have to not think and hurl myself into this so it doesn't take me 5 minutes to take the leap, so I don't even put my second foot onto it. I just take one step, put my second foot over, tuck my knees, and I'm through it. And I was expecting it to feel as if I jumped into a body of water, that feeling of weightlessness that you get once you're submerged into like a pool, but it was nothing like that feeling. I definitely felt cold water, but it was more like it was being sprayed at me or poured onto me. And instead of feeling weightless, I felt like once I went through that door frame, I started free falling backwards. And I realized that I was free falling in the same direction that I felt like the water was flowing. The water was hitting me in the face and we were going in the same direction. I was plummeting to my back and I was holding my breath, but during this free falling feeling, I felt like there was pockets of air. And at one point I opened my eyes and I could see that there was a rock wall directly above me. But as soon as I noticed it, I made impact with what felt initially like concrete. But I guess when you free fall into a body of water, it does initially feel like concrete, because once I made that impact, I was then immediately submerged. It was the feeling that I was immediately expecting upon jumping through the door, but it came a full 5 seconds later after what felt like a free fall, and the impact to the water made me exhale a fair amount of air. So I was trying my best not to panic and just slowly exhale small amounts of oxygen, because I had to make this one breath last as long as possible. And whatever water was free falling with me was now forcing me deeper into the water, but it was also kind of pushing me away from where the impact and current of this free falling water was the strongest. I released from my cannonball position. I started feeling around for the bottom of whatever body of water this was. I just wanted to kick off of something to try to projectile myself to the surface, but I wasn't feeling any hard objects. I was just feeling a current moving me somewhere. So I opened my eyes and I didn't care how dirty the water was. I just needed to see something, but it was all just white bubbles from the free falling water above. But I caught one small glimpse of where the light was coming from, so at least I knew which way was up. But I had no idea how deep I was in the water and my chest was already burning. So I was reaching around with my hands and feet until I finally felt a rock with my right hand. So I swiveled my entire body to get all 4 limbs on what felt like some kind of rock wall or some kind of underwater boulder. And as quickly as I could, I got both of my feet onto it and launched myself towards what I believed was the surface. And I was just hoping and praying in my head that I was swimming in the right direction and not swimming deeper and deeper to the bottom of whatever body of water this was. And finally, with what felt like my last millisecond of oxygen, I broke the surface of the water and I was able to get a taste of that sweet, sweet air. And only upon getting to the surface of the water did I realize how cold this water was. When you can't breathe, nothing else matters, but when you can, you're able to think about other factors of your situation. And I knew right then that I couldn't stay in this water for more than 5 minutes. It had to be 45 degrees, if not lower. And even though I was moving and swimming, my fingers were already going numb. Getting to the shore was my only priority. So I'm flowing with the current, and it doesn't feel so choppy and so strong that I'm in horrible danger, but I still know it's going to take a lot of effort to get to shore. So I know I need to do it as quickly as possible while I still have the energy to do it. So I managed to turn around and maneuver and get a 360 view of my entire surroundings. And I actually managed to see the Ranger pulling Sam out of whatever river this is. And they were only a couple 100 feet ahead of me. So I start frantically swimming in that direction to get as close as possible to them so I could get some help as well. So I do just that, and I try my absolute best to keep my composure and take deep, meaningful breaths in an attempt to warm my core Wim Hof style. And I start breaststroking as efficiently as I possibly can in their direction. And like I said, this wasn't a horrible rapid river. It was hard to get there, but I got to them and they pried me out of this river. The river wasn't the worst, but it was hard enough that I had to take a moment to myself to cough up some water and get some breaths before turning around to help them search for Meek. But by the time that I got up and was able to turn around to help, they were already prying him out of the water as well. So we made it. We're all good. We're all alive, but where did we make it to? We're just standing soaking wet on some rocks next to a river. What do we do next? So I'm looking around trying to gauge where we are when the Ranger breaks the silence, just saying, "Thank God that door isn't behind the Horseshoe Falls. These Bridal Veil Falls are rough enough. I swear I never get used to that." And then it clicked for me what happened and why it felt so unusual. We were in Niagara Falls, and we jumped through that door into into free-falling water. And just like the door in the tree that I had to crawl through earlier that day, either side of the door didn't correlate with each other. The door that we went through was almost horizontal, allowing us to cannonball into it. But once we were through this door, the gravity on this side of the door took over, forcing us to free fall backwards into the water, because the door on this side was vertical against the cliff wall, and it was just tucked behind a waterfall. I hope that makes sense, because I don't know how else to say it. The direction of gravity changed once we passed through the door. But now we're out and we're soaking wet, and apparently we're at Niagara Falls. So the three of us look towards the ranger like, okay, now what's the next move? And he just goes, follow me, I know where we can access a vehicle. So we follow him along this slippery edge of the Niagara Falls body of water until we get to this janky metal staircase. And the staircase leads up to what seems to be a concrete observation deck. And there are random people up there clearly enjoying Niagara Falls as tourists. And I felt like we were going to stick out and people were going to be confused as to why we're coming up these stairs. But nobody seemed to mind. Everybody seemed to be minding their own business and enjoying their time. And I guess they assumed that we were all just workers. And I know what you're thinking. Wouldn't these people notice that we're all soaking wet? But everybody on this platform was soaking wet from the intense sprays from the falls. So I look at the sign that is indicating what this observation deck is called. And this one was called The Journey Behind the Falls. And then in smaller print, it said that this one is the Horseshoe Falls. So in my head, the first thing that I realized is that we got to the Canadian side of Niagara Falls. So we're technically out of the country, but it's not like this is the first time today that I'm out of the country. So what felt like a big deal initially actually didn't matter. What mattered in this moment was finding the vehicle that the ranger mentioned. We were all a bit disoriented after taking a beating inside of that water, and I momentarily forgot that the next step of this process is the screaming tunnel. But we had to get there first, so we just had to put our heads down, follow the ranger, and get to a vehicle. But I quickly realized that the ranger didn't have a vehicle waiting here for us because he was looking around for one. He was looking around so much so that I had to ask him, did you forget where you parked it? And he replied, they move them all the time. We just have to find a construction site. And after about 5 minutes of frantically looking around, we see one of those fences. You know, the ones that have those green tarps on them? The ones that are indicating that there's a construction site behind this fence. And once we see it, the ranger just starts beelining towards it. So we get up to this fence and he's peeking through small holes in the tarp to see if there's anybody around. But once he sees that the coast is clear, he turns around and starts giving us our orders. And he goes, we're gonna jump this fence and we're gonna run to the big yellow truck to the left. It's the big 3-axle articulated truck to the left. 2 of you hop in the bed of the truck and 1 of you hop in the operating cab with me. And the first question in everybody's mind is that your truck or are we about to steal one? The second question is, how are we going to steal it? Are you going to hotwire this thing? This whole thing seems really dumb. And the ranger could see in all of our faces that we weren't going to blindly follow him on this one, like we did with the cannonball into Niagara Falls. So he starts digging into his pocket and takes out a ring of keys. And he's just shuffling through them until he finds the one that he's looking for. And he holds it up to us kind of proudly as if now it should all make sense. But we're all still looking at this guy extremely confused. And he goes, guys, it's a cat key. I always carry one around in case I need a ride. And he sees that this still isn't making sense to us, so he follows up with, so apparently none of you worked on a construction site in your life. This is called a cat key. It's the universal key to all cat heavy machinery. I don't borrow the heavy machinery often, but it's great to carry one of these in a pinch. And I think we could all agree that we're in a pinch, right boys? And I realized in that moment that hot wiring heavy machinery isn't dumb, but making a universal key to all heavy machinery is the part that's really dumb. And I can't believe that they make a universal key. We didn't have time to look it up in that moment, but I fact checked it after the fact and it's true. So we all just look at each other and shrug our shoulders like we might as well give it a try. What's the worst that could happen? We get kicked off a construction site, maybe we get a ticket or a fine, and under those circumstances it was worth the risk. So instead of hopping the fence, because that's a bad idea as well, we just walk around the corner until we find a nice little gap in the fence and we all squeeze through it, because obviously it would draw much less attention. And then once we were in there, it was just a straight shot to the cat truck. Meek and I hopped into the bed of the truck and we laid down so nobody would be able to see us, while the ranger and Sam went into the cab. And everything was going completely according to plan. I just felt the truck turn on a couple moments later, and before I knew it, we were moving. I didn't stand up to look where we were going, but a couple moments after we started moving, I definitely felt and heard something that seemed as if the ranger just drove straight through the opening gate. It just sounded and felt like he drove through the gate and it popped some chains and padlocks that were securing the construction site. But this big ass truck went through that fence like butter. But then all I could do was just lay there and wait until we got to our destination. And it was way too loud in the back of that truck to have a conversation, so Meek and I just didn't even bother. And we must have been driving for 25 or 30 minutes until I made my way to my knees. And I just finally took my first little peek because I didn't hear as much traffic around us. And I saw a street sign that said that we were on Warner Road. And we drove past this little winery called Paradiso Estate Winery. We were definitely on a back road at this point, and there weren't many people around, so I wasn't as paranoid as before. And before I knew it, I could feel the truck coming to a stop. The ranger quickly turned the truck off, and I heard Sam and the ranger hop out of the cab, which was our cue to hop out of the bed. We landed in a muddy, unpaved road surrounded by trees, and we were standing directly in front of what I could only assume at that moment was the Screaming Tunnel. And this tunnel is just your typical limestone tunnel going under a railway. It doesn't feel particularly ominous. This one's just a bit secluded, and there's quite a bit of graffiti on it. But the ranger's pacing as if he's preparing to try to say something very important. And when he finally gets a grasp at what he wants to say, he looks at all of us as if he's waiting for our undivided attention. And then once he has all of our attention, he puts his attention towards Meek. And he just says, "None of you are gonna like this, but specifically you, Meek." And I'm not sure why he would say that because he doesn't really know Meek. They've barely had a conversation yet, but I realized why he said it almost immediately after. He followed up by saying, "What we're about to do is in the gray area of something bad. I wouldn't call it the dark arts, but there's nothing holy about what we have to do to get through this tunnel." And then it made sense because the one thing that the ranger knew about Meek was that he's religious, because James told the ranger about how Meek's incantations worked on the black-eyed children. So the ranger put two and two together and assumed that Meek wouldn't want to play with anything sacrilegious. And I could tell that this was the first thing that Meek was genuinely uncomfortable with, because up until this point, his conscience could be fully clear, just due to the fact that he was actively working against evil forces or jinn. But apparently this step requires working with some type of evil force or jinn. At least that's what it seems like the ranger is implying. So Meek breaks the silence in a very stern fashion, as if he's demanding a straight answer. And he just says, "Tell me what we're about to do, and I'll tell you if this is the end of the road for me." We all respected that, and we eagerly waited for the ranger's response, which was, "There's a spirit in that tunnel, and we're going to use it to get to where we need to go. All you have to do is look at it. You don't need to interact with it. You don't have to speak with it. You don't have to bargain with it. You just need to keep your eye on it." Meek replied with one more question. He just said, "Is it doing us a favor, or does it not have a choice?" And the ranger replied, "If we do it right, she doesn't have a choice. And if we do it wrong, I promise she's not doing us any favors." And Meek replied with a stern nod, saying, "If we're working against it, I'm okay with it." And the ranger replied, "Well, I can assure you, she doesn't like when I do this." And that was enough for Meek, as long as we weren't taking favors from something inherently evil. He was willing to give it a try because it didn't go against his moral code. I don't know if this explanation from the ranger gave me reassurance that we weren't doing something morally wrong, or if it made the whole situation worse, knowing that we were about to piss off, use, and manipulate a malevolent entity. But apparently, if we do it right, it doesn't have a choice. Well, I guess she doesn't have a choice because whatever this is a she. So the entire group confirms like, all right, we're ready to give it a try. So the ranger gives us a quick breakdown about how this is going to go. He says, "You guys are going to stay quiet. Do not say anything because it could interfere with the gate that we're trying to get to. All of us together, we are going to walk to the middle of this tunnel. We're going to light a match. You're going to see something that you are not going to like, and you're going to hear some real screaming. You need to ignore the screaming. And the moment you see her, we're all going to start slowly backpedaling. Do not trip, do not turn around, and do not take your eyes off of her, no matter what you feel or hear behind you. If any of us look away, if any of us break our gaze, she will come for us." I couldn't come up with a more nightmare situation than this. I literally hate these rules. I hate this tunnel already, and I know I'm gonna hate her, but I walk into this tunnel regardless. So we get to the center of this tunnel, and I could feel the tension building, and we're all facing the direction that he told us to look, and we're just staring into the darkness of this tunnel. And I could see in my peripheral vision that the ranger pulled out a box of matches, but I wasn't willing to look. I just had my eyes fixed into the blackness of this tunnel, and I'm just standing there hoping that everybody's doing the same. And it felt like everything went silent when the ranger struck the match and held it up in front of all of us. And this little speck of fire was barely illuminating the graffiti-filled walls, and it didn't even make a dent in the black void in front of us. And then I heard the ranger whisper, "Fairmont Springs." And as soon as the words finished coming out of his mouth, the match was blown blown out, and it seemed to be a direct gust of wind, as if somebody was right next to it blowing it out, because the wind was completely still in this tunnel. And a split second later, deafening screams started erupting from behind us as if somebody was fighting for their life. But the ranger broke up the sounds of the screams by reminding us, eyes forward. So the screams are just flowing through this tunnel, and we're hearing the echoes of them from every angle, while we're all just trying to focus on the deep darkness that is the rest of this tunnel. And then from the darkness emerged this woman in a red t-shirt and acid washed jeans, and she just had a little black bob haircut and no expression on her face. Everything about her seemed fairly normal. The only thing abnormal was that she didn't seem to have arms. It was dark and she was kind of far away still, but she looked like a double amputee, where you could see just a little bit of each arm from the short sleeve shirt she was wearing. And I'm just doing everything in my power to keep my eyes on her until the ranger says, start to backpedal one step at a time. And I almost started to look at him because he started to speak, because it's just a natural reaction. But I stopped myself at the last nanosecond of my eyes shifting, and I just kept looking at her. And she didn't seem aggressive yet. She was just walking towards us a little bit quicker than we were backpedaling away from her. So she was emerging from the darkness of the tunnel. And each step that she took, I was able to see her a little bit better with every second. But all we were allowed to focus on was one step at a time, with our eyes just fixed on her. And apparently this would work. But the further we backpedaled, the louder the screams got, and the more specific they got. They were screams of people pleading for help, actively trying to get us to turn around, calling our names. And if we hadn't got the briefing from the ranger before this, there is no scenario where you don't turn around to try to find the source of that scream. It is so loud and so clear and so vile. It's almost irresistible to investigate. But we knew our orders, so we just took it one step at a time. But then I started to feel what felt like some type of resistance on my back. It felt as if I was backing through something. The only thing I could compare it to is that we were backpedaling through what felt like an immense spider web that had a little bit of resistance. It felt like whatever it was pushing back against us, but it wasn't quite strong enough for us to not be able to push through it. And I could feel whatever this was kind of engulfing me the deeper I backpedaled into it, until it felt like it was almost all the way around me. It was to the point where I could only imagine that the tension of whatever this was about to burst and we were going to pop out on the other side. But right as it felt like we were about to get through, the girl in the red t-shirt in front of us had made it directly under the one light in this tunnel. And it was the light that we were standing directly under when we were at the center. And I realized in that moment that this girl was not an amputee. I just wasn't able to see her arms up into this point. She was dragging her arms behind her, and her bicep and forearm areas looked malleable like noodles, and her knuckles were dragging in the gravel 5 feet behind her. Her arms were twice as long as her body, and I thought they were nubs because I wasn't able to see the rest of them because they were dragging along behind her in the darkness. And it was like once I saw it and realized what her arms actually looked like, it was as if she knew that I noticed, and her hands that were dragging behind her sprung up onto their fingertips and started crawling towards us like little spiders. And she stayed walking at her slow pace, but both of her hands were scurrying towards us, and her arms were lengthening as if they could stretch indefinitely. And I started to panic because I didn't know if I had set something off or somebody else had looked away, and this was her attacking us or if this was her attempt to scare us to get us to look away. But the pressure on my back from whatever was holding us back was building, and I felt it pop as her right hand leapt off the ground and was springing towards my face like one of those face-sucking aliens from Alien vs. Predator. But right before it reached me, it was as if my entire line of vision changed instantaneously, and I was looking into a reflection of myself. I was too scared to look at my surroundings because I was just trying to follow the ranger's rules, so I didn't know when it became safe to look around. I was just standing there staring at my own reflection, too scared to move, until the ranger hit me on the shoulder and said, "We gotta get out of here now." And I didn't have the time to take my surroundings in until we were out of whatever room that we were in. And by the time I got my bearings, I realized that we were standing in the middle of a hallway of what seemed to be a beautiful hotel. And I didn't realize how out of breath I was. I must have been holding my breath that entire time. But I managed to say, "Is she after us? Did somebody look away?" And the ranger said, "No, nothing's after us. That went great." So I followed up by asking him, "Why did you tell us we had to run if everything went so great in there?" And he laughed and said, "That trick that we did leaves us in the women's powder room. I didn't want to get us caught in there looking like a bunch of creeps." So I look back at the door that we ran out of, and I see this little icon that signifies that that was a ladies' room, and the ranger was telling the truth. So I turned my attention towards Sam, and he's scanning the hotel, and he seems to be pretty excited. And he looks towards us, and he's like, "Guys, this is where Bruce and I are staying. You got us back. We're good. And we're really close to the trail that he was lost on. I think we have a chance to find find him, guys. This was the first glint of hope I'd seen in Sam since he had gotten here. Apparently, we were at the Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel, and we just entered this hotel through a mirror in the ladies' powder room. And not only that, we got here by manipulating a horrifying noodle-armed monster that was disguising itself as an amputee. This was so confusing to me that this was the end of the line of me blindly following with no answers. The ranger had already started walking down the hallway, but I needed for him to make it make sense to me. So I got up next to him and I said something very candidly. All I said was, "Hey, for my mental well-being, make that make sense." He could tell that I needed some form of explanation, so he said, "When tragedies happen, those locations become hotspots. When people do horrible things, the root of those actions lead to the same tree. The same way that there's a connection between all things good, there's a connection between all things wicked. That tunnel and this hotel both have a very dark history. So in a way, they're connected, and if you know how to manipulate those connections, you can use them as a shortcut." And I had to follow up with, "How did you learn how to do that?" But I could tell that he wasn't ready to divulge all of that information, and he responded, "You meet a lot of interesting people in this line of work, but that's a story for another time." I was satisfied with that explanation that he gave me. It's more than he usually does. It was tragic, but it did kind of make sense. And we didn't really have time for a long-winded story. So the first thing that we did was we all rushed to Sam's room and he gave us all a change of clothes. And we used all of the towels that the hotel had provided to him for all of us to dry off. And let me tell you, fresh, warm towels had never felt so good. And a dry, baggy shirt that didn't even fit me had never felt so comfortable. Literally anything to get out of those soaking wet hiking clothes. We did this process as fast as possible, so even though I was dry, I wasn't warm, because we didn't even take any time to rest. Because clearly we were on the clock. We had to find Bruce, and time mattered. And before we headed out of the room, the ranger let us know what the next hour is gonna look like. He got our attention. He said, "I'm gonna tell you what you need to know. The swings like to drop people off in random places. There's not really any rhyme or reason, but they always drop them in the same park that they took them. So Bruce is definitely in Banff, and they tend to leave people in kind of popular places. They almost hang them up like trophies. It seems to me as if they use the person as a spectacle. And when we find Bruce, you'll see what I mean. There's something about it that feels personal. And they always drop them in a place that they think that you can't get them, where you could see them, but you can't get to them." And then Meek butts in very calmly and he just says, "Why would they want us to find him?" And the ranger replies in a way that seems like he's giving us a warning that what we might find might be gruesome. And what he says is, "Like I said, it feels personal." So Sam butts in and says, "When you say personal, do you mean where they get dropped might also be a personal location?" And the ranger whips his head towards Sam, as if Sam is kind of onto something. And he says, "Why? Do you have a location in mind that might be a personal attack?" And Sam immediately replies saying, "Bruce has been talking about Moraine Lake all week, and just how excited he was to see it. If it's a personal attack, it would have to be there." Sam seemed absolutely sure of this, that if the ranger was right, and the location in which Bruce was dropped had a personal significance, it had to be at Moraine Lake. So we all head out of the room and down the hallway. We march through the lobby and straight out of the front door. And I noticed the ranger doing something kind of weird. He's holding down the button to speak into his radio, and he's holding a pen right in front of it, and he's rapidly clicking it in random patterns. He was only doing it for about 30 seconds, but I found it very interesting and very odd. It didn't seem like it was something that would need a crazy long explanation, so I figured he wouldn't be annoyed if I asked. So I just brought a little bit of attention to it. And he wasn't annoyed at all. He simply said, "I was letting James know where we were headed so he can meet us there." So I follow up with, "How exactly were you doing that?" "I thought he was through one of the doors." And the ranger says something fairly interesting. "Radios work over there too. I'm not sure how, but you could hear somebody from the other side. We just use Morse code because it doesn't draw too much attention to our location. It's always best to be quiet in there. You never know what's around listening in there." All I did was let James know what lake we were headed to. And at that very same moment, I heard faint clickings coming from the ranger's chest. And if I wasn't actively listening for these clicks, I would probably think it was twigs breaking around us, or somebody behind us maybe crumpling up a wrapper. But the ranger was listening to it intently until the clicking ended, and all he said was, "James is on his way." And then a little bit more clicking came through the radio, and this time it was a little bit longer. And the ranger was just nodding his head as if he was liking what he was hearing. And then once the message was finished, he relayed it to the group. He said James located a door near Moraine Lake that we could use to extract Bruce once we find him. It's imperative that once we get him down, we get him through a door and back to HQ. The doctors here will declare him dead, and we won't be able to do what we need to do to save him. So that was a lot to take in, because at first it was we need to get him while he's still low, and now it's after we get him down. So clearly the swings tend to drop people in trees or cliffs or just high, hard to get spots. So we get out of this hotel and the ranger is clearly beelining towards a couple of shuttle buses. The drivers are standing outside and it seems as if they're waiting for passengers to arrive. I was assuming that we would probably take Sam's car to the lake that we were headed to, but apparently you can't take personal vehicles to Moraine Lake. You have to take a shuttle. And luckily the ranger still dresses like a ranger and has his badge with him, unlike James, who seems to like to be a little bit more undercover. So we roll up to this shuttle driver 4 deep, and the ranger was just very polite to him and let him know that we needed an emergency escort to Moraine Lake, because there's clearly an emergency, and when you have a badge and you're clearly a park ranger, people just seem to do what you ask them, including the second part of the ranger's request, which was suspend all of the other shuttles for the rest of the day. We didn't know if there was already people over there, but it was probably a good idea to not have a bunch of new people flooding in, especially as we were trying to resolve the situation and track Sam's friend. And personally, it was quite a relief that we didn't have to hijack another piece of heavy machinery to get there, and we were actually being escorted there, and we finally had a moment to sit down. It's been all action for us for the past who knows how many hours, so the drive from the hotel to the lake felt like the greatest siesta that any of us had ever experienced. And at that point, there was nothing that we could do except wait for the shuttle to arrive at the lake, and we all took that time to ourselves to mentally prepare to what we were walking into. I managed to doze off for a little bit, and I woke up to Meek shaking my leg awake, and he was just signaling to me with his eyes that we had arrived. And I felt like I had only been sleeping for a split second with how exhausted I was from this situation. I hadn't shaken off the drowsiness by the time I had made my way off the shuttle, and I was just looking at the floor, kicking the small pieces of gravel, trying to get my bearings and prepare myself to take on this new obstacle and track down Sam's friend. And I didn't realize how close the exit of the shuttle was to the shore of the lake. It pulled you almost all the way up to the most beautiful lake that you've ever seen. This lake is the deepest green, blue, turquoise that you've ever seen on the planet, with a backdrop of the most beautiful, immense snow-capped mountains. This place almost looked like another planet with how beautiful and untouched it was. And I see why Bruce was raving about it so much leading up to this trip with Sam, and I almost didn't see it with how beautiful the entire scenery was. The mix of drowsiness and the overwhelming beauty of nature here almost made me overlook where Bruce had been dropped, and it was clearly very, very personal. So I'm standing at the edge of Moraine Lake, and I'm looking at something that I can't even conceive to be real. I'm looking at a man suspended above the lake, and I could only assume that this man is Bruce, Sam's friend. And Bruce looks like he has been frozen in a frantic state, as if he was free falling and somebody pressed pause, the way his limbs were all spread out and his eyes were wide and petrified. But he wasn't just floating above this lake, he was attached to an object. But I don't mean attached, it looked as if he was holding on to this object, and the object was afloat. What he was holding onto was a bright red umbrella, but the umbrella almost looked like an artificial illustration, almost a 3D rendering of some bizarre umbrella. It didn't have any of the metal spokes actually holding the umbrella open. It almost looked like somebody just molded it out of clay, as if it was a fake umbrella for show. It almost looked like one of those street art umbrellas. And a man that I could only assume to be Bruce was holding on to the end of the loop of the umbrella with one hand, but he wasn't moving, he wasn't struggling to hold on. It looked as if he was completely attached to it, and his body was completely motionless. But there was one thing especially off about what we were looking at. He was clearly suspended as if he was floating, but there was a light movement as if the umbrella was slowly rising. You would only notice it if you were looking at it for an extended period of time. And as I was standing there for like 30-45 seconds, all of us just looking up at this man holding onto this umbrella in awe. It looked as if it was moving up a couple inches every 30 seconds, but it wasn't going left or right, just a slow rise. So immediately I try to look around to see if it's connected to any wiring, but it's not connected to anything. This thing is just suspended above this beautiful moraine lake, standing out, and the way the red umbrella is popping out in contrast to the beautiful light blue scenery behind it looked as if it was like a Banksy street art. It didn't make any sense. There were no wires, there were no tricks, there wasn't a helium balloon holding it up. This thing was just elevating. So I'm finally able to look away from it, and I try to look at my friends and the ranger just to see if they have any idea of what we should do next. But Meek and Sam are completely dumbfounded, just looking up at Sam's friend. Sam is completely distraught. He has no idea what to do, but the ranger looks a little bit calmer. He just seems like he's waiting for James to get there. And mind you, there's a couple other people at this lake, but the odd thing is that they weren't looking at this umbrella and this man as if it was so out of the ordinary. And I actually heard a couple of people walk by and point at it and talk about it as if it was an art installation. They just said something along the lines of, "Oh, that's cool. I guess the street artist made it to the national parks. They didn't even think it was a real person with how bizarre it looked. So after a couple minutes of frantic pacing and silence in our group, James makes his way out of the pine tree forest directly to the east of this lake. And something about the way he emerged from this forest gave me a little bit of confidence and calmed me down a bit. He looked as if he knew exactly what to do, and he was ready to perform in this situation as if he's done it 100 times. And there's no better feeling than seeing a professional coming up to a situation where you feel helpless and they look ready to take care of it. The one thing I noticed is that James changed into his ranger uniform. And the only reason I can assume he did that is so he could have a little bit more pull just in case he has to talk to any people that are here or any other people in authority in the area, just in case he need to explain something. He would have some legitimacy by the uniform that he was wearing. The only other thing that stood out was that he had some type of harpoon gun, I guess is the only way I could explain it. It wasn't a harpoon though, it looked like it had a grappling hook sticking out of the front. It was kind of reminiscent of the thing that Batman would shoot. And I've actually seen rock climber YouTubers use it to shoot up a grappling hook up a cliff to make their way up a cliff safely. So the ranger walks right up to James and signals for us to come join the huddle because it's time for a game plan. So we walk up, we're ready to hear it. We're ready to hear the game plan and ready to save Bruce at this point. So we just shut up and listen. And James just really calmly says, I'm gonna get the hook up there, I'm gonna try to get it over his hand and hook it to the loop of the umbrella, and I'm gonna tie it to that tree over there. And then he asks the group, who's capable of climbing a rope efficiently? Initially, I was very confused by this question because if you're able to get that grappling hook over the umbrella, why wouldn't you just be able to reel it in? So I butt into what he's saying, even though I was initially trying to be quiet. And I'm just like, why don't we all just grab the rope and reel him in? And James looks at me as if I'm a complete amateur in this situation and just goes, those things don't budge. I need you to trust me and I need you to listen. Are you able to climb the rope? And the first thing that comes to my mind was a slightly selfish thought. I thought I already played bait for Henry and I climbed that tree by myself. I don't think it's my turn to do this, whatever the task may be. And luckily Sam spoke up because he felt a similar way. He didn't feel like it was my priority to climb a rope for his friend. So he just simply said, I'm gonna do it. He's here with me. And everybody seemed to be okay with that, so we let James continue with the game plan. So James repeats himself and says, I'm gonna get the hook over that loop of the umbrella. We're going to tie it to that tree, and then we don't have that much time. So Sam, you gotta climb that rope and you have to get him off that umbrella, but you need to make sure that you do not touch any part of the umbrella. And even though there was 100 questions in our mind, one of them being, why is there a time limit on this? The most important question was, what happens if Sam accidentally touches the umbrella while he's trying to remove Bruce from it? And James shut down that question immediately simply by saying, if you touch it, we're gonna have to save two of you because you're gonna end up just like him. Not to mention, I only brought one rope and one hook, and if you take too long, this rope is gonna snap and you guys are gonna be far too high for us to save you. And it's gonna take far too long for us to go back to HQ to get another, and you guys are gonna be too high for us to save you. We tried to interject a couple more questions, but he shut them down completely and just said, time is of the essence. You guys need to let me do what I need to do. Sam, get your hands ready. So James starts getting the grappling gun ready, and Sam starts picking up a couple rocks and just moving them around his hands to try to get some blood flow to his hands, but also to get some rock residue to make a makeshift chalk so his grip is a little bit better for climbing. And the rest of us are just standing there patiently ready for James to unload this grappling gun. And when he finally does, it was actually astonishing with how good his aim was. He didn't get it on the first try, but he was damn close, and he just quickly reeled in the rope and reloaded it and sent his second shot that went directly over Bruce's hand and shot way past them. But eventually, when the momentum of the hook stopped, the gravity brought the hook into the water, but the rope was right over that loop, so all he had to do was slowly reel it in until the grappling hook was nice and snug on the loop of the umbrella. Once the hook was snug in place, he frantically backpedaled and started tying our end of the rope to the base of a pine tree about 10 feet offshore of the lake. All of us had to grab part of the rope and tie it really tight, and Sam started getting ready, just getting a feel of the rope before he finally got his feet off the ground, wrapped his feet around the rope, and started climbing up. I still wasn't positive as to why we had to do it so fast and why we weren't able to reel this umbrella in, but I quickly realized why. We tied the rope very tight to a tree, and the rope was very taut because it had to be taut so Sam would be able to climb up there efficiently. And after about 30 seconds of Sam climbing, he had gotten like a fourth of the way up, and I started hearing creaks from the tree that it's tied to, almost as if the rope was strong enough, it would pull the tree out of the ground. The physics of this make no sense. That is just a random suspended umbrella just slowly moving. There's no reason that an inanimate object with no extra support should be able to pull a tree out of the ground. So at that point, I have to believe James, so I'm just fully committed to this plan. The only other question in my head was, does that umbrella ever stop going up? Can you tie it to something that's sturdy enough to hold it down, or does it just indefinitely raise? But it wasn't the time to ask those questions, so I'm just honed in on Sam climbing this rope, hoping that he makes makes it. Because at this point, it's like an American Ninja Warrior contest. Does he have the grip strength to get up this rope and free his friend from this random umbrella 30 feet above the lake? So I'm just standing there white knuckling my fists, watching my friend climb 30 feet up this rope as the tree next to me is crackling like it's getting ripped out of the ground, and I'm watching the bound strings that make up the rope snap one by one as the umbrella continues to raise, thinking at any moment this rope is going to snap and Sam is barely over the water and he's just going to free fall, or the tree next to me is going to fall out of the ground and Sam is going to be climbing up a vertically hanging rope. It was torture watching him inch closer and closer to him, but finally he got his hand on his foot, and I don't know what Sam was expecting. Like, when he touched his foot, Bruce was going to help and let go of the umbrella, but you could see the frustration on Sam. As he's wiggling at his foot, he's yelling at him, like trying to get him to let go of the umbrella, but Bruce isn't responding whatsoever. So Sam is hanging on by one hand with his feet wrapped around this rope as he's trying to shake his friend, but this rope is becoming more and more taut, and I know Sam could tell because he could hear it. He could hear it snapping, and I see him getting more and more desperate, but he knows he can't climb up higher and use the loop of the umbrella as leverage to try to get a good hold of his friend. So he's just in this situation, suspended above this lake with only one hand he's able to use, trying to knock some sense into his friend before they both free fall. And I could hear the sounds of the rope intensifying as more and more strands snap, and I know Sam is panicking harder and harder until he finally gets as close as he can to Bruce and lets go of the rope with both hands and locks his hands around Bruce's knees and just lets his legs go off the rope to put all of his weight onto Bruce's body. And mind you, Bruce is just holding onto this umbrella with one hand, so you would imagine that another man's body weight would immediately make them fall, but somehow Bruce is still just holding onto this umbrella, and at this point the rope is about 60% snapped, so Sam can't even go back to the rope. He's just hanging onto his friend's legs, trying to make jarring movements to break his grip so they could both free fall into the water. And as the moment is intensifying and the rope is getting closer and closer to snapping, we all know that this is our last chance to save him, and Sam definitely knows that because he's holding onto this man's legs with his life, and he's just yanking and pulling until finally the rope that's connecting the tree to the umbrella snaps. And at that same moment we saw Bruce's fingers open up halfway, and Sam gave him one more yank and they both free falled into the water like 30 feet into Moraine Lake. Part of me was hoping that falling into the water would wake Bruce up and he would help Sam swim back to shore, but I noticed immediately that Sam was staying under the water for too long. From the moment they fell into the water, you would expect them to pop up for air after 5 or 10 seconds, but we weren't seeing Sam. So I could only assume that Bruce wasn't helping and Sam was desperately trying to hold on to Bruce and swim him to the surface. And all of us were about to dive into the water when we finally saw Sam's head pop up, but we didn't see Bruce's, so we were initially panicking. Did we go to all of this effort just to watch this man sink 45 feet deep into Moraine Lake to never be recovered? But the look on Sam's face wasn't defeat. It looked as if he was still fighting for the situation, and I could see that he's stroking with one hand and he's looking at us like, come give me a little bit of help, I think we're gonna be okay. So James ran back to the tree and untied the rope that was attached to the tree that had snapped and actually left us about 25 feet of rope, and he threw it into the water so Sam would be able to grab that rope with one hand and all of us could reel him in as quickly as possible. And it only took us about 30 seconds to get him to shore, and what we didn't see behind him in the water was that he was holding on to Bruce's foot, so once he got to shore he was able to drag Bruce out of the water. We never saw Bruce's head come above the water, so we were initially very worried, but he was only under there for about 30-45 seconds, so we were still hopeful. And when we dragged Bruce onto shore, I got a look at his face, and the man was still in this exact same position that he was when he was suspended in the air. He hadn't moved an inch. It was as if he was petrified in this exact position, but he had been so far away that I hadn't been able to see his face. And this was the first time that I noticed that his mouth was completely shut. It didn't seem like he was breathing, but his eyes were darting around as if he was able to see and hear all of his surroundings. He was clearly conscious. He was clearly okay. He didn't drown in his time in the water, but there was something seriously wrong with him. It was as if his body was completely stuck, but his eyes were totally alive. Some of the other people that were around Moraine Lake were looking at us because obviously we were acting in a very frantic manner, and I was half expecting to have to give them some type of explanation, but the ranger just commanded us, we need to get him out of here. And his reasoning was simple. He didn't want to have to answer any unnecessary questions that would give civilians unnecessary information that might influence them to go looking for these types of things. And even though the people around were giving us slightly weird looks, the fact that the ranger and James both had on their uniforms, they didn't really question what was going on. Even though a couple people attempted to approach to maybe ask a couple questions, all it took was the ranger putting his hand up, signaling to the person, give us some space, and they just kind of respected it because of what they were wearing. So we all grabbed a hold of one of Bruce's limbs, and our only instruction was to start marching him into the pine forest directly to the east of the lake. So that's what we did. And obviously he's not very heavy when 5 dudes are carrying him together. So we're able to talk a little bit through our hike. And I have a couple questions that I want to ask. And the first question that came to my mind was, where is that umbrella gonna go? And even though we were obviously in a rush, James gifted me with a slight explanation. He just very sternly said, the only thing that we know about those umbrellas is that they slowly go up until you can't see them anymore. We don't know if they go all the way out of the atmosphere or they just keep going until they disappear. We've tried to track them with our binoculars, but they just seem to keep going and going until you can't see them anymore. And if we don't get to people soon enough, they just go with them and we don't really know where they go. So we just try to focus on getting them down before they get too high. This seemed to be an honest answer from James, so I just took it for what it was. When you're dealing with umbrellas, you just try to fix the situation as soon as possible, because once it's too high, there's nothing that you could do. Clearly Sam had a question as well, but his was much more pleading. He desperately asked, what is wrong with him? What happened to him? And the ranger took on this question by answering, everybody's like this when we find them with an umbrella. We have a remedy for this. All we have to do is get him back to HQ and your friend is going to be fine. And you could see in Sam's face that he was totally relieved by that answer. And now I knew that if we get back to HQ, Sam's friend is saved and this whole thing is over and we get to go home. So I was ready to be quiet and march until we found a door. But as the minutes kept going and going, I was just wondering, what direction are we going? Nobody's saying go left or go right. It doesn't seem like we're marching in any specific direction. So after about 20 minutes, I have no choice but to speak up and ask James, where is this door that you said you located? And James replied with something very interesting. He simply said, when you stop looking for it, it'll present itself. And at that moment, I realized that we were hiking aimlessly for 20 minutes. And James' whole plan was to just hike as deep into the woods as we possibly can until we came across a door or until a door presented itself. And as much as this logically frustrated me, I just committed to it. I just stopped looking around. I stopped trying to find hints of a door. I just looked at my feet, did my best to carry as much of Bruce's weight as I possibly could, and I just zoned out and kept it moving. And I don't even know how much time passed, but I guess everybody zoned out and I guess everybody stopped looking for a door, because eventually we just turned a random corner and there one was, presenting itself. And it was so odd because it was as if the moment I stopped genuinely looking for it, the moment I completely forgot about it and I was just thinking about other factors in my life, is when it popped up. I had finally fully committed to a daydream and was just completely in my own head, detached from the situation, and that's when it presented itself. It's like the opposite of the room of inquirement. Instead of presenting itself to somebody in need, it only presents itself to somebody that isn't looking for it. But the clear next obstacle in this situation was that when we get through this door, how far is HQ? But before we were able to address that obstacle, we needed to get Bruce through this door. So we had to turn him to his side because he was completely sprawled out in every direction. So we had to get him through this door like we were moving an awkward shaped couch. We tried our best to not nick his nose and his chin off the door frame or bang his ankle off a door hinge. And we eventually all made our way through. At this point, the weight of Bruce is kind of weighing on all of us. Even though it's 5 of us holding him, eventually a 200-pound man gets heavy. So we have no choice but to lay him down for a second and just take a moment's rest. And I just take a look at our surroundings, and it doesn't seem like there's any type of HQ around here. All there is a couple hills, a couple doors in the distance, and a pond to our right. So me, Sam, and Meek are feeling a little stressed about this situation because how much longer do we have to carry this guy? But I look at James and the ranger, and they're acting as if the journey's over, and they're just allowing us to get a little bit of rest, but they don't seem stressed about the situation. So eventually we've kind of shaken off the fatigue and we're ready to continue this journey, and we're kind of pumping ourselves up because we're gonna have to carry this dude way further. But as we're getting ready to lift him again, James kind of tries to calm us down a little bit. He could see that we're stretching, trying to not throw out our backs, and he just goes, guys, we're pretty much already there. Don't even worry about it. We're just gonna take the well. And he just gestures to the little pond to our right. And I remember in that moment what he said to the ranger. He told the ranger to take us through the screaming tunnel and he was gonna take the well. And in hindsight, I could only imagine that the well is another form of transportation. But when he said well, I imagined your typical well, like a brick well that you put a bucket in and a rope and you gather water. So when he's gesturing to this little pond, it didn't really make sense to me. And he could see on my face that it didn't make sense, so he gave us a little bit of an explanation. And he just goes, we call the water in here wells. The water in here acts a little bit different than the water out there. All of them look different, but we just call them wells because it's easier to say. It'll make sense once we're in there. The first thing that came to my head was that I didn't want to get wet again. I had spent hours soaking wet and cold, and I was not looking forward to do that all over again. And I'm not sure how this little pond is going to help us get back to HQ as we're carrying this 200-pound man. But the ranger just shoots me a look to not question this and just comply. So we all just suck it up and grab one of Bruce's limbs, hoist him over our shoulders, and start walking to this little pond. And James doesn't hesitate a second. He just starts walking into this water as if he doesn't care that he's about to get soaking wet. And we all reluctantly follow him. But the weird thing is that as I was walking into this pond, I was expecting my feet to start getting soaked, and I would be able to feel it in my socks, and I would feel my blisters start to soften and reopen, and I would start to feel my pant legs getting wet and the discomfort re-entering my entire body. But the deeper I went in, I noticed that I wasn't really feeling any moisture in my shoes or in my pants, but I was knee deep in the water. I just felt this odd static, as if there was something on my feet and legs, but it didn't feel wet, and I had no other choice but to just keep going. So as we continue to walk into this pond, it's getting deeper and deeper. Eventually it's at my waist, then my chest, then at my neck, and as my head is about to go under, I take a big deep breath, and I fully submerge myself into this pond. And the weight of Bruce is holding us down, and we're walking at the bed of this pond like Jack Sparrow when he put the canoe over his head. But we don't have that canoe, we don't have an air bubble, so I'm desperately trying to hold my breath. But from the corner of my eye, I see the ranger, and it seems as if he's breathing. His chest is just moving regularly, and he's talking to James, and they both just seem so calm and composed. So I look towards Sam and Meek, and they're holding their breath like me. And I'm getting to the point where I have to breathe soon. I'm gonna have to bail, and I'm gonna have to get to the surface. So I hit James back to let him know like we need to go up soon. We're not used to this like you guys. Apparently you guys are used to holding your breath for minutes at a time. But James just turns around and just casually laughs it off. And he goes, "Oh fellas, I forgot to tell you, don't have to hold your breath down here." And I'm looking at him so confused because he's speaking to me as if we are not underwater. But his voice still sounds as if we are underwater. It's muffled, but he's breathing like it's nothing. So I look at the other guys and they're as confused as I am because it goes against every single one of your natural instincts to breathe in water. But at this point, my lungs are about to burst and I have no choice. I either bail or I listen to him. But I see them so casually doing it that I just give it a shot. And I breathe in the smallest little nanosecond of air through my nostrils, expecting it to feel like when you jump into a body of water without plugging your nose and water shoots up it. But to my surprise, I was just able to breathe. But at this point, my entire body felt that little static, and I felt the little static in my nose, but I was able to breathe fine. So I just started breathing normally. This clearly wasn't water. Even though from the outside of it, it looked like a body of water, being inside of it didn't feel like water, and we were able to breathe fine. So this was something completely different. And it was interesting because being able to breathe in there felt so unnatural, but all it took was a moment of recognition about all the things that happened this weekend for it to feel completely normal. And for me, it put it into perspective of why the Ranger and James act like they act. No matter what situation you're forced into, everything eventually becomes normal. No matter how bizarre it is, humans are adaptive like that. You could be in the worst conditions, dealing with the most bizarre scenarios, but eventually you become numb to it. And at that point, I really became numb to this entire situation. I just wanted it to be over. And I started focusing on the next step and what was going to happen next. And I could feel that we were on an incline now, so we must be coming out the other end of this pond. And it only took a couple more moments until my forehead and then my eyebrows, my eyes, and then my mouth were out of this body of water. And I took a quick look around, and obviously the surroundings looked fairly similar because it seemed as if no matter where you went inside of this door dimension, everything looked oddly similar. But I could tell that we were in a different part of it. I could tell this pond was some type of gateway that connected different areas of this dimension. Where we were before was much flatter. It had slight hills in the distance, but it was more of a flat area. When we came out the other end of this body of water, we were in dense foliage. There were pine trees all around us. And as I was taking in this change of scenery, James cut off my train of thought by saying, "It's right there, guys, about a 2-minute walk." So I turn my head to where he's gesturing towards, and I see this odd structure hoisted in these pine trees. The only reason I was able to see it was because there were some lanterns hanging from the structure. And as we got closer to it, I obviously got a better look, and this thing was damn near a treehouse. And it was clearly what they were referring to as HQ. It was a very makeshift structure. It was done well, but it was clearly thrown together by maybe 5 guys, and it was just this treehouse that was embedded in about 10 pine trees, and the pine trees acted like pillars to the house. Everything was built off of the trees. So we hustle under this structure, and there's this string hanging from the bottom of it that James just grabs and yanks, and it just lets down a rollout ladder. So all of us put Bruce down, and James climbs the ladder and tells us to wait there. And once he's inside, we see him cranking this makeshift wooden elevator that's strung up by ropes, and he cranks it until it's down flush on the floor. And obviously then it is our job to transfer Bruce from the grass onto this makeshift elevator so he could start cranking it up. And once we successfully put him there, we all just climb the ladder. We enter this fascinating hideout. And by the time we're all able to climb the ladder and get into this structure, James has already cranked up Bruce and moved him onto this circular table in the middle of the room. But before I'm able to ask about our next steps and what we're about to do with Bruce, I have to take in these surroundings. And this place is like Doctor Strange's basement meets the Maze Runner map room, meets Carmoran from The Witcher. This entire place is filled with experiments, artifacts, antidotes, weapons, tools, and bookshelves filled with every culture's folklore. And as I'm trying to take in all the small details that are around me, I have no choice but to turn my attention back towards James and the Ranger, who are pulling a cover off this odd ceiling fixture. And this ceiling fixture is directly above where they laid down Bruce. So as much as I want to poke around and look through all of the experiments and books and odd trinkets, I have to turn my attention back to what's important. And the first thing that I notice is that this ceiling fixture let in a bunch of natural light. And the second thing I notice is that James is walking over with a bucket of something. The Ranger's taking off Bruce's backpack and removing his jacket and shirt, exposing his chest skin. And James takes a big handful of what seems to be some white liquid and is rubbing it on James's chest. I'm assuming that this is some type of serum that's going to unpetrify him or unfreeze him out of whatever state that he's in. And he's just smearing it all over Bruce's exposed skin. And finally, Meek draws attention to what he's doing and tries to get them to fill us in, basically asking the ingredients of whatever serum that is. And we're all thinking it's this like special magic potion lotion solution that's going to fix this entire issue. And James just looks over his shoulder and just laughs and says it's sunscreen. I think he thought that we were going to find that funny as well. But his joke completely flopped and he was forced to get serious and explain what they were actually doing. And he pointed at the fixture above Bruce and he says, "You see that thing up there? That's basically a big magnifying glass. It gathers as much sunlight as it possibly can and it directs all of that sunlight into this small circle." We realize that the people that go missing from the swings always end up in this situation where they're frozen and placed in a random area. Some of them get lucky and they get thawed out over time by the sun, but then they're in a life or death survival situation days after people stop looking for them. And we figured we might as well try to magnify as much sunlight to speed up the thawing process. So we made this, and on really sunny days, this thing only takes about an hour to thaw them out. But looking at today's weather, this one might take 2. But guys, take a breath and relax because we got him here and he's gonna be okay. And even though the sunscreen wasn't a magical antidote, it then became a very considerate act. They were magnifying sunlight onto Bruce's skin and they didn't want him to get sunburned. And we all found that a little bit funny. So we just eagerly surrounded Bruce, watching and waiting for him to start moving to give us any indication that he was gonna be okay. And to be honest, it felt like watching water waiting for it to boil. But eventually we saw his toes just give a little flicker of movement and we saw his pinkies just flapping around a little bit and his eyes were moving this entire time. He was clearly trying to signal to us with his eyes that he was okay. And then once you start to see his tiny appendages moving, the entire morale of the room starts to lift because we all know that he's actually going to be okay. And the finger and toe movements ended up becoming ankle and wrist movements and then slight elbow movements and just twitches of his muscles until eventually his lips started quivering and he was able to start humming. Then it sounded like small broken sentences until finally he was able to talk. He wasn't able to sit up or move his arms fully or his legs fully or even turn his head, but he was able to verbalize himself for the first time since we found him. Part of me was expecting his first words to be filled with terror and questions, but he was surprisingly jolly. The first words that came out of his mouth were, "It was about time, fellas. I was up there for a while." But he said it as if he was joking and he was trying to lighten the mood to make us feel better because he could clearly see the concern on our faces. And I know that his eyes were open this whole time, so he knows how long we carried him for. He was clearly grateful for the effort that we put into rescuing him, and he was doing his absolute best to try to make us feel better and stop worrying about him at this point. And his attitude toward the situation relieved everybody's anxiety levels, and everybody was able to find a little bit of comfort knowing that he was comfortable and he was okay, and he was clearly getting better. So with everybody able to relax for a moment, we were able to start talking and reflecting on everything that happened. And obviously we were curious about what happened from his perspective. And since he was able to talk now, we just simply asked him, "Since you've been gone, what has happened to you?" And he started his story very similar to the way Sam started his, talking about how they were just about to reach the peak of their hike when they came across this swing and he was trying to make Sam Sam feel better and joking about the situation, and he admitted to hopping on the swing, even though Sam was a little bit nervous about it, and he even jokingly said he had the right to be nervous with what happened next. So once we got caught up with the repetitive details, we finally got to what we actually wanted to know. What happened on that swing and what happened after he disappeared? And Bruce said this: on that last backswing, it felt as if something sucked me off of the swing and pulled me into some type of dark wormhole. And it felt as if I was free falling for like 45 minutes. I was just surrounded by this black swirling void, and it felt like I was just falling. And initially you're terrified and you're yelling and you're trying to get any bearings and grab onto something to stop falling. But when the falling just continues and continues, you start to get comfortable in it and you start looking around trying to find any weird details. And after I spent minutes on minutes flailing and screaming my lungs out, I finally was able to compose myself and just kind of fall in peace. And I wasn't able to see anything other than this spiraling black void, other than this one speck of red that just seemed to shoot by me while I was free falling. And it seemed to shoot by me every 5 minutes. So I was able to maneuver myself inside of this free fall to try to get a better look at it while it was coming up from under me. And I would track it with my eyes as I was passing it to try to get a good idea of what it was before I rocketed past it and it was gone for another 5 minutes. And as bizarre as it was, I realized that it was just a random umbrella. And I figured my only chance to get out of this situation was to try to grab onto it, because then at least I would not be free falling, or I would have some type of object that I would then be able to reach and try to find an edge of whatever I was falling through. So after numerous times of flying past this thing and trying to time grabbing it, I was finally able to get my hand on the handle. And the moment I grabbed it, I lost all control of my body and I was frozen in a flailing free fall. But on top of being frozen, the second I grabbed it, it was like I blinked and I was out of this black spiraling void, and I was exactly where you guys found me. But I was only a couple inches above the lake, frozen, holding on to this red umbrella. And I was too far into the water for any of the people on the shore to realize that I was a real person. They were looking at me like I was some kind of spectacle, and I just felt trapped in my own body. And over the course of an hour, it just seemed as if I was raising higher and higher above the lake until I was like 30, 40 feet in the air. And that's when I saw from the corner of my eye you guys show up on the shore. And once I saw the grappling hook fly past my face, I knew that you guys were here to save me. And then you guys know the rest of the story. You guys did it. After Bruce finished recapping what happened to him, he playfully gestured to Henry, who was sitting in the corner of the HQ. James hadn't tied him up or put him in prison. He just left him at HQ. His hands were still bound and his feet were bound and he had the bar in his mouth, but he was just chilling there. Because clearly at this point, you know that James has a little bit of trust for Henry. He wasn't really worried about leaving Henry at HQ. As long as he's bound and he isn't able to do anything bad, James has a bit of rapport with Henry. So Bruce nods over to him and he's like, who's the dude with the bar in his mouth in the corner? Because the only thing that he can do is nod his head, because he doesn't have any control of the rest of his body. So we do our best to explain to Bruce who Henry is and why he's bound in that fashion without freaking him out too much. And we just introduce Bruce to Henry, and we're expecting Henry to politely introduce himself to Bruce as he usually does to everybody that he meets. But Henry just sat in the corner and he was glaring at Bruce, not saying a word. And clearly we don't really even know what Henry is. This might just be what his species does. Maybe he's just taking a break, or maybe he's just very upset with his situation and he's not very talkative when he's captive. So we don't think too much of it, and we just turn our attention back towards Bruce. And once we had told Bruce what Henry was and what we thought he was and what he was capable of, Bruce immediately got so excited and just couldn't stop talking about how much he would love to study Henry's blood. He was going on and on about how fascinating blood types are of different species and how vastly different they are. And with the capabilities that we told him that Henry had, the agility, the telepathy, the extreme durability, Bruce was talking about his blood like it was an absolute gold mine. Because let me remind you, Bruce is a hematologist, and the only reason he was at Banff with Sam was because he was celebrating a breakthrough that he found. And then Bruce started to explain the breakthrough that he had, tying it into the reason that he would want to study Henry's blood. And Bruce said this: I had a patient come in just the other week, and he was telling me that he thought he had something very wrong with him. He had no ailments, and it didn't seem like there was any sickness visually, but you never know what's going on the inside. So I did my due diligence and I drew some of his blood. And when the labs came back, there was something very wrong with his blood. It was nothing like any blood that I have ever seen. It was so robust with ultra-rich hemoglobin. His white blood cells were dominant against all viruses and bacteria. He had antibodies so effective that even when they were injected into somebody else, they had the same effect. An ounce of this man's blood was priceless. It was literally the cure. And the way that Bruce was talking about this was inspiring, but also on the other hand, it was giving mad scientist. When he spoke about this subject in this man's blood, it was with pure obsession. He was speaking as if he didn't care what anybody anybody else was saying. He just couldn't stop talking about it. It was almost as if he was just expressing his innermost feelings about it to anybody that would listen. The excitement in his eyes was inspiring but a little bit scary, and the way that he was talking about what this blood was capable of seemed inhuman. It seemed unnatural, and I could tell that everybody else in the room felt the same way. There was this man laying on this bed who was just saved from this high stress, high tension situation, but it didn't seem like he had a care in the world. Even after everything that he's been through in the past day, the only thing he was able to think about the entire time was this man's blood. And I understand, you could be passionate about your job and what you do, and he's a high-level hematologist, but there was something off about his obsession with this man's blood. And I could tell that Sam felt the same way about it. And I could tell that he just found out some new information that he didn't know. Because to the rest of this group, none of us are in the medical field. When he said, when injected into somebody else, they did the same thing, we didn't really think about it. We just figured he's a doctor, he knows what he's doing. If he injected into somebody else, he probably had a reason to do it. But Sam is in the medical field, so he had some questions. And the number one question was, who did you inject that into? Because apparently that's not common practice. And Bruce excitedly says, while he's still laying like a vegetable on this table, just pretty much speaking to the ceiling, I injected it into myself. He started saying, my intolerances faded first, then my allergies, then my IBS, then my back pain faded and my eyesight improved. And I sent in my blood work and it came back perfect. It was flawless. It fixed everything in my body and I've never felt better, and I've been feeling better and better every day this week. And at this point, his arms and his legs started to twitch a little bit more, and the sunlight that was coming in through the magnifying glass in the ceiling was starting to fade. Nighttime was approaching, and at that point, none of us were questioning him any further. Sam was just looking at him confused, but Bruce just kept talking about how excited he was to get back home and start spreading this cure. He just wouldn't shut up about it. He wouldn't stop saying sentences. He would be saying the same thing in so many different ways about what he's going to do with this blood, talking about the qualities of the blood. It was a mad scientist talking about something that he lost his mind to. And we're all just standing there watching this guy talk crazy and not knowing if what happened to him caused him to go this crazy. When finally Henry speaks up, talking directly into our heads. He said, gentlemen, don't make it obvious that I'm speaking to you, because I'm not speaking to him. I think this man is an abomination. I think the man that came into his office, the man that he drew the blood from, was one of my kind. My kind has been hunted for centuries to harvest our blood, but I can assure you that the consequences outweigh the benefits. If he is what I think he is, I promise you that none of us are safe. Even though Henry warned us to not make it obvious that we were listening to him, by what he was saying, all of us turned our attention towards Henry, because Bruce didn't even know that Henry could speak telepathically, so how would he even get suspicious? But all of us turning our attention towards Henry made us not look at Bruce for a minute or two. And when Henry finished speaking, we turned our attention back towards Bruce, and he's still laying there, still mostly petrified, mostly not able to move, but his face is contorted in the worst smile I have ever seen. When we let Henry out of that door, his smile was horrifying. It went up to his cheekbones, his face was contorted, and it was a thing of nightmares. Bruce's face in this moment was so far beyond what Henry's face was, I was concerned that his skin was going to start to peel over his head, exposing his skull underneath. And Bruce was laying there taking massive deep breaths through his smiling teeth, and with each breath it was as if his muscles were inflating. It seemed as if moment by moment he was growing and putting on mass, and the skin on his face was exposing more and more of his bones underneath. His veins were popping out all over his arms and his legs and his abdominal area, and his body seemed to be twitching and spasming as if it was shaking off the last bit of petrification. But the scariest part was that his head and his jaw and his teeth seemed to be growing as well, and his bones were getting denser and denser. His facial structure was changing second by second. Then Henry started to speak again into our heads, urging us and pleading with us to start to restrain him before he got his motor functions back. And he starts telling us that he's seen this before. He's seen somebody do this. He's saying he's an abomination, that he isn't turning into what Henry is. He's turning into something else. And once he finishes this transition, he doesn't get to go back and forth. Once he becomes that, he's going to be that forever. So even though the trust we had with Henry was really iffy, we still listened to his warnings, and we started to restrain Bruce's arms and legs, and we put a very similar silver bar into his mouth, just in case he turned into what Henry turned into the night before. And when we put that silver bar into Henry's mouth, it stopped him from chomping down. It clearly worked. It clearly had an effect on him. But when we put this thing into Bruce's jaw, he was just snapping on it, just making rhythms with it, as if he was a crocodile trying to show you that he was being aggressive, just making snapping sounds. It didn't didn't have the same effect on him that it did on Henry. So we're sitting in this moment that was just filled with comfort and joy while Henry is pleading with us to do something. Then it becomes an internal argument between all of us about what we're going to do. And there's clearly an underlying tension between the Ranger and James on if we should even trust Henry. But there's clearly something happening here with Bruce that we need to be concerned about. And what's happening to him is very similar to what was happening to Henry. So clearly there's some merit into what Henry's saying. And Henry keeps pleading for us to leave before Bruce can move. But how are we supposed to trust this thing that just attacked us the night before, who's saying that his type of blood is what did this to Bruce? How do you trust that person? So James and the Ranger are just arguing and borderline yelling at each other about what we're going to do next. And Henry screams into all of our heads, "You need to listen to me. If he is able to move, none of us are going to survive." And at this point, Bruce is chomping on the bar in his mouth. He is massive and ripping at the restraints. They are barely holding on, and we're just standing there totally vulnerable, because who knows if Bruce gets out of there, if he'll let Henry out. It's nighttime. Henry's gonna turn into something damn near like him, and who knows what Bruce is capable of. He's still kind of talking, but they've turned into just chaotic mumbles in between his jaw snapping down. And obviously there's an angle here where Sam is concerned for his friend. We just saved his friend, and now we just watched him turn into something horrific. But Sam didn't seem to give so much pushback about leaving. We knew that we didn't have the option here for Meek to take this one down and choke it. He was growing, and he was twice the size of Meek. So in the middle of this chaotic argument between everybody, Henry suggests something very interesting but very risky. He says, "Gentlemen, let me loose." And we turn our attention towards him like, "You better keep talking because you have about 30 seconds before we're about to leave." And Henry continues by saying, "If you try to run now, he will catch you. If you think that I can move fast, you are going to be astonished with how he can move. I've seen one of these things in action. But if you free me and you let me go after him before he's out of his restraints, I might have a chance of killing him. But promise me you guys will flee." And how are we supposed to trust Henry? Just a day before, he tricked Meek and I to let him out of this door and let him loose to go take out anybody that he wanted. So we're in this moral dilemma. Do we trust this charming, rather polite, horrific monster, or do we take our chances and flee by ourselves? And Henry could see the doubt in our face, so he keeps going, and he knows that he only has a couple seconds to convince us. So he says, "Get near the elevator, make sure I'm pointing at him, and the second you take my restraints off, you run for the door. Because if I take him out, I cannot promise you that I'm not going to go after you next. So get as far away from me as possible." And him saying that, him warning us to get away from him because he doesn't trust himself, was enough to win us over. And we decided that that was our best bet, and that's what we're going to have to do. So we all pick Henry up, we bring him towards the elevator door where we could leave efficiently, and we have him pointing directly at Bruce, who's just about out of his restraints. And we were so involved in our game plan and getting Henry to where he needed to be and us as close to the door as possible that we hadn't looked at Bruce in a few seconds. And Bruce's face was completely gone. It turned to all jaw and bone and teeth, and his body was completely unrecognizable. The last bit of sun was going down, and we were looking at a full-fledged killing machine. At this point, we had waited too long, and we had no choice but to flip the coin with Henry. And the last thing Henry said to us was, "Make sure I'm pointing at him when you release me." So that's exactly what we did. We all got onto this makeshift elevator, and since James was the closest with Henry, we allowed him to remove the restraints. And at this point, Bruce was violently shaking. He got his full motor functions back, and he was ready to rip himself off of this table and out of these restraints. So we're ready to start cranking the elevator, and we actually get it going while James is undoing Henry's feet, then his hands, and then his mouth. And the second he took that silver bar out of Henry's mouth, Henry just went after Bruce, but we didn't wait around to see how it went. James jumped on the elevator, we cranked it down as quickly as we could, and we beelined towards the nearest door. And the sounds that were coming from that structure were like two ultra predators shrieking and tearing each other limb from limb. So we sprint to the nearest door and we get right to it. We're about to run through it, but we all look back because we all know that if we see Henry leave that door, we're all okay, because all we have to do is step through that door and he can't come through without being invited. But if we see Bruce come down from that structure, we might need to keep running. So we take that moment and we wait until the horrible shrieks of a vicious fight die down and somebody clearly won. Because if Bruce wins and he comes down, we might need to keep running because he's an abomination and we don't know if he abides by the same rules that Henry does. So it's a much bigger issue if Bruce gets out of that building. So we're standing, waiting, and the entire area has become silent and the fight is clearly over. There is a victor and they're making their way down. And in the distance, we see a figure leap out of the window of this structure and land in the grass 15 feet below with inhuman agility. And he starts backflipping towards towards us. Henry made it out of that building, and now he was coming towards us. But we were right next to the door, which means that we were safe. So all of us, with sadness in our hearts, step through the door and close it, knowing that Henry can't make it through, but knowing that Bruce definitely will never come out of that building. And the second we're through that door, we all start consoling Sam, because he just lost a very good friend of his who thought he was doing something great for humanity. Nothing about Bruce was evil. He really thought that he found a groundbreaking cure, and he thought he was going to help millions of people. Little did he know he was turning himself into an abomination. This was a horrible tragedy, but we still had to cover our bases before we were able to call it a day. The ranger had to take Sam near Banff National Park to make it seem as if him and Bruce got lost and Sam made it out, just to cover the tracks so Sam didn't get pinned with the murder of Bruce. But for Meek and I, this door took us a couple hours away from Illinois. It just dropped us in a random forest in Indiana, so we were only a couple hours away from home. So we said our goodbyes and we gave Sam our condolences, and the ranger told me that he hopes he never sees me again for my sake. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this long series extending the Stairs in the Woods. It was the year anniversary of this story, and we wanted to give you guys a big, massive adventure to celebrate the story that changed our lives. I'd like to share this with you. Today is my birthday, and I'm happy to be recording on my birthday because it means the world to me to share these stories with you. We're celebrating my birthday and 400K subscribers this week, so I just want to say thank you to everybody, and I hope you enjoyed this story, and I hope you continue to enjoy more. So like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next week. We're going to the Smoky Mountains. And if you like this video, YouTube thinks that you would like this one as well. So go ahead and click it and continue your binge.